The man swung his sword 10,000 times every day. He believed he could become a knight among thousands, but soon he faced the greatest blow of his life. He was defeated by a child who had only been learning swordsmanship for 6 months. The child said, "Mister, you're so weak. If someone like you can become a knight, then what's my upper limit?" A man who had swung his sword for 10 years was defeated by a 10-year-old child. I accepted losing to a child, but I felt extremely unwilling, because when I was little, I was also considered a swordsmanship prodigy in the village. By chance, I became the apprentice of a retired mercenary, and I quickly defeated him. The retired mercenary said I was the most talented child he had ever seen, and that I might become a knight in the future. It was because of his words that my dream began from here. A knight is someone who can slay 1,000 enemies with their own strength, turn the tide of battle, and is also a hero of the entire nation. Knights who end wars are called terminal knights. I originally thought I was the protagonist in the bard's songs. Until later, I left the village and joined a mercenary group. Only then did I realize that my little bit of talent might not be worth mentioning at all. Every day I was mocked by the group members. Can't even make it as a free mercenary, yet still dreams of becoming a knight. I didn't argue back, nor did I stand up to defend my dignity. I answered myself in my heart. Giving up after just one failure would be too early. After that, I practiced swordsmanship frantically every day. I always believed in myself. If I lacked talent, then I would invest more time. I wanted to become a knight, even if everyone laughed at me for chasing impossible dreams. If I could put in exponentially more effort than others, sacrificing eating and sleeping time. As long as I kept swinging my sword, swinging and swinging again, wouldn't I get one step closer to my dream? Looking at the sword marks I had carved into the wall, another thought crossed my mind. If I couldn't become a knight, was there a possibility of becoming a seasoned soldier? Though I thought this way, my heart was extremely resistant to the idea. 3 years passed like this, and I became a squad leader of a small unit. The squad I was in was the 4th squad under the 4th small team of the 4th squadron. This morning, I opened my eyes and found it very noisy outside. At that moment, the burly man beside me found a huge bug in his shoe. His rough voice made me feel even more annoyed, so I said, "It's just a bug, what's all the fuss about? My name is Ankrid, and I'm the squad leader of this group of oddballs who caused trouble everywhere and were exiled here. Today we had a tough battle to fight. Although I had reached this point through constant training, I actually felt this should be my limit. But as long as I didn't let go of the sword in my hand, I wouldn't give up on my dream. However, on this day, my nightmare appeared. I was pierced through the throat by his casual strike. I never expected to be so helpless before this person. Gradually, I knelt to the ground and fell silent. My consciousness came to a dark space. I struggled to lift my head. I seemed to see a purple fire burning in front of me. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself lying intact on the bed. I touched my throat and found there was no wound at all. The burly man beside me was once again startled by the bug in his boot. This scene seemed very strange to me, because all these images felt familiar. Soon, I experienced 2 identical battles on the same day, and I was once again pierced through the throat by the enemy soldier. Then came the 3rd time I was pierced through the throat. Then the 4th time. Everything was like a nightmare that couldn't be shaken off. At this moment, I finally understood that I was completely repeating the same day. As long as I couldn't kill the knight on the other side, my life would keep repeating the same day. But this excited me, because I had unlimited chances to die. Couldn't this hone my skills? As expected, I was once again killed by his sword through the throat. This was already the 17th time I had seen his blade. I often wondered, if I worked harder at swinging my sword, if I was faster, could I defeat him? After this death, my consciousness came to this dark space again. Behind me was a woman carrying a lantern and rowing a boat. She asked, "Do you really think this way? You will experience the despair of being unable to overcome high walls in the future." But naturally, I didn't believe her words. There was nothing that couldn't be defeated through effort. Clang, clang, clang. My companions outside the tent were hitting pots and spoons again. As expected, I woke up once more. This was the 18th rebirth. I sat up directly, and the burly man beside me praised me for getting up quite decisively today. I glanced at his boot indifferently and said, "Rem, there's a bug in your boot." Rem looked into his boot with those wise eyes of his. He was so scared that he cursed, and indeed saw a bug inside. The next moment he directly crushed the bug with his foot. He complained, "You must have put this bug in there. How can you play such childish pranks?" I said, "I just happened to see it crawl in." I looked meaningfully at the ground. The twitching little bug on the ground was already the 18th time I had seen its corpse. I didn't know how many more times I would have to see the bug's corpse before I could escape today's loop. After coming out, I turned to Rem and said, "I want to relearn Beast's Heart, please teach me." Rem was stunned. He said, "Captain, you seem a bit different today. Didn't you want to learn before but gave up? Can you really calm down and learn now?" In the afternoon, I once again participated in the melee battle between Aurelia and Asbin. In this battle, I once again lost my life and restarted a new day. Each time after revival, I would ask Rem to teach me Beast's Heart. But until now, I still couldn't face the blade thrusting toward me directly. Until I experienced this battle for the 21st time. I had repeatedly memorized all the dangers on the field. I threw my head back and dodged the flying arrow. Then came the attack from behind. I blocked it with my shield. Then I looked at Belle from another squad. If things continued like this, that captain would definitely die. With a bang, the moment the arrow fell, I immediately came to his side and deflected the attack. After this last target was finished, I turned my gaze to the enemy soldier. In my view, the most troublesome one right now was this soldier. I'd already been pierced through the throat by this guy more than 20 times. So this time I strengthened my resolve. I must survive this battle. Just when that night charged over, I suddenly remembered what Rem had said to me before. You always close your eyes at dangerous moments, but if you do that, you might never improve for the rest of your life. Then he once again swung the axe in his hand toward me. Just as he said, I once again closed my eyes. He told me, if you keep doing this, you'll definitely die on the battlefield. To overcome this isn't actually very difficult. Just be brave, don't get excited easily, and don't panic. Most importantly, you must know what death is, and this is his most important skill, Beast's Heart. At this moment, I suddenly opened my eyes. The swordsman in front once again used his sword to thrust at me. My eyes stared deadly at the sword. If I wanted to dodge this sword, I had to ignore death. I asked myself, was I really afraid of death? The answer I got was negative, because death would only make me stronger. At this moment, I finally dodged his attack. The only time I dodged his attack in more than 20 loops. At this time, my heart was beating wildly. The knight opposite was obviously stunned. I was the first to dodge his attack. This dodge gave me extraordinary progress and confidence. Then I immediately spun my body, wanting to kill the soldier opposite. But what I didn't expect was that the soldier's reaction speed was actually faster than mine. The next second, that cold sword once again pressed against my throat. With a swoosh, I was once again defeated by him. After my body died, my soul saw the ferryman from before. She told me to give up quickly, to board the boat with her and end this endless loop. I didn't answer, but thought about why that soldier's spinning speed was so fast just now. But the more such enemies there were, the more excited I became. So I wouldn't board the boat with the ferryman. Even if I kept looping the same day, I wouldn't give up. I woke up again, hearing Rem's familiar questioning by my ear. But this time, I didn't respond to his words. Instead, I was thinking about how to survive under that soldier's sword. Soon, I died under the soldier's sword more than 10 times again. Finally came the 33rd loop. This time my turn was faster than his. But what I didn't expect was that I once again died under his sword. This guy's speed was simply too fast. Catching up to his speed couldn't be achieved in a day or two. When I fell, the necklace around my neck faintly glowed blue. This made me recall several commissions I received during my mercenary period. That commission was to deal with several monsters. It wasn't a must-take job, because it was just a request I suddenly received when passing through a village. But I still helped them, because my dream was to become a knight, and knights should protect the weak. That poor village had nothing to give me. They gave me a blue necklace, saying it was a protective charm. I stared at it for a long time, but didn't think this thing was a treasure. The village chief said to me earnestly, as a reward for risking your life, this is really insignificant, but this necklace can fulfill your most desired dream. Now thinking about it, it might be because of this pendant's existence that I kept repeating today's loop. The enemy soldier slowly raised the sword in his hand and said, "This is my final mercy to you." I stared at him angrily. Where was his mercy? He had killed me more than 30 times. In my eyes, this soldier was a bloodthirsty killer. With a swoosh, after his sword fell, I once again ended today's loop. Clang, clang, clang. The familiar sound of pot and spoon hitting again. This time when I woke up, I was much calmer. I said to Rem, "I put a bug in your boot." Rem said angrily, "What kind of joke are you playing so early in the morning? Have you finally gone crazy?" I stamped my foot heavily. I said, "Stop dawdling, hurry up and come out to teach me Beast's Heart." Rem started muttering, "Before I told you to learn but you wouldn't. Now when I don't want to teach you, you want to learn." Although he was puzzled, he was still very serious when sparring. This time during practice, I didn't blink, but stared deadly at the axe in his hand. Rem's axe quickly came toward my face, but this time was different from before. I successfully dodged it. Rem was very surprised, thinking, how did this squad leader improve so quickly? After the practice ended, he asked me what I had done to become so much braver. This couldn't be achieved through training alone. But how could he know this was willpower I had honed through death, a feeling learned through dying? I said, "Don't think so much, we still have a battle to fight this afternoon, hurry up and train with me." If I only learned Beast's Heart but didn't learn a one-hit kill sword technique, I might still die. Rem saw that the squad leader was so spirited, so he might as well practice with this captain. For the next 2.5 hours, I kept dodging Rem's attacks. Soon Rem's attacks could no longer hit me, but I was also very exhausted. Rem shouted, "Squad leader, how long are you going to keep dodging? You can't win battles on the battlefield by just avoiding attacks." With a whoosh, Rem's attack was once again dodged by me. My current swordsmanship was simply not enough to contend with Rem. Although I felt somewhat unwilling, I now only knew that one killing move. Then I spread my legs and assumed a stance, waiting for Rem to come in front of me. Rem was startled. How did this squad leader's aura suddenly change? At this time, I unconsciously began imitating that swordsman's attack. I leaned forward and thrust out the sword in my hand, but the sword in my hand was still knocked away by Rem's axe. What shocked me wasn't that the sword was knocked away, but that I had just used that swordsman's thrust. His attack seemed to be carved into my body. I unconsciously used it. I clenched my fist, because I had been killed by that move dozens of times. My body already had muscle memory. Rem scratched his head and said, "You should have bled a little just now. That thrust you just used was the most decent move, but the power still wasn't enough." I understood what he meant. If I had enough power just now, my palm should have bled. Rem transformed into a combat instructor and said, "In other words, your sword just now had other factors in it." My eyes stared deadly at Rem, listening carefully to what he said. Rem continued, "You need one thought, which is that you can't run away this time. Only with such determination can you hurt your opponent." I understood Rem's words. The only flaw when I fought with that swordsman was that my sword lacked confidence. So every time during direct confrontation, I would be killed by his sword through the throat. But I firmly believed that in the next battle, I definitely wouldn't die by his hand. However, unfortunately, when the real decisive battle came, I still died by his hand. After more than 10 loops, I still died under his sword each time. Until the 110th loop, I once again died by the swordsman's hand. Filled with unwillingness, I once again dragged Rem to practice with me, and in this training session, I finally had a breakthrough. Rem stared at the blood spurting from my hand in shock and said, "You guys really have gone a bit crazy." I could see that due to excessive force, a burst of blood had spurted from my palm. But what surprised Rem was that I was actually laughing. I was laughing because I had finally successfully learned this move, until another new loop arrived. I had the big-eyed boy help me find leg armor, as well as shield and short sword. I'd pay him later. The big-eyed boy readily agreed, but he didn't support credit. The money must be given to him within a week. Everyone felt I was a bit off today, but they didn't say anything. Instead, they obediently followed behind me. They felt today's squad leader was somewhat abnormal, with a murderous look on his face, not knowing who he wanted to kill. Accompanied by the collision of shields and swords, a new round of battle began. Although I could completely feel the pain and the agony of each death, I chose not to escape. Even if the guy opposite was an opponent I couldn't beat, even after challenging him tens of millions of times, I still wouldn't choose to escape, because I didn't know what would happen after running away, whether tomorrow would come after waking up. But if that really happened, I couldn't improve every day, and could only be like an ordinary soldier in the mercenary group. So no matter how many loops I experienced, I must defeat the knight opposite, and I also had to climb over the wall behind him. Due to my repeated practice of Beast's Heart and learning the thrust, my confidence grew wildly. After preparing everything, I once again stepped onto the battlefield. It was time to take another step forward. Our side began blowing the horn of war. Standing behind me were all the members of my squad. But one thing worth mentioning is that each of them was a top expert, and I was the weakest one in this squad, but they made me the squad leader. And next I had to lead them to win today's battle. Without any talent, what I relied on to survive on the battlefield was trust and calm composure. I remember in my 46th loop, my left shoulder was smashed to pieces by a guy with a mace. On the 47th today, I dodged the mace attack by rolling, but was still killed by others. So today I eliminated all disadvantages and killed those people in advance. What made me most angry was in my 71st loop, I was slashed in the leg by a guy lying on the ground. With a clang, as I expected, a sharp sword hit my leg, but this time, I wore armor. My body sank heavily downward, and the shield in my hand directly smashed his head. Every scene on the battlefield was imprinted in my mind, and I also used previous memories to save many people. And next was when I had to face this wall. Soon, just as I predicted, the two of us once again stood on opposite sides. This time the swordsman struck first. His attack was still as sharp as before, but I already knew his attack. I immediately held my shield in front. Then I unhesitatingly threw away the shield in my hand, because I couldn't win against him by dodging and thrusting. Although this ordinary soldier in front was very strong, I had already found a breakthrough point. That was this guy's lack of experience. He would easily panic. I took advantage of this gap and directly headbutted his chest. Then I used my foot to kick up a clump of dirt from the ground. Then I kicked it hard at his face, wanting to confuse his vision. And next was when I would make him show an opening. I jumped up pretending to attack him. The swordsman's heart hardened, feeling his counter-attack horn had come. Then he jumped and used a thrust attack on me, but this was within my expectations. I twisted my neck and dodged it. Our two figures crossed at light speed, but the moment our bodies crossed, the swordsman reacted and immediately turned around. I seized the opportunity and directly cut off his sword with one strike. This way his attack would end here. The swordsman's heart was full of disbelief. This was the first time he had ever failed. At this time I had already assumed my stance, ready to give the swordsman a fatal blow. However, just at this moment, an arrow flew from behind me, but this arrow was broken in midair by Rem's axe. At the same time, my battle with the swordsman also came to an end. My sword steadily pierced his neck. This battle took a total of 150 loops, meaning I died by his hand 149 times, and this time I won. I finally killed him. The next moment I swung the sword in my hand and cut off the swordsman's head. This meant that the wall I couldn't break through had been broken by me. Just when I was immersed in joy, I felt someone kick me from behind. The power of that kick directly sent me flying more than 10 meters away. My team members were very shocked to see the scene. Rem sensed something was wrong and immediately came to my side. There was actually a frogman here. A humanoid frog-faced creature was staring at me. Could it be that I encountered a new wall today? I was just kicked by him once, and I felt unbearable pain and couldn't stand up. The frogman said, "He was someone I spent great effort to cultivate, and you actually killed him." I glared at him through gritted teeth. That attack just now had caused me too much damage. With my current strength, even if I looped 1,000 times, I wouldn't be his match. Just when the frogman's attack came, Rem suddenly appeared and blocked the attack. Rem's attacks were very fast. He began counter-attacking in just an instant. Their attacks kept making banging sounds in the air. For a moment they were evenly matched. Taking advantage of this gap, a soldier from the enemy camp picked up a spear wanting to kill me, but he was directly killed by another team member who rushed over from our side. The frogman couldn't take down Rem for a while, so he immediately withdrew and retreated, maintaining distance first. Rem didn't dare be careless. He assumed a stance waiting for the next round of attack. He felt the opponent's strength was very strong, but defeating him would also take some effort. The frogman said puzzledly, "With your level of strength, why do you protect that weak squad leader?" But my mind wasn't on his words at all. Instead, I was thinking about how to kill him with one strike. The frogman's brain spun rapidly. Why would such a remarkable guy appear in such a low-level battle? If he wanted to take Rem's life, he would have to risk his own life first. So in his view, this battle was very unprofitable, because this battle didn't have that much value, so he didn't want to continue fighting and turned to leave the battlefield. Rem felt relieved while also cursing the other party as a coward. He swung his axe down again, directly killing 2 soldiers from the enemy camp. The urgent matter was to take the squad leader away from here. Along this road, these soldiers seemed to have GPS navigation. Their target was surprisingly consistent, but all their attacks were blocked by my team members, who safely escorted me away. But soon we were surrounded again. There were countless enemies. But at this time, the enemy soldier suddenly shouted the retreat command. After hearing this news, I also closed my eyes because I was too tired. I once again came to the dark space. The ferryman said, "Many walls will appear in the future. You absolutely can't get through them. You can only give up after being frustrated. This is your only fate." After hearing the word fate, I slowly got up. I said, "I will absolutely never submit to fate in this lifetime, and the walls you mentioned only exist for me to climb over them." The ferryman said, "Then let's wait and see. I will make those ambitious eyes of yours lose their light." When I woke up again, it was already 2 days later. Rem helped me recall what happened before. He was the one who saved me from the frogman's hands. His words made my wounds ache faintly. So that last one was a frogman? I couldn't see clearly at that time. Rem said, "The doctor said you don't have fractures, but your brain was impacted. Can you still remember that I'm your buddy?" I directly turned my head away and said, "I was never friends with you, noble hunter." But before I could finish my words, Rem's palm directly covered my mouth. He said, "Shut up, how can you casually say such secrets?" Having escaped the curse of the previous 3 months, I finally survived and welcomed the second day. This is my team member Clay's, and it was because of him that I could be arranged in such a good hospital room. If it were before, if I got injured, I could only go to an ordinary nursing home. This is my 4th squad member Jackson. What he's best at is assassination. He handed me an ointment and said, "This is an ointment I use when I get injured. Use it once in the morning and evening. Never tell anyone where you got this thing." Not just the 2 of them, another team member was also in this hospital room. He was Odin. Listening to his chatter, I found it a bit verbose. It would be better to let him go back and rest well first. These people came to visit me one after another today. Were they worried about me? If it were normally, they were used to going their own way and wouldn't come to see me at all. At this time, another blonde boy eating an apple came into my tent. He was Ragnar. He asked me why I was still lying in the medical device. From his words, I felt he didn't care about me at all. This made me laugh involuntarily. I thought he came to care about me. Now, in this medical device besides me, there were 2 other soldiers. Just when I was preparing to rest well, knocking sounds came from my door. The other 2 people also looked over curiously. A young officer with a pair of elf ears. After she came here, she asked who was the captain of squad 444. This startled me. What did she come here to find me for? Was there something wrong? Then I responded that I was the squad leader, Ankrid, of this squad. She praised, "I heard you led the difficult squad members very well. I look forward to your performance." Her words made me very puzzled. Did she come here just to praise me? Just when I thought she was about to leave, she stopped again. The elf captain turned and asked the blonde man behind her, "What's your name?" The blonde man was somewhat at a loss and casually said, "My name is Kron. That's right, I'm called Kron." His name sounded like a made-up name. Could he also be a noble? The elf captain looked at him meaningfully. Then she didn't say much more and turned to leave. The conversation between the 2 made me very speechless. She actually didn't intend to pursue such an obviously fabricated name. With the rising of the sun, a new day was about to come. I clenched my fist tightly. After a moment, I loosened and raised my hand. My body had recovered almost completely. I had strength again. I must hurry up and train. When I was preparing to leave, the mustachioed man behind me said, "Just a low-level soldier. Who are you putting on a show for, going to the training ground so early?" And that man named Kron just stared at me without saying a word. Soon I arrived at the training ground. I began reviewing the last battle. If my final moment's full force thrust failed, then I would die. This all-or-nothing method wasn't suitable for me. If I couldn't loop, I would have died countless times already. If each of my strikes could have deterrence like Rem's, then I could use full force thrusts. Just then a man's voice came. "Really so serious? Have you been standing here all morning?" I don't know when Kron had already stood beside me. He asked me why I was standing here holding a sword in a daze. I looked at the sword in my hand and told him I was reviewing the last battle. This was helpful for my experience. Kron said puzzledly, "Do you as a small soldier need to go to this extent? If you just want to live, then after preserving your life, what do you want to become?" I looked into Kron's eyes for a long time. Actually, I wanted to become a knight, but saying it out loud would invite mockery. This dream had already reached its limit. Before my talent reached its peak, it was completely unreachable. But I had never stopped yearning for that dream. Then I raised the sword in my hand confidently and said, "My dream is to become a knight. As long as I survive, I will definitely become a knight." A breeze passed by. Kron's face seemed to be blown by a touch of autumn coolness in his heart, but this wind also carried warmth. Respect for a small person who wouldn't give up on an unreachable dream. Seeing that Kron didn't speak, I looked over again. This was the first time in all these years I had seen someone who didn't mock me. He was really special. Kron smiled slightly and said, "Sorry, I forgot to mock you just now. I suddenly remembered something." Then he turned around to leave. After seeing me, he knew what to do in the future. His words made me somewhat confused, but I felt this person was somewhat unusual. Before leaving, Kron said to me, "If you become a knight, you must remember my name, my friend." A hint of surprise appeared in my eyes. This was the first time someone had cheered me on. Time passed quickly to the army's morning training time. Some people chatted saying that Cyprus was coming to the military camp. They especially worshipped this Cyprus. The mustachioed man also also got up, but he hadn't received the punctual breakfast delivery yet, so he cursed loudly. After training, I didn't go to the training ground again, but casually took a walk. During this time, I saw Jackson. I thanked him for the medicine he gave me yesterday. He wiped his pointed knife and said, "You don't need to say thanks, returning to the team early is what we want to see." Soon it was evening. Kron and I said goodnight to each other. The room was particularly quiet, because there were only 3 of us in this tent. When I woke up the next day, my head felt a bit heavy. The people outside were still talking about Cyprus coming to the military camp soon. The mustachioed man also cursed as usual about why breakfast hadn't been delivered yet. This familiarity made me feel extremely shocked, because I had experienced these yesterday too. This made my heart pound. What was going on? Then I came outside the tent like yesterday, and met Jackson again. To verify my suspicion, I said to him, "Thank you, your medicine is really good." He repeated yesterday's words, "You don't need to say thanks, returning to the team early is what we hope to see." But his words shocked me to the extreme. It was indeed as I suspected. I remembered the ferryman's words from before. There will be walls blocking your steps ahead. You will eventually board the boat with me in despair. So I concluded that I was killed last night. I didn't even notice how I died. Compared to that thrusting soldier, this time I felt utterly powerless. My mood was terrible. Although somewhat dejected, I didn't give up, because only this way could there be the joy of climbing over walls. It was also time to challenge again, new enemies, new special moves. In a blink of an eye, time passed and it was evening again. I lay in bed pondering who had killed me. If it were enemy forces, they would have had to break through all the defenses to charge in here. At the very least, it would take someone of knight-level skill. I widened my eyes, having a suspicion in my mind. This was definitely a premeditated assassination ambush, and the assassin was most likely an insider. I suspected that the person who assassinated me was the elf captain who came to the tent this morning, because elves moved both quietly and swiftly, making them perfect for assassination work. If that were truly the case, then I was in serious trouble, because I was no match for her at all. Moreover, her inexplicable visit to the tent today was definitely to scout the location in advance. So I turned my gaze toward the tent flap at the entrance. I had to witness with my own eyes whoever I would see later. When the time came, I would just need to shout "assassin" and wake up the surrounding soldiers. As long as I could see the person, then this incident wouldn't be too much of a crisis. With a soft thud, a poison needle pierced my neck. This poison needle paralyzed my entire body, making it impossible for my body and throat to make any sound. It seemed this was a paralysis poison needle, so this was the cause of my death, and I saw that squad leader Bensaji was also dead. I struggled to lift my eyelids and saw a cloaked figure standing before Kron. That person must have killed the 2 of us first, then killed Kron. With another soft thud, just as I had guessed, a cold blade pierced straight through Kron's throat. At the same time, another cloaked figure walked in. When I saw that cloaked figure, I stared in shock with wide eyes. That person had long ears, and carried special weapons that didn't belong to the human race. And this person was the elf captain of the 4th squad. When I revived the next day, I pondered deeply. Last night I had been very vigilant, yet I couldn't detect any movement. This hell-level dungeon was too difficult for me. Even if I could withstand the assassin's attack on me, I would still be unable to defeat the captain in subsequent combat. This deep sense of powerlessness enveloped my entire body. I had experienced this damned feeling just a few days ago as well. That existence that once haunted me like a nightmare. However, the difference was that I was still the one who won in the end, though it cost me hundreds of times the effort. So facing this enemy, I still had no intention of giving up. There would always be a way to solve this. Then I directly pulled off Mustachioed Man's blanket and told him to get up quickly. I felt the enemy must have ambushed inside the tent in advance, but after patrolling all around, I didn't see any trace of the enemy. Since that was the case, then the enemy must have launched a surprise attack from outside. After being woken up by me, Mustachioed Man said displeasedly, "What use is training for a low-ranking soldier like you? I bet your limit is just a squad leader." I couldn't be bothered to waste words with him. With someone who held such resentment about life, I had nothing to chat about. At this moment, Kron walked in. He saw that we were arguing again. He said apologetically, "How about I come back after you 2 finish arguing?" I told him to come in. Mustachioed Man and I had finished arguing. Then I observed Kron with the corner of my eye. The assassins had specifically confirmed something back then, so those assassins were definitely targeting Kron. So I became curious about Kron. What exactly was his background? If Kron didn't bring it up himself, I generally wouldn't insist on asking about their origins, just like how I treated my squad members. Although they acted like lunatics, I never asked about their backgrounds. But this time, because Kron had dragged me into an assassination, I couldn't ignore him like before. So I directly asked, "What exactly is your background?" Kron was somewhat speechless, saying, "Is this how you ask questions, directly inquiring about someone's background?" I also felt this was somewhat inappropriate. Asking this way was indeed too direct. It seemed my communication skills really weren't good. Sure enough, as I had guessed, Kron didn't reveal his background, but this time was different. I had to get to the bottom of this. Otherwise, I couldn't solve this matter at all. Kron told me not to ask him anymore, because the situation was very complex and he couldn't say more. Seeing Kron's very firm attitude, I could only stop questioning. But Mustachioed Man behind me said anxiously, "You two keep talking. You've gotten my curiosity all worked up." since Kron was impolite and didn't look like someone from this country. Mustachioed Man thought he might be an enemy spy. Hearing this, Kron glared fiercely at Mustachioed Man, showing an imposing expression he shouldn't have had. Mustachioed Man was startled and became somewhat afraid. It seemed this Kron was no small character either. Kron slowly walked in front of Mustachioed Man. His expression was extremely serious as he said with conviction, "I would absolutely never betray the kingdom." From Kron's eyes and his actions, I sensed something extraordinary. That knight-like dignity actually overlapped on Kron's body. Mustachioed Man cursed angrily, "Did you just act disrespectfully toward your superior?" Kron smiled and said to him, "I was merely reporting to you with no other meaning." I didn't think Kron was a knight. After all, like me, he was helplessly killed by the assassin. But I felt he might have origins comparable to a knight's, very possibly a prince or similar figure. Soon it was time for us to sleep. I bid goodnight to both of them. Mustachioed Man was exceptionally well behaved today, probably scared by Kron's imposing manner. Then I glanced again at the tent flap at the entrance. If the assassin burst in right away, all three of us would die. Thinking this, I couldn't sleep at all, so I got up directly. Mustachioed Man asked puzzledly, "What are you wandering around for in the middle of the night instead of sleeping properly?" I told him the assassin is about to arrive. "If you want to live, help me," Mustachioed Man said with a blank face. "What exactly are you talking about?" Then he didn't take this matter to heart at all and turned over to sleep directly. Kron, lying in bed at the moment, also wasn't asleep. Hearing us bicker, he thought I was joking. I looked at both their reactions. Their responses were all within my expectations. But just then, I heard a terrifying voice, "How exactly did you discover me?" However, when I came to my senses, I had already been pierced through the throat. I really wanted to know how he had managed to do it. After hearing the voice, I had placed my hand over my weapon, but before I could even touch it, he killed me. The assassin moved with lightning speed, killing Mustachioed Man with one swift throw of his blade. Then with one leap, he drew the sword from his waist and killed Kron as well. This speed was so fast it was horrifying. When I revived the next day, I thought, without convincing evidence that an assassin would come, and no way to get help from Benzaji and Kron, there was probably no way to get support by reporting to superiors either. So I planned to ambush the assassin by timing his appearance, shouting out before he could act. Just then, rustling sounds came from the door curtain. I knew the moment had arrived. I had to shout out right now. However, the moment I opened my mouth and said one word, a sharp sword pierced through my throat. At this moment, my body hadn't even fallen, but the assassin's body had already swiftly approached the other two. On the fifth loop, I gave up seeking external help and prepared to launch a surprise attack at the specific time. But just as I was thinking of countermeasures, I was once again silently assassinated. On the sixth revival, I heightened my vigilance, not even blinking my eyes. However, I failed again this time. As long as I couldn't avoid that person's poison needle, no matter how I resisted, I had no chance of winning. Even after the 20th revival, the situation still showed no improvement. The deep sense of powerlessness made me scratch my head, unable to think of new countermeasures. But the next moment I laughed. I had only died 19 times. Compared to dying over 100 times before defeating the swordsman, this was nothing at all. I began targeting my objective. First, I had to focus on how to avoid the poison needle, then how to fight the opponent. And in my squad, there happened to be an expert in this type of combat. This person was Jackson, who was very skilled at assassination. Rem once asked me why I called Jackson the sneaky wildcat. I said Jackson was very formidable. If it came to dirty tricks, probably no one could match him. He rarely engaged in direct confrontation, always preferring to circle behind opponents, stab them, and run. Seeing my arrival, Jackson asked puzzledly, "Is there something you need from me?" I thought to myself, if I brought this guy along, I should be able to easily defeat the assassin. But as a squad leader, I had no authority to take him with me. Even if I could possibly take him, I wouldn't, because scaling high walls had to be done by myself. Others couldn't help me, so I planned to seek Jackson's advice. I asked him, "If someone like you stabbed me from behind, how should I defend against it?" Jackson thought seriously for a moment. He said, "I don't know how to defend against it either, because among the enemies I've assassinated, I've never seen any survivors." His words shocked me immensely. Was this the confidence that came from being strong? However, Jackson still gave me a decent answer. "If you want to avoid assassination from people like us, you just need to grow a pair of eyes on the back of your head." His words left me speechless. How could a person possibly grow 2 more eyes on the back of their head? So I asked him what exactly I should do to grow a pair of eyes on the back of my head. He pointed to the handcart behind the camp. I was amazed. From such a far distance, he saw it without turning his head. "Could he really have eyes on the back of his head?" Jackson said matter-of-factly. "That handcart is going to break." Sure enough, after he finished speaking, that handcart really did break. And this was Jackson's method. Very terrifying, sending chills down one's spine. These operations completely overturned my worldview. How exactly had he done it? Jackson didn't keep me in suspense either, telling me his secret straightforwardly. He pointed to his own ears. The reason he could predict the cart would break was because his ears heard it. Jackson heard the abnormal sound of the wheel joint shaking. As long as you hear it in advance, you can predict what will happen next. I hadn't expected Jackson's ears to be so sensitive. I hadn't even heard the handcart sound. Jackson stood up and said, "You can try listening to all the sounds around you, nimbly capturing sounds." I laughed. "You answered quite thoroughly today. You usually seem somewhat impatient." Jackson indicated that he was indeed quite annoyed, but compared to being constantly questioned, explaining everything at once would be better, because he felt that recently I seemed abnormally persistent about certain things. If I didn't get answers, I would absolutely never give up. That night, I lay in bed thinking again. This was the second wall I had encountered, and this time was even more difficult than the last, because this time I couldn't see the enemy at all, yet it could also be said to be very simple. If being able to see the enemy meant I could survive, then I just needed to improve my ear sensitivity. My hearing gradually extended outward, and I heard regular footsteps. Those were the patrol soldiers. Beside the patrol soldiers, I heard the crackling sound of burning. That was the campfire. At the same time, outside the tent, as I was sensing the surrounding sounds, the assassin's presence quietly descended. With a soft pat, the assassin's presence landed on the ground. But that sound was extremely light. I couldn't hear it at all. Just as I was still thinking about where the assassin's sound was, the assassin's figure outside disappeared. What followed was a sharp pain in my throat. Then I couldn't make any sound. When I revived the next day, I sat on the bed pondering again. It seemed I had failed again last night. So far, there hadn't been the slightest breakthrough, so I found Jackson again. He told me that just by listening, I could obtain a lot of information. By relying on the direction and intensity of sounds, I could master positions. If I could clearly hear faint sounds from far away, then my ears would be no different from eyes. At this moment, Jackson's finger slid lightly, creating friction sounds in the air. He told me that sound was vibration. No matter how quiet this vibration was, it resonated everywhere. As long as I could pick it out from hundreds and thousands of vibrations, then all problems would be solved. After listening to Jackson's explanation, I came to a place with many people and began capturing the sounds I could hear. Among these interwoven vibrations would be many sounds. I had to pick them out individually. For instance, I could hear the sound of flags, but if there were dozens of flags here, then I couldn't distinguish them. There were also soldiers not far away. From right to left, nearby were 3 soldiers, while far away were the footsteps of 2 soldiers. I had to calm my mind and feel all these sound vibrations. There were also unfamiliar sounds, like the sound of bird wings and leaves falling to the ground. At this moment, Kron came before me and said, "Anchi, what are you training this time?" I said, "I'm not called Anchi, I'm called Ankrid." However, Kron didn't seem to care what I was called. He just felt the name Anchi suited me well. I sighed and couldn't be bothered to argue, saying, "If you want to call me that, then call me Anchi. I'm just sitting here foolishly. Why would you think I'm training?" Kron chuckled and said, "You don't seem like someone who would foolishly waste time." It seemed this Kron understood me quite well. I was quite curious about his background. At night, I was assassinated by the poison needle again. The next day was the same. I was assassinated by him before I even saw the assassin's figure. Every time before dying, I could clearly see Kron's expression when he was assassinated. This was already the 33rd failure. I was getting anxious. The opponent was too fast, I couldn't see clearly at all, and the 34th loop was about to begin. The assassin's figure quietly descended. The moment the assassin's figure descended, I indeed couldn't hear any sound, so I continued looping in failure. Now I was no longer as impatient as before, but continuously improved my hearing. Because I understood one principle: scaling high walls didn't require opportunity, enlightenment, or help. Only by doing the purest things could I improve my strength and defeat the assassin. So I began endless cycles, every day experiencing the same day doing the same things. At this moment, I suddenly opened my eyes during my cultivation. In front of me was Kron. My expression startled him greatly. He said, "I approached you quietly. How did you know and suddenly open your eyes? Could it be your training to sense movement?" It was precisely Kron's arrival today that made me understand the time had come. My training had improved by a level. At night, the assassin once again threw the poison needle in his hand, but this time, his assassination was dodged by me. This was an experience I'd never had in the previous dozens of attempts. I quickly drew the sword from under my pillow. Before the assassin could react, I slashed horizontally at him. The assassin was startled by my movement and instantly fell to the ground. This was completely unexpected for him. The assassin's face showed panic. This was his first failure. I chuckled, showing a gentle smile on my face. "After being assassinated so many times, I finally caught you." After seeing himself exposed, the assassin immediately drew the sword from his waist and swung it at me. But this sword didn't do much damage to me. I easily dodged it. He was indeed slightly inferior to that sword soldier, but he was still an expert. However, I could completely handle him. Then I looked toward the other 2 people. Bensuji was already lying in bed without any movement, and Kron had already reacted at this moment, immediately drawing his sword to join the battle. At this point, the assassin had become desperate. He used his speed advantage to quickly break through my defensive line. Then he flicked his hand, and another sharp blade flew from his sleeve toward me. The moment I saw the dagger, I immediately sensed danger and quickly bent down to block, but my chest was still cut. However, this pushed my body balance to its limit. What made me even more afraid was that there was actually movement at the entrance at this moment. Looking closely, that person was actually the elf captain. After seeing her, the killing intent in my heart became even stronger. If I didn't take her down first, I would probably die. At this moment, the assassin shouted, "You actually have guards." Then he used all his hidden weapons. These hidden weapons had a very wide range. Part of them flew toward Kron, another part flew toward me. I thought to myself this was bad. It seemed I would die here again tonight. But just then I was stepped on by the elf captain. The elf captain's cloak blocked all the attacks, and her figure had already reached Kron's front, protecting his safety. I was shocked. I thought she was on the same side as the assassin, but she had come to protect us. However, the most important thing right now was to deal with the assassin. I jumped up and used the sword thrust technique. Although I only had a dagger in my hand, it was enough. The assassin's face was extremely panicked. He was so scared he didn't blink, having to see clearly the direction of my attack. With a clang, my attack was indeed seen clearly by him and blocked. The assassin cursed under his breath, "Damn it!" Then he turned around and fled without looking back, and I didn't pursue. I knew the principle of not chasing a desperate enemy. Kron stepped forward and said, "That assassin just now should have been targeting me." I responded, "I know." Kron's face showed slight surprise as he said, "How did you know?" I snorted coldly and said, "Who would send an assassin to kill me or Bensuji, these bottom-tier soldiers?" The elf captain praised, "Although you're just a squad leader, your insight is very strong." I looked at the blade in the elf's hand. She was making a drawing motion. Although we had just been allies, was she worried that if today's event spread, the situation would become troublesome? It seemed my guess was correct. She wanted to silence us. Seeing the scene, I also gripped the blade in my hand tightly. As long as she moved, I would make a big commotion out of this. At this moment, Kron said to the elf captain, "I don't want to see anyone else die. Do you understand?" Kron's eyes held immense authority, seeming to carry an undeniable tone. The elf captain respectfully bowed and said, "Then as you wish." I was shocked. Someone as formidable as the elf captain actually submitted to Kron. What kind of character was Kron exactly? Then Kron looked toward Bensuji on the bed. He seemed to be only paralyzed, still alive. After arranging everything properly, the next step was to clean up here. If word of the assassin's visit spread, the situation would become somewhat troublesome. Then I said to them, "I have a rather crude but simple method." A moment later, a great fire directly burned down the entire camp. Everyone was frantically fighting the fire. "Hurry, or the fire will spread to the entire military camp." And I pretended to be a survivor, carrying Bensuji as I escaped. This way, the assassin's traces disappeared, which was safest for Kron. I looked toward the great fire nearby. Tomorrow should arrive normally. At the same time, in another part of the forest, the elf captain escorted Kron away from here, saying, "If that squad leader hadn't bought time, you might already be dead. Did you change your mind because of him?" Kron nodded and said, "Don't you think he's quite interesting? He's been avoiding certain things. It was precisely because of his contact with me that his thinking changed. And gee, perhaps I've been influenced by you too, especially those eyes of yours. It won't be long before we meet again." Kron felt some anticipation in his heart. At the same time, in the dark space, a death god's scythe stood there. But in just a moment, that scythe had already turned to dust, meaning he would no longer appear. Not far in front of me, the ferryman said softly, "We will meet again." I snorted coldly and said, "No matter how many times we meet, I'll keep you company to the end." After escaping silent death, I welcomed the dawn of the next day. Now I could clearly sense ordinary movements, but I still couldn't sense the movements of elves. I needed to do more sensory training. I was somewhat thankful that I hadn't been too badly injured in yesterday's battle with the assassin. Otherwise, there would be no return date. At this moment, Bensuji said with disgust, "Why did you save me?" His tone made me very displeased. I said, "What's with your confrontational attitude?" Then I spoke my true feelings. We're comrades, no other reason needed. This made Bensuji somewhat embarrassed. Why so sentimental all of a sudden? I'd given him a hard time many times before. He really was a brainless guy. Then he called out to stop me, saying, "Are you returning to the squad now?" I nodded and said, "If you have nothing else, I'll go back now." He told me to wait, saying, "Going back now would be absolutely terrible. Your luck is too bad, because there are rumors that the entire position has been cursed." At the same time, Ragnar stared ahead with a fierce expression, and standing in front of him was Rem. These two seemed to be having a conflict. Rem said with a cheerful face, "You little brat, do you want to fight me?" However, this scene left the people nearby dumbfounded. If they started fighting, innocent bystanders might get caught up in it. At this moment, Ragnar had already been lifted into the air by Rem. With a crash, Rem heavily slammed Ragnar's body onto the tent. Ragnar immediately got up and quickly threw a punch at Rem's face. However, Rem's fist was faster, hitting Ragnar's face before Ragnar's punch could land. Rem decided to crack Ragnar's head open with his axe. Ragnar wasn't to be outdone either, immediately drawing the sword from his waist, preparing to fight to the death. I sighed deeply. Although I didn't know what the position's curse was, I felt these two were other people's curse. However, these two were also smart. Even when fighting, they did it in front of other people's tents, not damaging their own things. Then I told them to stop. Whenever I wasn't here, the entire squad seemed to be in chaos. Time passed, and 3 days later arrived. I'd been back with the squad for the third day. Just then, I heard a sound and suddenly opened my eyes. Jackson was passing by me. He said, "I tried to be as quiet as possible, but I still woke you up." I told him not to worry about it. I was about to get up and exercise anyway. Jackson said with some surprise, "You've only been learning for a few days and your ears are already this sensitive. You must keep practicing. This will be very helpful for your future." Then he left. Soon this place would welcome winter, and there would be much less fighting on the battlefield. Thanks to this winter, I now had plenty of free time to start training. The current season was more suitable for intensive training than any other time. When I finished exercising and was preparing to return, a rock greeted me. Under this rock was Odin doing push-ups. He said, "Squad leader, are you coming back from morning practice? You're really diligent." With a rumble, he directly threw off the giant stone on his back. As Odin slowly stood up, his shadow had already covered me. He said to me, "Train your body well. At least you need to be able to withstand kicks from no accounts like Frogman. You're still too thin and weak. You need more training. At least have a physique like mine." I said, "I'll definitely work hard," but I thought I could never train to have his physique, not even in dreams. Just as Odin and I were chatting, fighting sounds came from the tent behind us. It turned out Rem couldn't stand Ragnar and started fighting with him. "Today was clearly your shift, but you were lying here sleeping, you lazy bum." Ragnar didn't say much, but groggily reached for his sword. Then he stared angrily at Rem and said, "If I don't kill you, I'm not Ragnar." Rem never feared fighting. He picked up his axe and charged forward. At this moment, Odin and I walked in saying, "Both of you stop. Why do you fight every day?" Odin held up his token and began praying again. "Violence is ignorance and cannot solve any problems. I hope God can reduce their violence." Rem pointed to Ragnar nearby and said, "This kid deliberately wants to starve us to death." Then I ordered Ragnar to go on duty and asked him to handle lunch. Ragnar readily agreed. Rem handed his towel to Ragnar saying, Since you can cook, why didn't you go before? Ragnar slapped Rem's hand away and said, take your dirty hands away, they stink. For this, Rem specifically sniffed and said, there's no bad smell, it actually smells quite nice. I said to Rem, don't pick fights over every little dissatisfaction. Are you doing this because you're bored? Rem laughed. Didn't expect you to figure it out. Haven't been on the battlefield in a long time, my hands are getting itchy. Hearing his words, I told him to come out and spar with me one-on-one instead of troubling others. But after just a quarter hour, I was being beaten down by Rem. Rem smiled calmly and said, squad leader, why is your strength so weak? You're too fragile. Then he casually waved his hand and directly knocked my sword flying. I continuously used the beast's heart to maintain my composure, because only this way could I keep taking Rem's attacks. Then I used sensitive hearing to capture attack trajectories for defense, and finally used the sword thrust I learned through 100 deaths to deliver a killing blow to Rem. But unfortunately, no matter how I attacked, I could never hit him. This made me curse, you bastard are strong like a madman. With a crash, I was directly pressed heavily to the ground by Rem's single hand. Rem felt I seemed to have gotten considerably stronger recently without realizing it. He was quite looking forward to it now, but this anticipation didn't last long, because he discovered I only had those same few moves. He said, I'm already tired of seeing sword thrusts. Don't you have anything else? Actually, I was also clear about what Rem was saying, but I really only knew these few moves. However, I was different from my previous self. Even if I failed thousands of times, I could still move forward. I told Rem to keep coming. This time I would definitely defeat him. However, my strength was simply pathetic in Rem's eyes. But when he saw my eyes, he felt there was another meaning to them. The corner of his mouth slightly curved up. He didn't know why this eye was so captivating. Then Rem said, talk about defeating me after you can actually touch me, you boastful squad leader. Just as we were preparing to continue fighting, it started raining heavily. This forced us to stop the duel and prepare to go into the tent to wait for the rain to stop. At the same time, there were other people in the tent too. All squad members were resting here. Even the big-eyed boy came to the tent. With today's rain, his business was indeed much less. He shook the water off his head and said, weather like this could be called a curse. After hearing about the curse, I remembered that Bensuji had also mentioned a curse to me before. If I remember correctly, Bensuji had said the entire position was cursed. Anyway, recently there had been strange incidents one after another. The weather was also very odd, injured soldiers were increasing, and there had been fires. If this continued, morale might completely collapse. However, I felt the higher-ups definitely wouldn't want such rumors spreading in the camp. I guessed it would be dealt with soon. At this moment, the big-eyed boy finally asked curiously, why do you keep standing at the entrance? I told him I was doing sensory training, and this weather was just right for me. This made Rem say displeasedly, just like Jackson, really unlucky. Jackson, however, thought this training method was very good. At this moment, Rem finally noticed something was wrong, saying, you didn't teach the squad leader something, did you? Why are you so concerned about the squad leader? Their argument made my ears buzz and I could barely hear the rain outside. At this moment, Odin said, if you're looking for training methods you can do in the tent, you can do many kinds of training while sitting. Ragnar also said, it's been a while since I helped you check your sword-holding posture. Want me to take a look? Hearing these two's words, Rem looked at them both puzzledly and said, looks like you two saw the same thing I did, just like me. All of them had seen my changes during this period. In this stormy military camp, several captains were meeting in a tent. Before winter arrives, we need to send out a reconnaissance team one more time. Are there any soldiers who can fill the numbers? The elf captain suggested, how about squad 444? The captain said, that's the small fry squad, isn't it? Their captain is a bit foolish. What if he holds us back? But the elf captain said, maybe that squad leader can bring us unexpected surprises. I begged the captain to send squad 444. This is an elf's intuition. The next day, I was called in for a talk by the elf leader. When I learned I was being transferred to the reconnaissance team, I was actually somewhat dissatisfied because I preferred combat. But her order came down like a mountain, making it impossible for me to refuse. After returning, the big-eyed boy thought I had caught the squadron leader's attention. Otherwise, why would she specifically pick me to be a scout? I suspected it might be because of Kron's departure. This inscrutable elf captain wouldn't turn around and try to kill me, would she? However, orders were hard to disobey, and I had to go even if I didn't want to. At this moment, Rem took out his axe and said, if you don't want it to go, you just need to say one word. I said, forget it, don't cause me any more trouble. If you do this, it will only create bigger problems. At this time, Odin started praying again. I hope the great god won't make things difficult for the squad leader. Please don't take the frail squad leader away. At this moment, Ragnar suddenly stood up. He indicated that he could replace the squad leader for reconnaissance. As a result, everyone started refuting him. Others can go, but you absolutely cannot. You're such a direction-blind person. Don't you have any self-awareness? At this time, Jackson behind me calmly said, I heard the reconnaissance area is the tall grass prairie. When you hear sounds different from usual in the grass, you need to concentrate, because perceiving anomalies is the foundation for responding to enemy sneak attacks. Rem said dissatisfiedly, don't teach the squad leader all sorts of random things. It will make him develop bad habits. I sighed deeply. If I went now, there'd be no one in the team to stop them from arguing, but in my opinion, I was indeed the most suitable candidate. After I joined the team, because my strength wasn't strong, I was ordered around and had no clear position. Later I found something of value I could do. That was taking on the position of squad leader of the small fry squad that everyone avoided. I said to them, that's enough. If you keep fighting, even the tent will be destroyed by you. Rem didn't know whether I was ignorant or brave, rushing to intervene in that scene just now. Jackson said, Rem, Thank the squad leader properly, otherwise I would have pierced your heart long ago. Rem wasn't afraid of Jackson's intimidation and said just now, if it weren't for the squad leader stopping me, I would have chopped off your head long ago. Hearing their conversation, I was certain I should go to the reconnaissance team even more, because these guys were really too powerful. It didn't matter whether I was in the team or not, but they absolutely couldn't be missing, so I didn't hesitate anymore, and went directly to the reconnaissance team. The reconnaissance team's mission was to investigate the frontmost situation, so it was a good opportunity to train perception while being vigilant against enemies. Seeing me training, the newly appointed reconnaissance squad leader Andrew Garneau said dissatisfiedly, "What exactly are you doing? Although your position is also squad leader, I'm the captain of the reconnaissance team. If you want to protest, you'll have to beat me with your strength." The person behind echoed, "How could he possibly dare to fight you? I bet this guy doesn't even know how to hold a sword." The reconnaissance team captain laughed, "You're nothing but trash." And then he didn't bother with me anymore. Then he told everyone to be alert, and when they saw the enemy, they must blow off all their heads. This captain was really noisy. Didn't he know what reconnaissance meant? He had no idea about the reconnaissance team's responsibilities. At this time, someone discovered footprints on the ground. Everyone immediately became tense. These should be wildebeest footprints. The captain laughed. "Today we'll follow these footprints, and we'll definitely have barbecue tonight." I was somewhat speechless. Had the captain lost his mind? Looking at the footprints, there were at least 20 wildebeest. With so few of us, we still wanted to catch them. At this time, the person beside me said dissatisfiedly, "These don't seem like wildebeest footprints, these are gazelle footprints." He looked at me awkwardly and said, "Don't you also think this captain is being ridiculous?" He was Henry, a hunter from the village. He didn't like this captain much, so he became familiar with me. Along the way, Henry told me a lot of common knowledge. When night came, the captain cursed loudly, searched all day and didn't find a single sheep. What a waste of time. He was already scratching his head in frustration, thinking that no matter what, he had to bring back some results. The next day, our group finally arrived at the final destination. Looking around, there were only mountains and grass. This was the tall grass prairie. We needed to cross this tall grass prairie and find the enemy Asbin's reconnaissance team, then capture several of them alive as prisoners and earn merit. Henry hesitantly said, "Are we really going in? Our mission this time is to survey the terrain." Although I didn't want to go in either, this was the captain's order, and we had no choice. Then our group went deeper inside. Crossing such a large tall grass prairie wasn't an easy task. Actually, I thought they would give up soon, which was why I followed along. I didn't expect him to have no complaints at all. After walking around, Henry felt something was wrong because he hadn't found any animal droppings. This prairie was like a huge granary. It was impossible for there to be no animal droppings. Just then, I heard the heavy sound of a wild beast's claws landing. This made my heart immediately tense. A wild leopard suddenly ran out from the grass nearby and was rapidly fleeing. In that split second, I made eye contact with that wild leopard. I immediately came to the captain's front and told him to get down quickly because I sensed an ambush around us. Sure enough, just as I finished speaking, 2 teammates had their heads blown off by arrows. The captain said, "This is bad. I didn't expect there to be enemy troops here. Could these guys have ambushed here earlier than us, waiting for us to fall into the trap together?" The captain ordered everyone to flee immediately. If we got surrounded, it would be troublesome. But while running, the captain was actually captured by others. I heard a squelching sound, the sound of a blade piercing flesh entering my ears. They seemed to have been killed. Now only 3 people remained, already surrounded by dozens of people. I used the perception that Jackson taught me to continuously dodge arrows, but unfortunately I was now among thousands. No matter how powerful the perception, it absolutely couldn't dodge a sure-hit attack. I saw dozens of arrows coming at me from behind. With a squelching sound, those arrows directly pierced through my chest, and my reincarnation for today ended here. When I opened my eyes again, I told the captain not to go inside and to observe the terrain from the perimeter first, but he didn't listen to me at all, saying if I talked nonsense again he would kill me. So I was surrounded by enemy troops once again. This time I chose a different route, but I still couldn't escape the fate of being killed, so I restarted the loop. Although I was killed again, it didn't matter. I could just start over. This time when fleeing east, I was discovered by a unit of over 20 people and died under their barrage of arrows. A new round of loop started again. After avoiding the unit and fleeing north, I was surrounded and killed by a spear unit. But in this round of loop, I made a new discovery. In this tall grass prairie, as long as I entered, I never came out alive. I suspected they were hiding something. This time I was stabbed to death again, which made me more certain that there was some unspeakable secret inside. In the new round of loop, the squad leader said excitedly, "We just need to cross this prairie, find Asbin's reconnaissance team, and capture a few live prisoners to earn merit." But he didn't know I had already tried dozens of times, and not once did I come out alive. So those Asbin guys must be hiding some unknown secret. I had to figure it out. If I gave up now, I might not die, but instead welcome the arrival of a new day tomorrow. But this wasn't what I wanted. I wasn't someone who would retreat when seeing a wall. The captain said to me dissatisfiedly, "What are you dawdling about?" The big guy next to me also came to dissuade me. "I know you don't like him, but enough is enough. He has his difficulties too." But I didn't give him a good face and said, "Don't you get tired of praising him to the skies every day?" The man was very angry and even thought his ears had heard wrong. I pushed that person away and indicated that I wouldn't be manipulated by them anymore. The captain was somewhat nervous and could only use his authority to pressure me, saying, "Are you trying to disobey orders. I had no intention of resisting military orders, and I didn't dare to, but taking a captain's position shouldn't be a problem, right? I wanted all the team members here to demonstrate their abilities and survive together. The captain was extremely angry and said, "This is really too contemptuous." Then the captain drew his sword and said, "If you can beat me, then everything will be up to you." When I saw the captain's sword-holding posture, I also showed a serious expression. He should be the type who had learned but wasn't proficient, probably some nobleman. But if he was a nobleman, he wouldn't need to be so eager to achieve merit, would he? Could he be a fallen nobleman? The captain said, "Looking at your trash-like strength and mismatched position, you must be a waste who never trains." The captain felt he was different from others. He had a mission that must be completed. I felt he was a bit long-winded. I beckoned to him and said, "Come on, I can beat you with just my bare hands." My words directly enraged the captain, and he charged at me with his sword. If it were before, the battle between him and me might have been a hard fight, but he was underestimating me. As long as he underestimated me, he would definitely show an opening, and I just needed to break through his defense in that instant. Soon, his sword technique came. I blocked it in advance with my arm. The next moment, the classic famous scene came. I directly caught his blade with my bare hands. My right fist swung out fiercely, directly hitting his trachea. This punch of mine almost made the captain vomit up his overnight meal. In front of me, the captain couldn't even withstand a single move and fell to the ground. The team members were all stunned, not expecting I could have such strength. They only knew I was the lowest level soldier. I said, "From now on, the reconnaissance team will be commanded by me. Is there anyone who's not convinced?" Everyone was silent, making no response. Even that arrogant captain just slowly lowered his head. So I successfully became the captain of the reconnaissance team. Soon our group once again walked into the dense forest. Everyone was puzzled about why I wanted to do this. At this time I asked Anri, "What is your dream?" Anri said somewhat confused, "Why are you asking me this? I don't have dreams now. I used to have a dream, hoping to live together with the flower shop proprietress." I sighed and said, "If you want to live, you have to survive from here first." Then I asked another person and learned he already had a lover and child. I told him to work hard and stay alive. Then I also inquired about the dreams of the other two. One wanted to earn money to open a shop, and one wanted to return to his hometown to live a peaceful life. Finally, I also asked Andrew. He wanted to fulfill his mother's last words, because he had to revive the Garneau family. This was his mission. I said, "You all have dreams and need to leave here first to realize them. Next, you must follow my arrangements. We will return alive and definitely realize our dreams." I appeared particularly brilliant in the sunlight, and everyone was shocked by this scene. From now on, all squad members must actively engage the enemy. There was no better motivation than the desire for life. Previously, I had tried to break through after enemy troops appeared, but I was wrong. There was no way to escape. I pointed forward and ordered Henri to aim for heads and height in the direction of my finger. Although he had some doubts, these doubts were suppressed by my gaze. After I gave him the order, he shot an arrow directly into the air in the direction I indicated. This arrow was very accurate, directly hitting the enemy's skull. This scared several of them badly, not expecting there really were enemy troops ambushed here. I shouted loudly to Andrew behind me, "Follow my pace closely and charge up to kill." So Andrew followed behind me with a fierce expression. Soon there were 3 shadowy figures ahead of us, but I didn't stop at all and directly charged up to give him a sword strike. Through these loops I understood one principle. If you want to gain the upper hand in battle, you must strike first. These 2 soldiers couldn't react in time. All their attention was on me, completely not noticing that Andrew behind them had already assassinated them. At the same time, behind Andrew there was also an enemy soldier aiming at his heart. Fortunately, another member of the squad also arrived in time and eliminated that soldier. Their battle record was outstanding. In the blink of an eye, they directly took 2 lives. For a moment, the enemy soldier suddenly became extremely panicked and immediately called for reinforcements. But at this time, we wouldn't be afraid because all our team members had assembled and were listening to orders. What followed was a crushing massacre. On the tall grass prairie, the enemy also found it difficult to control our position. The reason we were discovered by them initially was because of that black leopard. The enemy accidentally discovered us because of this leopard. So this time when the enemy caught it, they became very panicked after being ambushed by us. This was how we achieved our victorious battle record. After killing all the enemies, I told them to immediately change locations. We couldn't stay here long. Unknown to me, behind me, a leopard was staring at me. We lost 1 teammate in the battle just now. I couldn't save everyone, but this was the time when I saved the most lives. Unknown to us, after we left, someone in the distance behind us was watching us. 10 minutes later, I still led the remaining people to begin ambushing the soldiers here. Because I had reincarnated dozens of times, I clearly knew the terrain here. If we continued forward, we would die at the hands of the enemy's crossbow unit, so we had to avoid them. Besides that, we also had to prioritize eliminating a group of spear unit soldiers, so that subsequent actions would be convenient. At this time, Andrew exerted all his strength and assassinated another enemy soldier. This made his guard somewhat frightened after seeing it. Andrew was really fighting too hard. When it got dark, they wouldn't be able to find the way, so he decided to hurry and escape before sunset. But I decided to advance, but that guard said dissatisfiedly, "Inside is closer to enemy territory." I said, "Shut up, it's best to talk less nonsense and hurry up and follow me." However, the next scene directly shocked all the members in the team. Andrew's subordinate pointed his sword at my throat and said, "Squad leader, do you have some other plan or conspiracy? I don't want to accompany you to die. Even if I kill you here, I want to find a way to live." My eyes were extremely cold and I said, "You should know that you definitely can't make it back in time now, right? We've already caused a big commotion on the prairie. If we go back now, the road is probably already blocked with enemy troops. Then I placed my hand on the guard's hand and made him put down his sword. I said before that I also want to live, so I won't harm you. This moved the former captain somewhat. He originally thought I must be an incompetent piece of trash, just like his deceased father who gave up everything and squandered the family fortune. But when Andrew saw my performance, he felt the truth was quite the opposite. In his mind, he remembered what his mother said to him before she died. She hoped her son would be an unyielding hero who could guide everyone. And when he saw me, he actually wanted very much to become the leadership figure I had just displayed. The next moment, he no longer hesitated and said loudly, "I believe you, squad leader." Andrew and I made eye contact for 3 seconds, then I nodded heavily to him. Andrew's guard thought he was crazy and said, "Why believe a captain of a small fry squad?" But what he got was Andrew's scolding, "Shut up, team members should follow the captain's orders." Seeing Andrew say this, he was too embarrassed to say anything more and could only follow behind the team. I crouched down and said to them, "Please curl up your bodies and quietly follow me." The people behind were also very obedient, all crouching down and crawling forward. My first plan was to strike first, then escape, avoiding being surrounded by enemy troops. Soon our group heard the sound of footsteps. This was my second plan. After repeated dozens of attempts, I found the only place where we could hide from them. Everyone was scared by this scene. As long as they made even the slightest noise, they would die here, because they were surrounded by dense crowds of soldiers. So far, everything was within my plan. Soon the patrolling soldiers left, leaving only our group. But I told them not to act and to wait until dark. I kept leading them deeper inside. After a day, they finally despaired, because we had arrived at their camp. There must be secrets here that the Asban army couldn't let spread outside. That's why they killed everyone who entered the prairie. If there was something more important than capturing us here, then we would definitely have a way to escape. Soon I thought of an idea, which was to set fire in the enemy camp. The guard behind said, "Madman, this is enemy heartland. We might be annihilated." I asked what his name was. The guard said confusedly, "You can call me Mag." I said, "I asked your name because I respect you. Then I don't accept insubordination." Mag wanted to say something more, but Andrew stopped him. "Shut up, Mag, just believe him." Then Andrew was the first to charge up with me. Actually, even if Andrew didn't say it, Mag clearly understood the current situation. There was no moonlight now, and they couldn't find the way. Now they could only trust the squad leader's judgment. At the same time, I charged forward and directly cut open the tent with my sword. Mag was shocked. This madman actually directly slashed open the tent and walked in. What amazed him was that this tent was empty inside. Mag was very strange about why I knew it was empty inside. During the entire period, we were rampaging through the enemy camp's interior, but no matter how we walked, we never encountered any enemy. Mag had to admire me. Although he didn't know what method I used, he felt I was very capable. Soon we came to the back of a tent. I raised one hand to signal them to stop. I had already infiltrated this place dozens of times before. When I first saw the banner above, I chose to touch it. Then in just a few seconds, I was assassinated by soldiers. So I deduced that what the Asban army was hiding on the prairie was that banner, and protecting that banner was their primary goal. Mag said in surprise, "Why would a mere squad leader like you know these things?" Then, as if remembering something, he recalled what the elf captain had said before. These things should be what she told him. When the Asban army focused their energy on protecting the banner, that would be the moment for us to prepare to escape. Seeing me so calm and composed, Mag guessed I might have received a secret mission from the military. I told them the only way to escape here was to destroy that banner. Next, I prepared to divide into two groups. The first group would act as bait to lure out enemy soldiers, and the other group would be responsible for setting fires. Mag said, "I think I'm more suitable to be this bait." Hearing this, I glanced at him lightly. Hadn't he always been dissatisfied with my orders? How did he suddenly start cooperating with me? But this saved me a lot of worry. Actually, I had led this team to this place many times before, but this time was the best situation and the most people came. So far, today was the best, and all the premonitions were very good. At this moment, a soldier in the enemy camp was heavily hit by a stone. They immediately realized there were enemy intruders here. Soon Mag's actions attracted dozens of soldiers to surround and attack him. At the same time, on the other side, I also chose to make my move. I didn't hesitate to grab a nearby fire torch. Just then, I felt endless killing intent. I saw a tall man above me raising his longsword to strike down. With a clang, that long sword directly cut off the fire bucket in my hand. I was greatly alarmed. How did this person approach behind me without any sound? I immediately stood up and looked toward the man's direction. I saw this person's aura was extremely dangerous. So far, I had never seen such an enemy. I felt something was wrong in my heart. It seemed I had encountered a formidable opponent today. The man's face was extremely ugly and he said, "What are you trash doing here?" However, his reaction was always a beat too slow. It was too late for him to come out and stop me now. I saw a tent on our side burst into raging flames. This immediately made the enemy troops panic. At the same time, Andrew coordinated with another companion to carry 2 large wine barrels, preparing to pour them on the fire. Seeing this, the man ordered, "Don't worry about the intruders first, put out the fire first." This was the plan I arranged. Mag acted as bait to lure out most of the soldiers, then Andrew ignited the camp, and I attracted the attention of the remaining enemies. From the beginning, I wasn't the one who was supposed to set the fire. At this time, my foot stomped heavily. If not now, when else would I kill him? I immediately got into position and used the surrounding environment to hide my killing intent. Now the man was completely open, waiting for me to stab through. His whole body was full of openings. Just when my sword edge was only 3 centimeters away from the man's head suddenly turned around. This fatal sword was actually dodged by him. This completely stunned me. I actually failed with that confident strike just now. Not only that, in that instant the man was actually able to hit my waist. That sword just now was the most perfect sword I had ever thrust in my life. I slowly turned my head to look at the man. It seemed this person's strength was completely not on the same level as mine. The man contemptuously cursed, "You trash actually tried to assassinate me just now." He walked toward me, but I no longer had confidence to continue fighting. I knew I couldn't beat him. Recalling today's countless loops, I had finally made it this far with great difficulty. If I died here, I would really be unwilling. This made me feel that this man in front of me was truly someone who could be called a wall. Compared to the previous soldier and that assassin, it was like heaven and earth. Since my wound was now on my waist, if I fought him head on, I would definitely die. I swayed and stood up. If I died, everything would have to start over. But I wasn't afraid of starting over. Even if I started over 10,000 times, I wouldn't get tired of it. Then he directly launched an attack at me, and I also prepared my stance to meet the attack. I raised the sword in my hands with both hands. I would definitely climb over this wall. The moment the two sharp blades collided, they produced a harsh scraping sound. I struck down with another sword, which was actually blocked hard by the opponent. This shocked me. I didn't expect his reaction speed to be so fast. When I came to my senses, the opponent was already about to cut through my body, but fortunately my speed was agile enough. I dodged to the side and escaped disaster. What followed were successive attacks. Now I was beaten by him with no ability to fight back. The opponent's reaction was very fast. I had almost no chance to counterattack. After fighting several more rounds, I felt the gap between us was getting bigger and bigger. Taking advantage of this opening, I quickly drew the hidden weapon from my waist and threw it over. What I didn't expect was that he blocked it with just the back of his hand. Then he thrust a sword at me. Just then, someone shouted loudly, "Hurry and put out the fire! The fire is getting bigger!" It was precisely this voice that distracted him, and that attack didn't hit me. Looking back, the banner behind was almost burned to ashes. The sorcerer behind cursed at him. "Captain, don't you know what you should be doing now?" The man opposite looked at me. He didn't expect such a weak guy to be so troublesome, and he saw unyielding spirit in my eyes. For a moment, he couldn't quickly resolve the battle. Then he left a harsh word. "We have a long future ahead. Let's see about this." After saying this, he calmly left this place. This made me somewhat surprised. He just left like that? Wasn't he my wall? I gripped the knife in my hand tightly. Actually, I still wanted to continue fighting with him in my heart, because only by fighting with such masters could I improve my strength. At this time, Andrew's voice came from behind. "Squad leader, let's take advantage of now and leave quickly. If we don't go now, none of us will be able to leave." I nodded. Now indeed wasn't the time to be attached to battle. I had to bring everyone back. But I would remember that figure. At some time in the future, I would definitely defeat him. Then I shouted loudly to all my companions behind, "Retreat immediately! Don't be attached to battle." Right now, taking advantage of their busy firefighting was our best opportunity to escape. During the escape, I saw that Andrew's stamina seemed to be almost exhausted. At the same time, 4 or 5 soldiers came chasing after him from behind. We couldn't let them easily kill the companions we had worked so hard to bring out. Andrew and I together killed the opponents. Then I retreated to the back to provide cover and let them run up the mountain. As we ran, I felt my eyes were a bit dazzled. It seemed we were welcoming a new dawn. Even so, we didn't dare slack off and ran frantically toward our own camp. When we returned to the military camp, we were already exhausted, with weak legs and dizzy heads. Even I was no exception. But I felt that today's version of myself seemed to have been sublimated. At the same time, at the enemy's headquarters, their banner had already been burned, so this matter couldn't be helped. They could only spend time preparing again. But the captain didn't expect that the famous Grey Dog unit actually couldn't stop those little brats. They had previously arranged elite troops to guard the tall grass prairie. The so-called Grey Dog unit was an independent squadron with independent combat rights in the Asban army. The unit's name came from the gray-haired Grey Dogs of the Asban Principality. Grey Dogs were naturally stubborn and famous for this. Anyone they set their sights on had never escaped. He asked the man behind him, "Was your opponent strong today?" Mickey said indifferently, "If there hadn't been a fire, I could have taken his life on the spot. If I encounter him again next time, he won't have today's good luck." After returning to the military camp, I still couldn't forget that battle. If possible, I still wanted to fight with him. Next time we fight, I will definitely kill him. Our thoughts at this moment were surprisingly consistent. After I completed the mission, I went to report everything that had happened. From my report, the elf captain judged that this was an almost impossible task to complete, but she didn't expect that I had actually completed it. After leaving the tent, I saw several people who had teamed up with me, and they were very grateful for my help this time. I waved my hand to indicate it was nothing, saying such a small matter was hardly worth mentioning. The reason I didn't accept their apology was because I felt I hadn't done well enough. Although I saved 4 of them, I still lost 2 comrades in the end. Since I had been repeating today continuously, I could already see the scenery beyond the limits. So now I shouldn't be struggling in place, but should keep transcending the cycle and surpassing today's version of myself. Therefore, I had to become even stronger. Just then, shouting appeared ahead of me. Looking closely, it turned out that Rem and Ragnar were fighting again. Rem seemed very excited when fighting with Ragnar. His whole expression was one I had never seen before. Ragnar was the same. His expression was unusually serious too. When I had sparred with them before, I had never seen them show such expressions. The mustachioed man beside said in horror, Are these still human? They're simply monsters. Probably only these two had the combat power to spar with each other every day without holding back. After watching their battle, I couldn't help but grip my sword hilt. I was very envious, so I set a goal to make them show such expressions in front of me too. With a swoosh, Rem's axe fell again and the air rang with the loud sound of clashing blades. Sharp-eyed Ragnar saw me first and said, "Didn't expect you to come back, squad leader." Rem said, "If you're back then come back openly, why are you hiding there watching us fight?" After I returned, Rem told the others to leave quickly as he didn't want to fight anymore. When I came back, I immediately started reviewing Rem's battle with Ragnar, but Rem seemed to have no interest in talking to me at all. Having no choice, I went to ask Ragnar, "How did you respond to Rem's attacks just now?" But Ragnar was the same as Rem, completely unwilling to talk to me. No matter how fanatical a training enthusiast is, once the body is injured, it must rest properly. After dinner in the evening, I was preparing to train again, and Rem and Ragnar couldn't understand me. If the squad leader continued training in this way, he might die. Time flashed by and it was the next morning. Ragnar slept comfortably until the next morning before getting up. Turning his head, Ragnar discovered that the squad leader was actually training despite his injuries. He stretched comfortably, thinking that such training was basically futile. Then he ran to the back of the tent to watch me practice. After watching for a while, Ragnar felt it was somewhat painful to watch. Every one of my moves revealed a lack of basic skills, so even though I struggled day and night, the training remained fruitless. But when he saw my eyes, he felt them filled with hope. So Ragnar felt conflicted, because how could an ordinary little swordsman have such powerful hope in his eyes? Finally, he couldn't help but come out and ask me why I insisted on training every day. However, I simply told him that I wanted to become stronger and more powerful. Ragnar continued asking, "If you become stronger, what other goals do you have?" I said, "My goal has always been the same from beginning to end, to become a knight. I want to walk the path of knighthood. Even if this path means my destruction, I'm willing to accept it." Then Ragnar, as if he had made a decision, came behind me. Ragnar said solemnly, "Do you want to learn swordsmanship, squad leader?" This made me very happy. He was finally going to teach me swordsmanship. I was certainly willing to learn swordsmanship from Ragnar, although I didn't know his true strength. Every time he fought with Rem, he held his ground for a long time. After seeing my eyes, Ragnar felt things were getting more interesting. Ragnar held up 2 fingers and said, "If you want to learn swordsmanship from me, first you must abandon the beast's heart and the sword thrust. Everything else must be thrown away too." This shocked me. Did I have to throw away the mercenary sword techniques too? Ragnar felt I had too many unnecessary movements, and if I didn't abandon them, they might cost me my life. Ragnar asked, "Do you need to learn new techniques or do you want to be content with the status quo?" However, I didn't think too much about it and directly chose to relearn swordsmanship. This stunned Ragnar, who said, "Don't you want to consider it at all?" I said, "Hurry up and teach me, don't stand there in a daze." Ragnar was secretly surprised, thinking, this guy is indeed somewhat unreasonable. Later, Ragnar took me to get a long sword. He really taught me from the basics. First, the posture of holding the sword with both hands and the feeling of gripping the sword. He said, "The sword in your hand doesn't become powerful by gripping it tightly. You must use the wrist's movement to flexibly combine the sword with yourself." Ragnar taught me for an afternoon, and I finally understood one thing. He wasn't a good teacher, because every time he got to the key points, he would speak vaguely. Then he could only use actual combat to teach me how to quickly execute sword techniques in battle, because this was the best and fastest way to improve swordsmanship. Ragnar's strength was indeed formidable. His casual sword made my wrist tremble, and I almost couldn't hold the sword. I asked him, "What happened? That sword of yours just now almost made me unable to hold my sword. My whole arm felt like it was paralyzed in an instant." Ragnar raised his arm to demonstrate for me. He said, "If your movements are too stiff, you'll be even less able to hold the sword. It's essentially like a tree branch or a pillar." Something like that. I said somewhat speechlessly, "What you're saying is so bad I can't understand it. And what does that analogy even mean?" Just like that, I began training continuously with Ragnar. Every time I fell, I would get up and train again, until I was knocked down by Ragnar once more. Ragnar was somewhat surprised in his heart. He thought I wasn't this terrible. But when we actually fought, he discovered I hadn't even mastered the most basic fundamentals. If the squad leader was like this now, even if he were a divine general, he couldn't teach the squad leader swordsmanship. But I had no intention of giving up. I said, "Stop dazing and hurry up and continue practicing with me." Just then, Rem walked over and told me to quickly put on my clothes and prepare for battle. But I hadn't heard any notice about battle. It turned out to be a temporary order. Scouts had discovered enemy forces continuously approaching ahead. Now everyone in our squad was ready, except for me and Ragnar, who weren't equipped. The elf captain had even assembled several thousand soldiers to prepare for battle. Soon, our squad of 6 arrived here, and I wanted to see who exactly wanted to fight us. Ragnar felt he had made a wrong decision today. Today he taught the squad leader to abandon his previous sword techniques, but today they encountered battle. The squad leader might die because of this. I could see a flag standing ahead of us. Looking carefully, there were 6 such flags in total in that place. And this was the wizard. These 6 flags would be their most advantageous weapon. Gradually, a massive white mist slowly drifted over from the wizard's direction. The elf captain was somewhat surprised. Could this be sorcery? Soon this smoke enveloped everyone. Even though they were very close to each other, they couldn't see each other's figures. Just then, I seemed to sense something flying past me. At the same time, more and more people heard these sounds. I said, "This is bad. These sounds are arrows. Everyone quickly raise your shields to defend." The next moment, the enemy's overwhelming flying arrows shot over. For a moment, our side suffered heavy casualties. The elf captain never expected the enemy would use sorcery as a strategy. She immediately realized she had been tricked and told everyone to retreat quickly. The wizard said, "It's too late to retreat now. All of you will die in this smoke." And this smoke was the mist of destruction. created by one of the flags, and there was an old acquaintance here too. When I burned the flag before, it had made him very angry. If we could face off this time, it would definitely be a life and death battle. At this moment on the battlefield, the enemy sorcery was routing us completely, but I had already found a way to break the situation, so I charged directly into the smoke. Ragnar was startled and said, "Charging in recklessly like this is just throwing your life away." However, I completely ignored Ragnar's words. A spear thrust toward me, but I easily dodged it. I had already looped through today over 100 times. I knew the trajectory of all the arrows. Through so many loops, Ragnar had taught me many techniques, and now it was up to me. The next moment, I faced an enemy soldier. After his spear thrust out, my sword had already pierced into his neck. Then I used the sword techniques I practiced daily to slash his body apart. At this time, I threw a dagger from my chest. I roughly knew the enemy's direction. All of this was already imprinted in my mind. With a thud, I threw my dagger hard, hitting an enemy soldier right in the chest. This made their expressions somewhat unsettled. After I attacked, my figure left the original spot. When I appeared again, I had severed an enemy soldier's leg. The enemy across from me was frightened by his comrade's screams and seemed somewhat panicked for a moment. Ragnar had told me in previous loops, remember the coordination between eyes, feet, and hands. First, use your eyes to see and make predictions. Then move your feet to quickly approach the enemy. And finally, use your hands to thrust the sword into the enemy soldier's chest. I laughed wildly. I felt this battle was somewhat different. Completely different from before I practiced the basics. As I kept killing, I reached the enemy's rear. The enemy captain smiled coldly and said, "You've fallen into the encirclement. Do you think you can still get out alive?" Little did he know this was exactly what I wanted. Only death could make me stronger. They all thought I was crazy, because only a madman would say such things. Then without hesitation, they killed me with a barrage of arrows. After this death, I came to the dark space again. This time the ferryman also appeared. She thought I had gone crazy, actually dying nearly 300 times in a single day. Opening my eyes again, I was back to this morning. I didn't expect the ferryman to appear this time just to call me crazy. At this time, Rem stood in front of me, reminding me of when Rem mentioned sorcery during the battle in the mist. I still remembered the enemy formation at that time. I discovered their formation had no tactical value. It seemed just like in the tall grass prairie, they were simply guarding the flags. Then I asked Rem, "Do you know what sorcery is?" Rem asked curiously, "When did you become interested in sorcery? I never heard you mention it before. I've learned about magic before, but I haven't heard of sorcery. Magic seems more common." So-called sorcery requires a medium, and the medium itself is a crucial thing. Without a medium, sorcery cannot be established. After listening to Rem's explanation, I should have understood. The thick fog was created by the enemy using sorcery, and the medium for that sorcery was the flags. So as long as I destroyed them, the fog would dissipate. The reason Rem understood sorcery was because sorcery originated in the West, and Rem happened to be born in the western frontier. Rem had once been fortunate enough to witness a grand scene. Sorcerers were very rare, and most of the sorcerers circulating on the continent were frauds. After roughly understanding sorcery, I prepared to go train, and next, I would definitely break the enemy's sorcery. Today was the same. I found Ragnar again to learn swordsmanship. He asked me if I had heard of the 5 great sword techniques. 500 years ago, a genius appeared on the continent. Born in a small village, at a young age he killed 12 bandits who attacked the village using only a fire poker. He lost his parents early, and a noble who heard these rumors decided to take him in as an adopted son. That genius had once appeared under the name Leon Nijinak, but even though he was gifted, he was also cursed. When he was 10 years old, his body began to gradually weaken, and by 20, Leon Nijinak was completely paralyzed. But he organized 5 major categories of swordsmanship in the way of the sword. These 5 great sword techniques were the upright and exact blade, the heavy and powerful blade, the bewitched blade, the swift blade, and the gentle and flowing blade. So this was what Ragnar called the 5 great sword techniques. After Leon wrote a new chapter in the history of swordsmanship, the Oliniak family used this as an opportunity to become the most prestigious family in the empire. And this school of swordsmanship was passed down through generations, now becoming orthodox. So current swordsmanship was mainly divided into Northern heavy sword, Central straight sword and soft sword, Western quick sword, Southern phantom sword, and Eastern strange sword. Ragnar used the Northern heavy sword and created his own sword technique called focus on one point. Forget everything around you and focus only on your own sword and the enemy's sword. Then Ragnar got into position to demonstrate this sword technique. The next second, Ragnar's sword attacked me. His sword wasn't very fast, but it cut a gash on my neck. If Ragnar's blade had shifted 5 centimeters to the left, my major artery would have been severed. Ragnar asked expectantly, "Did you feel the focus on one point I mentioned earlier?" At this time, Rem appeared. He scolded Ragnar, "Are you trying to kill the squad leader?" Ragnar said, "I'm helping the squad leader train. It's none of your business." The two of them started arguing again. I felt neither of their teaching methods were very good. I turned and told them both to stop arguing, as it seemed someone was calling us to assemble. As we were about to assemble, Ragnar told me to carefully feel the state of nerve tension when near death. As long as I successfully entered the state of focusing on one point, the surrounding vision would become blurred, and my perception would only notice the sword in the enemy's hand and my sword. Then I began fighting continuously, experiencing countless deaths, but each death still didn't let me touch the state Ragnar described. It wasn't until the 260th loop that there was a breakthrough. I stared deadly at the flag in the distance. After dying over 200 times, I finally found the true location of the medium. If I could sever the flag this time, the mist would disappear. As the enemy sorcerer raised his hand, quite a bit of mist emerged from their side. I was somewhat used to this scene and immediately crouched down. telling them to raise their shields to prepare for the incoming arrows. At this time, the soldiers seemed to have found their support and completely followed my orders. As the enemy's arrow rain fell, we had already prepared our shields to block it. I cursed loudly, "Damn sorcerer!" Then I told Rem to charge up with me. Rem said with great surprise, "Are you crazy, squad leader? How dare you charge in recklessly like this?" I told Rem to clear the way for me because I wanted to conserve my strength, in case I had no energy left when I reached the flag. After charging with Rem, I seemed much more relaxed. Rem could kill a soldier with one axe blow. At this time, Rem grabbed a soldier by the collar and interrogated him. "Speak up, who exactly created the sorcery?" That soldier didn't answer his question at all, so he killed him with one axe blow. I completely ignored the screams behind me. After all, I had been hearing these screams for over a year. Now the most important thing was to approach the innermost flag. The next moment, the power in my hand was fully charged. As long as I cut down the flag, the mist would disappear. I swayed forward and chopped my long blade down on the pole. It was time for this mist to end. However, just at this moment, a sword blocked my attack. After our two figures made contact, we immediately separated without any extra movements. The opponent's appearance surprised me. From that sword strike just now, I could tell the opponent was very strong. The man slowly said, "It seems heaven still has eyes. It actually let us meet again. For so many days, he had been wanting to take my life. He was the captain from the tall grass prairie, but I had already experienced over a year in the loops, and I had long forgotten his appearance. So I asked, 'Who are you? Do we know each other?' His expression froze as he said, 'You bastard, did you forget me so quickly? It's only been a few days. You shouldn't have forgotten me.' But I really couldn't remember who he was, so he decided to use his sword to make me remember. As soon as he finished speaking, his body quickly approached me. I stared hard. This guy's strength was indeed not to be underestimated. After I concentrated fully to avoid his attack, I also began my counterattack. I saw my feet stomp heavily on the ground. I once again used the sword thrust I hadn't used in a long time. He was secretly surprised. How could this man make such great progress in just a few days? The me before him was no longer on the same level as the me he knew. Actually, he'd already sensed that my strike just now was intended to restrain him with my strongest move. While he was dazed, my attack quietly came again. In the previous sword fight, I sensed he was using straight sword techniques, with extremely solid fundamentals, and he skillfully employed fluid sword techniques. This type of sword technique could resist defensive attacks. I deflected his attack with one sword, concentrating all my energy on what was before me, maintaining this balance that would be broken if I lost focus for even an instant. Then I had to pour everything I possessed into it. When our two swords clashed together again, I discovered that the colors in my pupils had only two types. The first was the blue-white sword body. The second was gray. Everything around had turned gray. It was as if only our two swords remained in my eyes. This time he was truly angry. He didn't expect even a small fry to take him so long. The next moment, he directly knocked the sword from my hand. This made me feel bad. If the balance was broken, only death awaited me. With a thud, just as I had guessed, his sword pierced directly into my heart. Although I was about to die, I felt extremely pleased in my heart. Only by fighting such people could I improve my strength. Only then did I remember that he was the captain from the tall grass prairie. He was Mickey Schuler, captain of the Aspen Grey Dog Unit. I also gave my name. I am squad leader of the Nerelia Kingdom, Ankrid. At the moment I was about to die, I finally understood one thing. To learn this technique, I didn't need the concentration that comes from facing death with fear, but rather lacked a strategic opponent who could match my abilities. After I was killed and reborn, Ragnar again explained the key points of swordsmanship to me, but he felt that this time I seemed somewhat absent-minded, as if I felt like giving up. At this time, Rem called everyone to assemble for battle in the afternoon. I glanced at Ragnar and told him to hurry up and follow. Ragnar was even more puzzled. Why did the squad leader look even more full of fighting spirit? He felt I was becoming more and more incomprehensible, so he decided to get some good exercise today too. It was about the same as before. When the mist appeared, everyone panicked somewhat. At this time, I shouted for everyone to raise their shields to block. At this time, countless flying arrows came toward us. I said to Rem, "Follow my steps, let's kill our way inside together." Ragnar heard my voice and said, "If you want to make a surprise attack, I'll go with you." Rem said puzzledly, "What's wrong with you two guys? What are you thinking?" Ragnar cursed angrily, "If you don't want a sword through your skull, I advise you to look ahead." I could see that ahead of me I was already surrounded by a group of soldiers. The next moment, Rem directly smashed two people's heads with his axe. Ragnar did the same operation. Their speed at this moment was incredibly fast. This was about the same as the path cleared before. I met the enemy captain again. I showed a fierce expression and said, "Hello there, friend, let's have a match." Hearing this, Mickey looked completely confused and said, "I didn't expect you came specifically for me." I laughed. "Is this the first time someone's confessed to you? I fell in love with you at first sight and came specifically to find you." Mickey had once led the Grey Dog Unit, and every member was a stubborn romance expert. The next moment, we two quickly engaged in battle. I needed to return to that state where I could only sense the sword. However, while searching for the state, I accidentally got stabbed by him. He mocked, "I thought you were a good opponent, but you lost as soon as the match started. I really don't know what you came here for." Only then did I realize one point. My mindset was wrong. I couldn't consciously seek that state. What I had to do was the same as the previous loop, naturally fall into decisive battle and then comprehend. So I started looping continuously again, constantly fighting him. Finally, on the 18th loop, I once again saw the two-color world. And on the 28th time I saw it too, but still couldn't skillfully enter this state. This was the 108th time, and at this point Ragnar was about to tell me the essence of this sword. The instant Ragnar drew his sword, I saw the two-color world. Was that what Ragnar called sword intent? Ragnar's sword continuously enlarged in my eyes. But this time, no matter how fast Ragnar was, he couldn't escape my sight. The next moment, I directly knocked Ragnar's sword away with one strike. After hundreds of loops, I finally saw sword intent. Ragnar said with great shock, "I didn't expect you to actually knock my sword away. Did you avoid my sword by concentrating your attention on one point?" Ragnar was very puzzled about how I did it, because complete concentration meant completely controlling one's sword and body. However, I said nothing and didn't answer Ragnar's inner confusion. I had more important things to do now. Today was the time to end the looping day. Soon I met with the elf captain. I told her that when I went scouting before, I discovered the enemy had sorcery. The elf captain's eyes showed a puzzled expression, telling me to continue. So I continued. "The soldiers of Asban call a strange-looking person a sorcerer." Hearing this, the elf captain immediately became interested and said, "Please tell me in detail." So I told the elf captain everything I knew. In the afternoon, it was still the same plot. The enemy used mist sorcery. A few seconds before the arrows were about to fly, I had everyone raise their shields to block. Then I took Ragnar and Rem toward the enemy's rear. The rest could only depend on our commander's ability. He could definitely solve this matter perfectly, and I had only one goal: to destroy that flag. And below this flag, there was someone waiting for me to defeat. Seeing my arrival, he also looked at me with shock. I skillfully greeted him. "Didn't expect us to meet again, Mickey Schuler. I said the first time I saw you, I wanted to settle things with you. Today is a good opportunity." The next moment I charged out first with a sprint, but my sharp sword was easily dodged by Mickey Schuler. Then I saw he seemed about to make a horizontal slash. So before his movement fell, I used my arm to block the sword's back, preparing defense in advance. With a clang, the two sharp swords collided, making a harsh sound. Mickey Schuler was extremely angry in his heart. He was very puzzled how I had grown to this level in such a short time. Gradually, he faintly sensed danger from my sword. As long as he was slightly careless, my sword tip might pierce his throat. This was the intuition of a master. With a bang, our two bodies met again. At this time, Mickey asked, "Could it be that when I saw you in the tall grass prairie, you were hiding your strength?" I gave him an affirmative look and said, "I had my teammates with me before, so it wasn't convenient to reveal my strength. Now I can fight you with my whole heart. This time you must remember my name. I'm called Ankrid." The next moment, my sword was knocked away by Mickey. He also took this opportunity to quickly approach me. However, his movements were a different scene in my eyes. I entered the two-color world. Looking around, everything within sight was like slow motion. This was the wonderful aspect of this state. I could clearly know that Mickey had already shifted his center of gravity to his right foot. However, his next move should be preparing to swing diagonally. Sure enough, just as I had guessed, I successfully dodged his attack. I learned this technique from continuous looping. The experience gained through repeated practice was enough to let me defeat him. Now I could see clearly every minute detail of Mickey's movements, including predicting the direction of his attacks. The instant his body rushed up, I quickly thrust out a sword, directly cutting his neck. At the same time, I was also pierced in the neck by his blade. Mickey was greatly startled, thinking, when did his sword get here? Does he want to sever my head? He underestimates me too much. The next moment, after I slashed out that sword, Mickey quickly dropped down to avoid the attack. Mickey just felt I was too terrifying. At first he thought he could subdue me in a few rounds, but now I was actually evenly matched with him. Then he was so angry he almost bit through his molars. This was unacceptable to him. The straight sword and soft sword he used were both close to defensive sword techniques, so he needed to give me a fatal blow. It was also time to use the secret technique he had specifically learned to deal with this situation. This was an attack launched from below that would sweep away everything in a huge arc. And this ultimate technique was Mickey's final trump card called Wheel Cleave. Unfortunately, his movement just now had already been captured by me. I had died under this sword technique no less than 20 times before, so this time I specifically watched Mickey's sword. All the tricks of his sword couldn't escape my eyes. I chuckled. Finally, it could end. After hundreds of loops, I had finally crossed another high wall. The next moment, I struck heavily on Mickey's sword tip. To be precise, I predicted his sword. Mickey was extremely surprised because I not only saw the trajectory of his sword, but actually blocked it. Mickey Schuler's family was one of the three pillars managing the Asban Principality because the family symbolized military force, so anyone with martial talent, whether from the main line or branch families, would be absorbed into the clan. Mickey became a branch member of the Schuler family in this way. When he was 13 years old, he single-handedly challenged all the swordsmen in the village with just one sword. As he grew older, he became a renowned warrior throughout the entire city. He was a powerhouse in the Grey Dog unit, and there were few who could match his skill in combat. So he once had the same thoughts as Ragnar. Was it really necessary for these people to train until their hands split and their thighs swelled? In his eyes, swordsmanship was as simple as eating or drinking water. It was because of this mindset that he became complacent and quite arrogant about his own abilities. But now he realized that was nothing more than his past arrogance, and he was just a loser about to be defeated. The next moment, my sword steadily pierced into his shoulder. A moment later, I slowly pulled the sword out. Even now, Mickey Mickey still couldn't believe he had been defeated so easily. He felt it was just a momentary lapse because this guy in front of him was far inferior to him. I said, I admit you're right, but you still lost to me. The next moment I raised my sword ready to take his life, but only one of us could survive. Just then my sword was blocked by someone. My body kept stumbling backward. The man before me was incredibly powerful. The enemy's guards also caught up and immediately gave Mickey simple first aid. That man calmly ordered his subordinates to take Mickey away to rest. Then he praised me. You came here alone and wounded one of my fierce generals. So he made a decision. He would make sure I died without leaving a complete corpse. Only then did I realize this wasn't the time to be careless. I was right in the middle of enemy territory. It would be nearly impossible for me alone to escape from here, so I could only change my target, destroy the banner above, then fight my way out. The next moment, several arrows flew toward me. I basically ignored the small fries in front of me. My target was only the captain in the center. I couldn't dodge all the incoming attacks, so I could only endure the arrow strikes and charge forward bravely. The enemy captain cursed loudly, "Let's see where you can run now." With a clang, I quickly raised my sword horizontally to block the captain's slash. However, after just one exchange with this captain, my sword actually started to crack slightly. It seemed this guy was using a heavy sword with heavy power. I quickly knocked his sword away, creating some space to catch my breath. Then I immediately drew a dagger from my chest and threw it out. My goal now was to escape and destroy their banner so the curse would dissipate, but each attack fell just short of hitting the banner. The captain's attack came down again, but I dodged it, and at the same time I gripped another dagger in my hand. This time I was confident enough to hit that banner, because I was aiming at the connection between the banner and the flagpole, which would be easy to hit. The next moment the dagger shot upward and cut down the enemy's banner. The elf captain looked panicked. He had clearly reported that the enemy would use sorcery and requested timely countermeasures from above, but they still had no preparation at all. It seemed this kingdom was already rotten to the core, actually sending such useless people to the front lines. If this continued, total annihilation would only be a matter of time. But just then, the elf captain sensed something was wrong. The smoke in front of him seemed to be dissipating. Even the soldiers in the enemy camp didn't expect the smoke to suddenly dissipate. So they quickly realized one thing. The banner must have been damaged. By the time they reacted, it was too late. The elf captain directly pierced his heart with one sword thrust. The elf captain shouted loudly, "The thick fog is dissipating. The enemy is panicking now. This is our best chance to turn the tide. Everyone, counterattack." The elf captain's words directly boosted the morale of everyone in the army. The elf captain was very curious about who had destroyed the sorcery. At this moment, she already had a guess in her heart. Could it be that person? Meanwhile, I had several sharp arrows stuck in my body, and the knife in my hand had broken. All of this was due to my misjudgment. I thought that once I destroyed the banner and ran toward our army's base camp, I would encounter Rem and Ragnar, but there was no sign of them here. At the same time, Rem also appeared in an unfamiliar environment. He told the enemy soldiers to bring their sorcerer over, or else he would kill them all, and Ragnar's figure appeared in his own military camp. The officer said with exasperation, "What's wrong with you? Are you planning to rebel?" At this moment, Ragnar finally realized, could he really be directionally challenged? He had actually walked into his own army. At this time, an enemy soldier in front of me said, "You're in this state, do you really think you can make it back alive?" Then he quickly raised the long knife in his hand to strike down. However, a leopard from somewhere bit tightly onto his arm. I recognized this leopard. It was the purple leopard I had seen before in the tall grass prairie. But what puzzled me was why this leopard would help me. This leopard was incredibly fast. In just the blink of an eye, it had broken the crossbows in the enemy soldiers' hands. This surprised those soldiers. Why could a leopard be so intelligent? After dealing with them, the leopard crouched in front of me to protect me. I advised it to leave here quickly, because what we were about to face was someone much more formidable than us. If nothing unexpected happened, I might die here today. At this moment, someone patted my shoulder from behind. It was squad leader Bensuji. He told me to step aside, he would handle the next battle. The next moment, Bensuji moved with extreme speed. To defeat someone with a heavy sword, one must use speed as an advantage. As a result, in just one round, he was sent flying back by the enemy captain. The opponent's strength had already far exceeded their level. Then he immediately ordered the soldiers behind him to fire crossbows at them, while the enemy focused all their attention on the crossbows. The purple leopard seized the opportunity to try a sneak attack. However, the captain just lightly poked it. The leopard immediately fell to the ground. This captain was indeed a very formidable opponent. The next moment, I once again entered the world of sword intent. The opponent's sword and his movements were now crystal clear to me. The instant his sword came down, I had already drawn a long sword and prepared to block. I couldn't resist his sword with my own strength, so I could only learn Mickey's technique of using softness to overcome hardness. The next moment, the same posture appeared on my body. Although I blocked this sword, my shoulder was also cut by him. However, this still shocked the enemy captain greatly. He questioned me, "That move you just used was using softness to overcome hardness. That's Mickey's special technique. How can you use it?" I succeeded in using it on my first try. If I didn't show off a bit at this moment, it would be such a waste. I said such a simple technique can be learned at a glance. There's no difficulty at all. Taking advantage of the opponent's moment of bewilderment, Bensuji quickly struck with his sword. Seeing that the situation was hopeless, the enemy decided to retreat first. He threatened me viciously, "I'll remember you, you just wait." I looked directly into his eyes and replied, "I'll be waiting here for you. I'm just afraid you won't come." Then he waved his hand and shouted to the soldiers behind him. Everyone began to retreat. After they retreated, I immediately ran forward to check the leopard's injuries. I had to take this leopard with me too. Then Bensuji helped me up and said, "You should worry about whether you might die at any moment." Soon, more comrades carried me back. My eyelids grew heavier and heavier. Then I involuntarily closed my eyes. When I woke up again, I saw the leopard lying beside me. Standing in front of me were my teammates. They seemed to have been guarding me day and night. Seeing me wake up alive, everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Then they immediately went about their own business. I said, "Why was I the only one injured in this battle? How come you don't have a single wound on your bodies?" At this moment, Rem stared at me intently. I felt a bit embarrassed under his gaze. I said, "Do you want to pet this leopard?" But Rem expressed no interest in animals at all. What he was curious about was how I knew that was sorcery. Sorcery was quite uncommon on the continent. If I said it was because I learned it through constant reincarnation, he definitely wouldn't believe me, but I also couldn't just lie to get by. Because Rem had helped me quite a bit, I had to be sincere in return. I said, "The person who used to live with me was from the frontier like you." He had mentioned it to me before, so I just reasoned it out based on that clue. What I just said wasn't exactly a lie, since I had indeed heard it from Rem. Rem wasn't stupid either. He said, "If you don't want to tell me, that's fine, just don't let yourself become too interested in sorcery." I didn't expect someone so big to have such an active mind. He was quite perceptive. At this moment I remembered something. Where had he gone during the battle? I had looked for him for a long time but couldn't find him. Rem chuckled. He had originally wanted to see what the enemy sorcerer looked like, but he really couldn't stand the sorcerer's face, so he killed him. No wonder I didn't see the enemy sorcerer. Rem had killed him. Thinking back to that technique of using softness to overcome hardness I had used before, I wondered if I could succeed again if I tried it once more. Jackson told me not to force myself or my injuries would only get worse. Ragnar said the same thing. "You'd be better off sleeping a bit more now." This made Rem behind them very displeased. He said, "Don't infect the squad leader with your laziness. If you want to slack off, go sleep in the middle of the road." Ragnar was angered by Rem's words and prepared to go get his sword to duel with Rem. Just then I said, "I once naturally used a technique I had never practiced before. That was the first time I experienced such a thing. Do you think this kind of thing can happen?" Rem picked at his ear and said, "This kind of thing is normal, no need to make a big fuss about it, because your body has gotten used to the beast's heart and can now face opponents directly. Therefore, you can also carefully observe the opponent's sword techniques and power distribution." Ragnar also said, "As long as your fundamentals are solid, you can easily understand movements. Now that you've also learned a bit of concentration, your vision will be broader too." However, they told me not to rely on luck, since that situation could only be executed once by chance, but before that one would need to experience hundreds of real battles to succeed. It could be considered one's natural talent. When they put it that way, I understood. For me, that past today wasn't simply just one day, but several days of setbacks and struggles, where I had studied hundreds of times with all my might to achieve victory. Thinking of this, I couldn't help but clench my fists. I had become stronger through my own efforts. I wasn't just remembering repeated days, I could feel myself gradually getting stronger. At this moment, I called out to both of them. I said seriously, "Are you two free right now? I want to spar with you." Rem and Ragnar both cursed. "You're crazy. In that condition you still want to train. You really don't value your life." At this moment the beautiful elf captain lifted the curtain and walked in. As soon as she arrived, she asked if I was the one who destroyed the sorcery. I immediately admitted it, since this wasn't something that could be hidden anyway. But what surprised me was why she came to ask personally. I said, "Because when I was scouting earlier, I discovered they were using sorcery." Although my answer was somewhat forced, the elf captain still didn't plan to continue questioning. The elf captain said, "I just came to check on you." The questioning was actually secondary. After all, we two are quite fated, don't you think? What did this mean? What was with that ambiguous expression of hers? After the elf captain left, Rem and Ragnar showed gossipy expressions and said, "Can you elaborate on this?" Even the big-eyed boy outside the tent said, "You're really brave," actually daring to pursue the elf captain. Getting to the point, the big-eyed boy came to find me this time because he had real business to discuss. He said the Night Order had returned today. After hearing his news, I said in shock, "Are you talking about the Red Cloak Night Order?" The corps I belonged to was called the Cyprus Regiment, and its affiliated Night Order was the Red Cloak Night Order. Knights were people on the continent who possessed rare talents. So Night Orders didn't only have knights. They also had followers and disciples who followed them, called retainers. When retainers were recognized by knights, they would become knight candidates, and above them existed knights who had transcended human limits. Unlike knights, retainers generally couldn't come to the front lines. Since they had come, it meant that the retainers who came to the battlefield would become knight candidates. Soon, noisy sounds came from outside. Rem told me to rest well in the tent, but at a time like this there was no way I could stay here. I really wanted to go out and see. Rem glanced at me sideways and immediately saw through my thoughts. He said, "It seems all your thoughts are written on your face. If you want to go out so badly, then you definitely have to go, or you'll regret missing this." Then I went outside and stood before a dense crowd of soldiers. My heart was pounding. This was the dream I had always held in my heart. Now I finally had the chance to glimpse the tip of the iceberg. Standing before us was a knight candidate retainer. His presence was incredibly intimidating. Every step he took made people's hearts race. The enemy leader shouted, "Fire arrows!" In that instant, countless arrows flew out from the sky and fell down. In just a moment, the number of those arrows multiplied countless times. When these arrows reached a critical point, they all began to fall down together. However, these arrows never caused the retainer's expression to change even slightly. He quickly crouched down and placed his hand on his sword hilt. A white whirlwind gathered around his feet. Ragnar told me to watch carefully. That white whirlwind was will. Soon this will slowly drifted toward the sky. With just one charge, the explosive speed and momentum had already intercepted the arrows in the sky. At this moment, the retainer's figure was about to rush into the enemy camp. This shocked me greatly. I hadn't expected his momentum to be so powerful. At this time, I clearly saw that the retainer had already drawn half of his blade from its sheath. With a swoosh, the retainer casually slashed and directly scattered the enemy formation. Some soldiers were even swept into the air by this momentum. This made me widen my eyes. Could a person really be this powerful? I hadn't expected someone to master and integrate 3 types of swordsmanship: the swift blade, the bewitched blade, the heavy and powerful blade. At this moment, I stood not far away observing the battle. Seeing the retainer single-handedly take on an entire army was tremendously shocking to my heart. But what I didn't know was, the most terrifying thing on the field was actually the 5 teammates behind me. After watching the retainer's battle, I also gained some insight. That legendary sword genius had once categorized 5 major sword techniques. Each category of sword technique had exquisite and masterful methods. If I could comprehend these 5 categories of sword techniques and merge them into one supremely vital sword technique. Thinking of this, I slowly closed my eyes. Perhaps the answer was already in my heart. At this moment, the battlefield was filled with the sounds of killing. Rem and Ragnar beside me seemed to notice my abnormal state. Rem chuckled and said, "It seems the squad leader is about to comprehend something this time." They protected my body. They couldn't let other things disturb the squad leader's enlightenment. All soldiers rushed to the front lines to fight. Only these 5 firmly protected me. At the same time, I once again entered the realm of meditation. In that long period of enlightenment just now, I discovered one thing. That was, through my continuous growth stronger, the walls I encountered would only get higher and higher. But this couldn't stop my progress. I would definitely climb up to see the scenery behind the wall. This belief wouldn't stop even on the day I became a knight. Soon our soldiers shouted excitedly. They had won this battle completely. After the battle ended, I also awakened from that meditative state. It was now approaching winter solstice. The war was about to end, and we would also welcome the busy winter and spring. At the same time, in the Asben Duchy, a country jointly founded by 3 families as pillars, the king of Asben was getting a headache at this moment. Those bastards had actually broken the rule of not letting knight orders participate in wars. Standing below him were Schuler, who managed military force, and Eakins, who managed administration. According to the news that came in, Eakins said they seemed to have discovered the frog general on the battlefield. Then they used this as an excuse to let the knight order participate in the war. But if the sorcery had succeeded at that time, this wouldn't have happened. Eakins' words successfully ignited the king's fury. The Grey Dog unit couldn't escape responsibility for the failure of the sorcery. Schuler's face looked grim. He planned to properly punish them when he returned. After Asben retreated from this protracted war, our troops finally began to return triumphantly. Next, we were to go to Shaocheng, a border city directly under the king's control. After this victorious battle, the army began to prepare rewards for those who had contributed. First was Ankrid of the 4th Squad, 4th Unit, 4th Division, who defeated the enemy's sorcery and was granted a commendation. Someone protested, "Isn't he that useless squad leader? How could he possibly break sorcery?" Everyone thought I had stolen credit from my subordinates. They thought I was just a bootlicker. I didn't want to explain much about this. Time would prove everything. But someone didn't like hearing others speak ill of me. "If you dare to gossip again, I'll cut out your tongues." My former teammate Anri looked at me with satisfaction, thinking, he's really getting more and more impressive. Bensuji also looked at me with the same expression, although he and I had some conflicts before. After I saved him last time, his opinion of me changed considerably. I went up on stage to receive my reward. I hadn't expected there to be so many gold coins. I took this money to the blacksmith shop and used all the money to forge a long sword because I planned to take the soldier advancement exam, so I couldn't use that broken sword from before anymore. Hearing that, I planned to take the advancement exam. The big-eyed boy mind became active. He could set up a gambling den for this occasion. Soldier exam levels were divided into 5 grades. Different levels would provide corresponding treatment. To advance levels, one needed to line up against 3 soldiers of the corresponding level and defeat them. As a merchant, the big-eyed boy quickly sensed a business opportunity and shouted for others to come place bets with him. At this moment, a mid-level soldier said, "You lowest grade trash actually want to challenge mid-level soldiers. You really don't know your place." It seemed my first opponent would be him. A mercenary by background, he was quite capable among mid-level soldiers. At the same time, the big-eyed boy betting box was stuffed full of silver coins, but only one person bet on Ankrid winning. This bet made me the target of others' ridicule. The big-eyed boy laughed. No matter who bet, nobody knows the result until the end. I was extremely serious about my opponent before me. Up until now, I had only become stronger through repeated deaths. Unlike before, this battle had no risk of death, so I only had one chance to defeat my opponent. I made myself nervous. I only had insignificant talent and extreme effort. Because most people here possess strength I previously wouldn't have dared to contend with. I absolutely couldn't be careless. The opposing mid-level soldier shouted, "I'm coming. Have you figured out how to receive my sword?" The moment he moved, I moved too. The parrying I had become skilled at on previous battlefields. I absolutely couldn't be careless. The next moment, I swung my sword and actually knocked his sword flying. My opponent's sword seemed to be knocked away before it could even attack. His reaction puzzled me. What was going on? Before I could react, he shouted in pain, saying his fingers had nearly broken just now. I was even more confused. Was this person very weak? Did he become captain through connections? The next moment, I couldn't wait to knock him down. Then I wanted to immediately challenge the second person, because this person was really too weak. I hadn't even displayed 1/10 of my level. The green-haired man said to the big-eyed boy, "I didn't expect your trash squad leader to win. You know this result beforehand, didn't you?" The big-eyed boy pretended to be surprised. I didn't know the squad leader's strength was so formidable either. I bet on him winning to help him save face. But nobody believed his words. You're his teammate. How could you not know his strength? I gripped the long sword in my hand tightly. Maybe he was too careless, so he was defeated by me. So I decided to test my strength with the second mid-level soldier. This opponent was a white bearded old man whose weapon was a long spear. I had some impression of this person. He seemed to be called a member of the elite heavy infantry squad. His special technique was to confuse the enemy's vision by rotating his spear tip, then launch a surprise attack. The next moment, the white bearded old man's figure moved. But what nobody expected was that I cut through his long spear with just one sword strike. I hadn't expected him to just thrust straight at me like that. Was he using some kind of misdirection? Was he trying to do something else with the spear shaft? But when I saw his expression, I felt he had just charged straight forward. If that was the case, I should be able to beat him, right? Then I kicked him hard in the abdomen. I hadn't expected to win another round so easily. The audience below looked completely incredulous. At this moment, I clearly understood that if it were coincidence, winning twice in a row would be highly unlikely. So it wasn't that they were weak, but that I had become stronger. The big-eyed boy laughed heartily, asking if any other mid-level soldiers above wanted to participate. But many people didn't dare to come on stage anymore. Benseji cursed, "Idiots! Those who looked down on Ankrid before should know to be afraid now." The person next to him said, "Captain, weren't you the first person to look down on him?" Benseji said, "Shut up. Nobody considers you mute if you don't speak." Andrew was perhaps the most shocked one, because after his last defeat, Andrew had been learning swordsmanship with Mag day and night, wanting to challenge me again. Mag said, "Give up, you can't possibly beat him. His strength has surged now, even I would have difficulty beating him." Hearing this, Andrew chickened out. His body, which had just stood up, sat back down. Better not go up and humiliate himself. At this time, a mid-level soldier was kicked in the leg by someone, and the man behind him told him to go up and challenge Ankrid. He wanted to turn around and curse at the other person, but when he looked, it was actually the most belligerent person from that trash squad. Under pressure, he could only timidly stand up and walk onto the stage. I was still contemplating my strength increase. Up to this point, all I had experienced were hard-fought battles, so I had never been able to experience the feeling of strength growth. Whether it was the sword-wielding soldier I encountered in the first reincarnation, or the assassin I met after that, or Mickey Schuler whom I encountered not long ago, or even my teammates who sparred with me daily. They were all very powerful opponents. These people's strength far exceeded that of ordinary soldiers present. My former swordsmanship teacher had told me never to underestimate opponents. I had always thought this advice was useless for me. At this time, the man opposite said, "Why does your expression look like you're underestimating me?" I chuckled. "I'm not underestimating you." But in my heart I was thinking, I hadn't expected I could now easily crush opponents like this. As soon as the match began, I quickly approached his body. I seized the moment and quickly slashed down with my sword. Although he blocked it, I felt he could only barely receive my sword strike. My country was also called the Land of Knights, and today I would prove myself here. With a bang, I struck down with my sword again, and cracks appeared in the opposing soldier's sword. He was completely dumbfounded. How could he fight with a broken sword? The next moment, I expressionlessly swung my sword again. However, this sword only touched lightly. I didn't actually strike down. But at this moment, he was already covered in cold sweat, and his eyes had become vacant. The next moment, he directly foamed at the mouth and fainted. The referee outside announced that the winner was Ankrid. The scene was dead silent, with everyone in amazement. That person's strength wasn't weak, yet he couldn't last 3 sword strikes against me. It seemed this sorcery destroyer was indeed the one who destroyed the banner. At this moment, I proved myself amid cheers and applause. I hadn't relied on my teammates' glory, but had achieved this through my own strength. Andrew slowly stood up. He was convinced by those 3 sword strikes I had just delivered. Then he shouted loudly, "Sorcery destroyer!" This left me somewhat confused about what he was doing. Was he trying to boost my reputation? Just as I thought, Andrew shouted to his companions behind him, "Why aren't you joining me in shouting? If it weren't for squad leader Ankrid, more than half the people here would be dead." The next moment, more and more people joined the shouting under Andrew's influence. This cheering went from initially chaotic to perfectly synchronized. "Sorcery destroyer Ankrid." I sighed deeply. Was it really necessary to chant my name like this? But Andrew was quite thoughtful. I should treat him to drinks next time. The big-eyed boy ran over and said, "Are you happy now? From now on, you're in mid-level soldier." Actually, no, I wasn't very happy right now because I hadn't defeated any senior soldiers yet. The big-eyed boy said in surprise, "Haven't you already defeated mid-level soldiers? Why do you still want to fight?" The next moment, a man stood up and said, "How interesting. He actually wants to directly challenge senior soldiers." When they saw who had come, their eyes immediately widened, because they saw the eagle insignia on the man's shoulder. This was the kingdom's direct border guard unit. He was from that elite force where all members were senior level soldiers or above. But how could a border guard butcher possibly appear here? I was somewhat curious. Could my next opponent be him? Sure enough, he cracked his knuckles and said, 444th Division Leader Ankrid, would you be willing to have a match with me? People discussed among themselves, how could he possibly beat someone from the elite forces? Even Ragnar and Rem felt that the squad leader's current strength shouldn't be a match for him. The border guard's strength could rival Asmund's Grey Dog unit. That meant this guy might be able to match Mickey. I was quite curious whether I could duel without going through repeated deaths. All my previous opponents, I had only defeated through repeated reincarnations. If this was an unfamiliar new opponent, I had no confidence in beating them. He was very satisfied with the look in my eyes, thinking, he doesn't show fear even when facing someone like me from Special Forces? This made the man very interested in me. He thought fight me would be much more interesting than just watching the excitement. Many people below cheered me on. Don't let him act arrogant just because he's from Special Forces. Show him your strength, let him know that the flower of the battlefield is infantry. The next moment, everyone shouted in unison, the flower of the battlefield is infantry. This left him speechless. You ignorant fools, don't you know that Special Forces also belong to infantry? When the opponent saw that my momentum had overshadowed his, he also became serious. The next second, his figure appeared in front of me, as if he had teleported there. But at that moment, I had already naturally entered the dual-colored world. I could see his sword techniques crystal clear. Just as his sword approached me, I raised my sword to block. He was incredibly surprised. This amazing concentration and perfectly balanced movement was truly unexpected. The next moment, he didn't strike with his sword, but instead, reached out and grabbed my collar. He actually wanted to intimidate me, to make me fall embarrassingly in front of these people. But what he didn't expect was that my reaction wasn't slower than his. In that instant, I grabbed his wrist. Then I raised the sword in my hand, about to pierce through his head. His heart immediately sensed something was wrong. The sword fell heavily, striking the ground steadily. In that split second just now, he didn't hesitate to dislocate his own hand to break free from my restraint. At this point, he had caught his breath and was preparing to gather strength for a heavy blow against me. He was also somewhat angry. If he hadn't dodged quickly just now, he might have really died. With a swoosh, he twisted his waist and thrust the sword in his hand into my chest. But what he never expected was that I was fighting this duel with him, with a resolve to die. I directly gripped the blade of his sword with my left hand. Then my right hand firmly grabbed his hair and pressed down, while my knee struck heavily into his stomach. That last exchange was evenly matched, but I still held a slight advantage. This time he was truly angry. He absolutely couldn't lose, or he would be mocked by everyone. And I had no intention of ending the battle either. Such a good opponent, I had to fight him properly. So both of us charged at each other, with a resolve to die. The two sharp swords were only 3 centimeters away from each other's faces. Just at that moment, the elf captain's figure appeared behind him. The next moment, the elf captain directly knocked away both of our daggers. The elf captain told us to stop fighting. If this continued, it would be fratricide. Hearing her words, I finally came to my senses completely. This was sparring, not a death match. He also looked terrified. Someone had appeared behind him with a dagger aimed at his neck. Looking further back, he was surprised to see that all the captain's team members were standing behind him. Rem said, "Your luck isn't bad. If you hadn't been stopped by the elf captain just now, you'd be dead now." He was too scared to speak and instead said to me, "Looking at your murderous appearance, it's just practice sparring. If we did this a few more times, I'm afraid you'd poke several big holes in my body." At that moment, I was still reflecting on the battle just now. When he restrained me, I almost could only surrender. But if we had fought to the end, I might have been able to beat him. At this point, he sheathed his sword and said with a serious expression, "I have to admit your strength is formidable." He extended his hand, wanting to get acquainted with me. "I'm Torres, squad leader of the Border Patrol unit." I also politely greeted him. "I'm Ankrid, squad leader of the 4th Squad, 4th Platoon, 4th Company." Everyone was incredibly surprised to hear that the person was actually a squad leader of the Border Patrol unit. Wasn't that a special grade soldier? The next moment, cheers rang out from the audience. "Ankrid, your strength commands our respect." Andrew's flattery made me very happy inside. I pretended to be calm and waved my hand, signaling them not to stop. I wanted to hear more cheers. Torres was very satisfied with my performance, saying, "I have high hopes for you." Just like that, my battle with Torres promoted me to senior soldier, directly skipping 2 ranks. Time flew by and it was already evening. A man invited me to join their team. This was the 3rd olive branch extended to me today. Because I had become a senior soldier and earned the title of Sorcery Destroyer, many people were inviting me, but I declined them all. I didn't want to leave the 4th Squad right now. But seeing the man's expression, I felt somewhat sorry. So I planned to send Rem over, but he said, "You can keep that troublemaker yourself." Then he waved at me and left, thanking me for saving all of them before. The big-eyed boy poked his head out from the window and said, "Someone else extended an olive branch to you. Do you want me to help pack your luggage?" After learning I declined them all, the big-eyed boy sighed. "With your current reputation, the treatment wouldn't be bad no matter where you went." I was just about to explain my reason for staying, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around to look and was surprised that he had actually come. The person was Torres, who had sparred with me. This time he came to find me with only one purpose, hoping I could join their Border Patrol unit. This Border Patrol unit was directly under the kingdom. This was even better than the olive branch extended by the heavy infantry unit. All the team members were were silently watching me, wanting to know whether I would actually go to the border patrol unit. Rem thought to himself, if it were the former squad leader, he would definitely go if the border patrol unit invited him. Torres had discovered in the previous battle that I was actually the same as him, a person who wanted to fight. If I joined their unit, he could give me overwhelming training volume and hellish real combat. He extended his hand and said, join our border patrol unit. Your strength will reach its ceiling in this lifetime. Rem closed his eyes thinking, it seems the days ahead will be boring. Ragnar closed his eyes thinking, the border patrol unit is an interesting place. The squad leader should agree. Jackson closed his eyes thinking, the squad leader would definitely be better off there than here. At this moment, I slowly said, I refuse. Torres was somewhat puzzled. He didn't understand what my reason for refusing was. Were the conditions not good enough? At this moment, all the team members behind me opened their eyes. I said, if you're talking about hellish training and real combat, then there's no place more suitable for me than here. Now I'm with these strong people every day. My goal isn't just to reach the ceiling, but to break through the ceiling. Time passed quickly, and now it was already winter. Rem was very afraid of the cold. He was now hiding under the blanket, shivering from cold. At this moment I was just about to go out for training, and Rem asked me to bring him a heating stone when I returned. Odin stepped forward to tear at Rem's blanket, saying, you won't be cold if you move around. Come train with me. However, Rem wanted to hit him, saying, if you don't stop, be careful or I'll chop you with an axe later. Seeing that Rem ignored him, Odin said to me, squad leader, how about you come train with me? But I had to go on duty. I'd find Odin after I returned. As I walked out the door, I could still hear Rem shouting behind me to bring the heating stone. Time quickly entered deep winter. The people in the city were bustling about, and the street vendors were all out busy very early. This time, the patrol assigned me 2 companions. These 2 people were Jack and Bo respectively. Today, the 3 of us formed a group. Jack and Bo were soldiers belonging to the reconnaissance unit. I felt like I'd heard these names somewhere before. They flattered me. It's such an honor to be on duty with the sorcery destroyer. Bo said to me admiringly, how did you jump from junior to senior rank all at once? It's really amazing. I didn't refuse their enthusiasm, saying, if there's time, we can have a good sparring match. Just then, a cold wind blew past. The 2 people behind me immediately felt extremely cold. At this moment, the street was still relatively normal. Everyone was busy with their own affairs. After all, everyone had to make a living. If they didn't work hard, they might not have food to eat. At this moment, I noticed the cloaked man ahead, because his walking posture was very strange. Just as I had predicted, that cloaked man's foot seemed to twist. The next moment, I hurried forward to support him, saying, are you alright? Be careful. With a thud, I died. A cold, sharp knife stabbed steadily into my heart. I didn't even understand what was happening before I was simply killed by someone. Just as I was shouting that there was an assassin, my mouth was covered by the 2 people beside me. I realized they were in league with this cloaked person, and were even helping him cover. The cloaked person said in a low voice, were you frightened? His appearance was somewhat like a mixed-blood elf. He should be an assassin from Asbin, seeking revenge for my previous destruction of their sorcery. With a tearing sound, that elf slashed the knife in his hand to the right. After completing the mission, those 2 people also prepared to flee. They nodded to Roten above, signaling the mission was complete. At this moment, I finally remembered who they were. I'd heard the big-eyed boy mentioned before the reconnaissance soldiers injured by sorcery, Jack, Bo, and Roten, who were said to be seriously injured. It seemed they had defected from the reconnaissance unit to collaborate with Asbin from within. I hadn't expected this mission to have some difficulty. When I opened my eyes again, I was already lying on the bed. This time I got up early and didn't waste words with that guy Rem. Then I came outside to find Odin. Odin was pouring ice water over his body to make his muscles reach a certain level of firmness. Odin slowly turned his head and smiled at me. Squad leader, are you calling me? This time I came to find Odin to learn about hand-to-hand training methods that could heat the body. In this cold winter, if we didn't want our bodies to become stiff, this training could let us face any situation in optimal condition. I said seriously, teach me. I want to learn this from you. Because at that time, I saw the short knife the elf took out, but I couldn't respond in time. The main reason was body stiffness, which prevented my body from executing the commands my brain gave. Then I began my training. Although this process was painful, I had to persevere. When Jack got close to me, I should have been aware and knocked those 2 guys down first. At this moment, Odin told me to persevere. Even if tears flowed, I had to persevere. After training, I went on the mission again. I hypocritically greeted them, but in my heart I planned to defeat them one by one. Along the way they flattered me, but this time I didn't respond to their words at all. Just then, a cold wind blew past, and they came closer with tacit understanding. I flexed my fingers and found that all my fingers were flexible. Thanks to Odin today, I was now in optimal condition. Next was my time to counterattack. After preparing, I once again went on street patrol with the 2 team members. Soon, the elf-cloaked assassin appeared ahead of me. The moment he appeared, I immediately raised both my arms. With a bang, my fist struck heavily on the noses of the 2 people behind me. Both thought this was bad. He hadn't expected to be detected. I didn't take those 2 seriously, but stared at the assassin ahead. The most urgent thing now was to quickly deal with these 2 guys, then have the energy to handle the elf assassin. Just then, the elf assassin 30 meters away instantly threw the throwing knife in his hand. With a thud, my chest was again pierced through the heart by that throwing knife. The whole thing happened in an instant. When the throwing knife pierced my body, I realized this speed was completely beyond human reaction. I hadn't expected he could hit my heart through the crowd at this distance. This assassin was too skilled. Without years of training, it was absolutely impossible to achieve his results. The elf assassin said, "A stubborn hunting expert will never forget his prey." As my body fell, I was still thinking about how to break this throwing knife that was faster than sound. This shocking scene terrified the ordinary people. I hadn't expected to die again, and this time more cleanly than the last, but only this way could temper my willpower. I should think about how to deal with this soundless throwing knife. When approaching enemies, the mixed-blood elf would use sword thrusts. Otherwise, he would use throwing knives. This behavioral pattern wasn't difficult to counter. I felt this wall shouldn't be very hard to overcome. At this moment, Odin was helping me practice backstretching, saying, "You must train your body's flexibility well." Rem and Ragnar on the side said speechlessly, "It's just backstretching. Is it necessary to tremble like this?" Just then Jackson came in from outside. He then saw the three people doing stretching exercises on the ground. He felt embarrassed because he never did this kind of basic training. After stretching, I thought about how to block the throwing knife. That knife's sharpness and speed were both extraordinary. Before I knew it, I had drawn the shape of the throwing knife on the ground. Jackson happened to see it as he passed by, saying, "Is this the whistle knife? One of the evil blades?" I looked at him puzzled and he said, "The so-called whistle knife is one of the evil blades. The sound it makes when thrown is like a whistle. If it's a sneak attack, no one can avoid this throwing knife. If you encounter it, try to run away." Hearing this, I gave up the idea of directly confronting the elf assassin's throwing knife head-on. If even assassination experts like him were wary of it, then I needn't mention it. So I thought of another method, using the reincarnations to remember the throwing knife's position, then block it in advance. This way he would be helpless. With a bang, I again struck both fists on the two people's noses. Then this time, before Bo could react, I grabbed his collar. I wanted to catch these small fry and use their bodies as shields, but the result was beyond my expectation. This throwing knife had somehow pierced my body again. Looking up, I saw the elf had directly thrown 2 darts, killing Bo as well. Besides that, Jack didn't escape either. He was also pierced through the throat by a throwing knife. What shocked me was that he had thrown 3 throwing knives in just an instant. The elf assassin said again, "A stubborn hunting expert will never forget his prey." People on the street were panic-stricken, but nothing mattered anymore. I would start the next reincarnation. After he used Jack and Bo, he killed them. It seemed he had no allies here at all. I said, "It's great to meet you, because only an expert like you can make me continuously stronger." The elf assassin chuckled and said, "You're really crazy, still joking when death is at your door." Then he ended my life with one stroke. He had no idea what I was thinking. A wall was ultimately just a wall, and walls existed for me to surpass. In this realm of meditation, the ferryman appeared and said, "Don't you find this endless loop painful? The so-called curse means that however much happiness there is, it will bring that much despair in return." When I woke up again, I was already lying in the camp tent. I felt the ferryman's words were somewhat wrong. This shouldn't be a curse, but a blessing instead. After leaving the tent, I found Jackson and asked him to tell me some information about the whistle knife. Jackson found it sudden, asking, "Squad leader, why are you suddenly asking about this?" The whistle knife was made of several thin blade layers overlapping, so it made a whistle sound when thrown. Because this knife was extremely fast and almost impossible to distinguish with the naked eye, it was once called the throwing knife with only sound remaining. So if you encounter this knife, you must not try to see it with your naked eyes, because you simply can't see it. I nodded and said, "I'll keep it in mind, but how should I defend against such an enemy?" Jackson said, "Very few people use whistle knives. How could you encounter such an enemy? Even if you see a thrown knife, it's meaningless. It's better to observe the opponent's hand gestures in advance. After all, the throwing knife's direction is determined by the fingertips. Although there are techniques to hide throwing gestures, as long as you master those techniques in advance, reading the opponent's gestures becomes easy." Although he spoke in plain terms, I knew that reaching that level would require a lot of time. Jackson said with a serious expression, "With your current stone throwing level, you naturally can't learn it. If you want to learn, I can teach you throwing knife methods. But if you're not confident, then forget it." Hearing his words, I was extremely happy. I definitely wanted to learn this technique. In the afternoon, I came to the street again to carry out missions. Just like the previous times, the 2 people behind me kept praising me. I recalled what Jackson had told me before. When throwing knives, the whole body must relax at that instant. According to my time calculation, this elf assassin should appear soon. Then concentrate all attention on that instant. The method to dodge is the same. Sure enough, after I waited for 2.5 seconds, a pair of very familiar shoes appeared in my sight. At the same time, I quickly placed my hand on the knife handle. Without looking back, I directly slashed horizontally toward Jack beside me. Then I twisted my waist and caught up with Bo, who was trying to draw his sword, but his speed wasn't as fast as mine. I directly shattered half his body with one sword stroke. The ordinary people on the street were stunned. Was this person crazy? How did he suddenly start killing people? But I had no time to pay attention to them. The most important thing was still how to block the elf assassin's throwing knife. A cloaked figure slowly appeared in front of me. His hand was already prepared to throw the knife. I had to catch the trajectory of his throwing knife. First, I thought of protecting my heart. This way I could avoid dying on the spot. Then I concentrated on observing the enemy's fingertips. Just as I was still staring at his hand, the elf assassin's throwing knife had already hit my arm. I cursed silently. Why is this guy's speed so fast? Before I could finish thinking, another throwing knife directly pierced my heart. I failed again. It was really as Jackson had said, the whistle knife could pierce one's heart in an instant, but in this loop, I was already able to see the whistle knife's flight trajectory. Thinking back, the moment the elf assassin threw the knife, I did indeed see a flash of light. Just as the elf assassin was about to speak, I spoke first. A stubborn hunting expert will never forget his prey. The elf assassin was incredibly shocked. Why would this man know what he was going to say? I chuckled. Although the pain made me feel inhuman torment, I was still laughing, because I would meet the elf assassin again, and I would definitely subdue him easily. Then in this loop, I wanted to win with speed, so I stabbed Jack's neck with one sword, then quickly turned around and killed Bo as well. Now I had dealt with two. The remaining two were waiting for my judgment. The current me was completely different. I was no longer that useless youth from before. In the following loops, I stared seriously at the elf assassin each time. As long as I worked hard enough now, the throwing knife in his hand would become mine. With a few swooshes, the elf assassin threw the whistle knife at a strange arc. However, this time I made some preparations. I had protective gear bound to my wrists in advance. Seeing this, the elf assassin took out another throwing knife. At this moment, I raised my perception to an unprecedented height. The next moment, the elf assassin flicked his wrist and sent the throwing knife around to his left side. I cursed silently. Damn it, he thought of feints and deception to confuse me in such a short time. Although I realized it, my body couldn't keep up with my brain, and he stabbed my heart with one knife again. With a thud, I knelt on the ground. This time I wasn't angry, but calmly analyzed the opponent's previous actions. He could actually adjust his timing based on my actions. I pulled out the throwing knife from my heart, and the corner of my mouth even showed a slight curve. This weapon was simply too cool. I was already starting to want to possess it. I kept spinning the throwing knife in my hand. Then I aimed at the apple placed ahead and threw the knife from my finger, but I missed. Jackson curiously asked what I was doing, and I said I was practicing throwing whistle knives, but Jackson said that wasn't a whistle knife at all. I knew this wasn't a whistle knife, but I believed I would soon possess a real whistle knife. Just then, an embarrassing scene occurred. The throwing knife on my finger suddenly broke. Then that knife shot through Jackson's cheek like an arrow leaving the string. Jackson said speechlessly, "If there's a next time, even if you're the squad leader, I'll beat you up." Finally, in my 8th reincarnation, I was already able to barely keep up with the elf assassin's movements. At least I wouldn't be fooled by those crude deceptions anymore. Suddenly, I stared wide-eyed in disbelief at my chest. I hadn't expected my back to be ambushed by someone's sword. So that guy Roten had been waiting above for this purpose all along. In the 9th time, at the start of the action, I threw a knife upward. I directly pierced Roten's throat, so he couldn't interfere with my battle with the elf assassin. At this moment, the elf assassin said, "You dare to be distracted while fighting me." Then he threw another knife. I died again. The next day I practiced throwing knives with Jackson. Jackson said in surprise, "I didn't expect your growth speed to be so fast." I said, "I've mastered the basics proficiently. Are there any other key points I can grasp?" Jackson picked up the apple and said, "You're already amazing enough. Have you learned throwing knives before?" I said, "I met a skilled person on the battlefield and learned a bit by observing his technique." Jackson thought, just by observing he learned to this degree, is he really a once-in-a-century genius? He said, "Have you heard of sword flicking? In the past, there was a Western assassin named Geller who created a technique that could apply to all throwing weapons. The reason it got this name was from a weapon called the whistle knife." Hearing him actively talk about whistle knives in this reincarnation, my body stiffened. He said, "Originally, Geller pursued a silent throwing knife using an extremely thin blade, but it was too difficult to control, so he improved it into today's whistle knife. I know you've heard of this knife. Stop pretending with me." Because Jackson had already discovered that my posture was completely that of manipulating whistle knives, I didn't explain much. In my 10th loop, I decided to change patrol locations. Even though the two people behind me cursed at me, I insisted on changing patrol locations. I said, "If you want to patrol with me, then follow. If anything happens, I'll take full responsibility." The two of them communicated behind me, "What should we do now? Should we directly follow him to patrol other places first?" I pretended not to hear and kept walking forward on my own. Soon we came to a desolate hillside. The market was the stage these assassins had prepared for me. I had no need to do as they wished. This should be a good burial ground. Then I directly confessed to them, "What can you gain as soldiers doing espionage work? Money?" The two were incredibly surprised. Had their identities been exposed? The next moment, the two panicked people immediately drew their long swords. With a thud, I directly cut one person in half at the waist. Then with a charge, I instantly killed Bo as well. I said, "I came prepared, and your strength is inferior to mine anyway. How could you possibly survive 3 moves under my hand?" I knew the next moment should be when their leader made his entrance. I saw 2 cloaked figures slowly stop in front of me. They were the elf assassin and the archer Roten respectively. They were somewhat shocked. They hadn't expected their companions to be killed before they even arrived. I twisted my head to signal them both to come at once. The battle would end quickly anyway. It was precisely because of this gesture that the cloaked figure immediately took out 3 whistle knives and threw them over. I had completely adapted to the whistle knife's speed. As long as I could see it, I could dodge it. At the same time, that idiot Roten actually circled behind me, trying to ambush me. Last time I was shot and killed by him like this. This time I wouldn't be fooled. I swung my hand back, and the throwing knife held in my palm immediately shot out, rapidly heading toward Roten. Roten was instantly killed by my strike. He didn't know where the knife in his head had come from. At the same time, the elf assassin spotted the opening in that instant, because I had my back to him at that moment. But what he didn't expect was that under my cloak, there was an arm with steel gauntlets hidden. At this moment, the elf assassin finally couldn't laugh anymore. This feeling was as if the opponent had come prepared. I slowly raised my hand, my eyes filled with disdain. "What is this thing? Is this your toy?" The elf assassin was afraid, saying, "Just who are you? Why do you have such powerful methods?" I slowly pulled the throwing knife from my arm and said, "You don't need to know who I am. How many of these throwing knives do you still have? How about we have a throwing knife showdown?" The elf assassin was somewhat unsettled, thinking, he can also use throwing knives. Are we kindred spirits? I continued, "I really envy you. I only have one throwing knife while you surely have many more. I wonder if they'll be hard to block." Then I slowly stepped toward the outer circle. The elf assassin said, "You're surprisingly confident. Aren't you afraid I'll seal your throat with one knife?" The next moment I raised the throwing knife in my hand and said, "Only at the end can we see who the real winner is." This time I didn't dare to be careless at all, keeping my eyes fixed on his gestures. Even if he could cleverly hide his hands, he couldn't hide his entire arm's movements. Focus on the enemy's whole body and dodge his attacks. This was the principle I had understood, being able to carefully observe every subtle movement of the opponent. The next moment, his hand kept spinning the throwing knife. My intuition told me he seemed about to fire two throwing knives at once. He indeed threw two knives. The knives crossed as they rushed toward me, but I dodged them. In that instant, my body also moved, quickly throwing a knife to counterattack. I looked at the opponent in disbelief. He had just thrown two knives, which meant he had even more. This was naturally what I wanted to see, because those would all become my spoils of war. The next moment, the elf assassin looked at me with a grin, as if saying, "You didn't expect I still have two more knives." However, I directly ignored his showing off expression. With a finger clasp, I pulled out another throwing knife from my body. The elf assassin felt somewhat terrifyingly afraid at this moment. If his intuition was correct, he might be finished here today. The next moment, I quickly threw a knife. I wouldn't miss this fleeting opportunity to kill. The elf assassin's reaction speed was also incredibly swift. He twisted his waist and dodged my throwing knife. The elf assassin cursed loudly, "You actually dared to deceive me." Then he drew the long sword from his waist. At the same time, I also held my saber in front of me defensively. The elf assassin quickly charged forward. He had a premonition that if this sword struck, he would definitely win. The elf assassin instantly reached in front of me. He chuckled. He had studied this sword stroke for 5 years, and he didn't believe I could take this move. But what he never expected was that I actually grabbed his sword with one hand. The elf assassin panicked. This was his first time seeing such a formidable person. While he was stunned, my arm suddenly pulled back, preparing to make a chopping motion. I said, "I feel somewhat ashamed that it took me so long to defeat you." Then I struck his neck with one sword. No matter what, I had to end this reincarnation this time. With a thud, I struck down with one sword, directly killing this elf assassin who had made me loop over 20 times. My heart was incredibly exhilarated, because I had only used 20 reincarnations to kill the opponent this time. It seemed that failing in battle was the path I should take, because only this way could I become stronger. I was now almost crazy with happiness. Then I came to the elf assassin's front and glanced at him. I unhesitatingly opened his cloak. Many whistle knives were bound to his chest. I couldn't stop the laughter in my eyes. These treasures were all mine now. Soon I came to the elf captain's tent to report this incident. I said, "The throwing knives on the elf assassin's body have all been transferred to me." The elf captain said in shock, "You fought 1 against 4 and only suffered minor injuries?" I nodded. The elf captain thought, "When I first met you, you weren't this powerful. Now you've become so formidable." Then the elf captain said, "I understand. You should hurry back and rejoin your unit." As soon as I entered the door, I found Rem's axe flying right toward me. Fortunately, my reaction speed wasn't slow, and I immediately dodged his axe. Rem said, "You actually successfully avoided it. Now that assassins are targeting you, you must strengthen this aspect of training." At this moment, I tossed a hot stone from my hand, telling him to take the stone and move away quickly. The moment he received the stone, Rem immediately beamed with joy. He couldn't do without this hot stone this winter. The big-eyed boy looked up at me and said, "If you want a haircut, you can find me. I'll give you a discount." Then we had haircuts at the door. With skills like his, if he went into business, he'd definitely be successful. The big-eyed boy slowly looked up. It was unexpectedly snowing. Snow in this weather was very unusual. It must be that damn demon's excrement that had turned to powder and drifted over. I had nothing to do now, so I reviewed the previous situation. How did the assassins enter the small city? When did Jack, Bo, and Roten defect? I asked the big-eyed boy about their backgrounds. However, the big-eyed boy didn't know much about this either, because Jack was originally a thief who was caught and then served in the unit. He seemed to be a fugitive who had committed the crime of offending nobility, but he heard that Roten was previously a guard of the Logan Regiment. All 3 of them had joined this unit a year ago and belonged to the same guild. At this point, I also remembered that there had indeed been many guilds during a previous period. There was one called the Thieves Guild. On the surface, it was a gathering place for thieves, but in reality, it was a den of criminal gathering. If theft occurred, it was definitely their doing. Jackson wondered why I was asking him about this. I scratched my head and said, "I feel like you might know something." Jackson said, "After our big personnel change, the contact network I had planted there was also cut off. I'm not clear about the situation inside either." Soon the big-eyed boy finished cutting my hair. Rem said, "You look more handsome with shorter hair," but I didn't pay attention to my hairstyle at all. I looked at the increasingly heavy snow in the sky. So Jackson suggested, "Squad leader, how about staying outside today?" Rem said very dissatisfiedly, "You just don't want to shovel snow. What tricks are you trying to pull again?" Hearing Rem's words, I also felt something was wrong, though I thought his analysis made sense. So the 2 of them looked at me with burning eyes. I said, "Don't be like this. How about I use my squad leader authority to do a mission? As long as you agree, you won't have to shovel snow. The two said, then what are we waiting for? Let's go quickly. We hate shoveling snow the most. Even the big-eyed boy who rarely took action was full of fighting spirit. It seemed they really hated shoveling snow. Then I told them to wait. I hadn't gone to apply yet. Ragnar mocked, you haven't even applied yet. Your action ability is a bit slow. It'll be hard to become a good swordsman in the future. Then Odin also told me to hurry up and request a mission assignment. These guys were only unusually united at times like this. Then I came to the elf captain's tent. I claimed to have discovered a thieves guild, and wanted to personally wipe them out completely. The elf captain looked at me for a long while without speaking. This made me somewhat anxious. She wouldn't disagree, would she? The elf captain questioned me with an extremely serious expression. You don't want to shovel snow, do you? We then set off in full force. Along the way, Big Eyes Krace asked if I had gathered any intelligence. I told him not yet, we were starting from scratch. I then gave Jackson his orders. We'll wait at the inn. Go find out where the Kilbin Guild's headquarters is. He asked how he was supposed to do that. Try whatever you can think of, I said simply. Jackson caught my meaning immediately. We checked into an inn called Vanessa's Pumpkin Bisque. Over dinner, Krace asked, what if the guild turns out to be innocent? I told him that even if they had nothing to do with the assassination, they were still criminals. Krace went quiet for a moment. Then he called over a waitress named Risha and whispered something in her ear. Meanwhile, I thought to myself, Jackson's taking his time. But even someone as capable as him has to start from zero when there are no leads. Was the order I gave too irresponsible? I felt a little bad about it. As I was thinking of him, Jackson was at that very moment perched on a rooftop somewhere, watching the people moving through the streets below. After a long while, he finally spotted two men in cloaks with swords at their hips. Once the job was done, he returned to the inn and reported, found where those guys are holed up. I handed him a big drumstick and said, eat. He ignored it and said, stop stalling, let's move. Rem complained about the cold and refused to budge. Jackson threatened, want me to reverse your blood flow? That'll warm you right up. I sided with Rem and said, to be safe, let's wait until the snow stops. I glanced out the window at the thick flurry of snowflakes, then quickly changed my mind. The snow's not stopping, I said. We're leaving. The six of us moved slowly down the street. Beggars sat slumped along both sides of the road, but as we passed them, they silently drew their blades and rushed at us all at once. We'd anticipated it. Rem charged first, split one assassin's skull open with his axe, then drove his fist straight into another's face. Watching Rem finish them off, Krace reasoned, Kilbin Guild, most likely. Jackson lifted a blanket to reveal a hidden entrance underneath. Go through here and you'll reach their base directly, he said. Then, in the next moment, he found it was locked. Odin stepped up beside him with a smile. Allow me to knock. He punched straight through the wooden door. Right then, he said with a grin, let's head in. Once inside the passage, Rem asked me, when we find them, what do we ask first? We'll talk later, I replied. First, we use force. We walked steadily toward the wooden door at the far end of the corridor, but someone was already waiting for us on the other side. They had come to kill us to bury the evidence of their failed assassination attempt. The bald man was nervous about whether things would go smoothly. The man with the braided ponytail scoffed, doesn't matter how many of these lowlifes show up. Before he could finish, Odin kicked the solid wooden door clean off its hinges. Rem was ready to start slaughtering, but I spoke first. In all my life, I have never cut down the weak, those willing to go to prison quietly, and those who don't want to die. I pressed the tip of my sword lightly into the floor, and drew a line. Drop your weapons and get behind this line, otherwise I'll kill every last one of you. The ponytail man was infuriated by my arrogance. You think some low-ranking soldier has the right to look down on us? Odin turned to me and said, they won't listen unless we show them what we're made of. I took his advice, raised my sword, and said in a low voice, who's the strongest fighter in the Kilbin Guild? The ponytail man immediately pointed to a man with swept bangs standing behind him. This is our guild's finest swordsman, Flying Dragon. Why don't you settle it with him? Flying Dragon walked toward me and said, I've never lost a fight in my life. Then he let out a battle cry and came at me with his sword. His attack was no threat to me whatsoever. I deflected it with ease and drove my blade through his shoulder. The ponytail man broke into a cold sweat at the sight of it. Looking down at Flying Dragon lying in a pool of blood, I said, if he's your best swordsman, the rest of you don't need to bother stepping up. One last choice, cross this line or die. At the sight of my commanding display, all 5 of my companions wore the exact same speechless look. They all had the same thought, is he seriously trying to look cool right now? The words had barely left my mouth when someone threw down their weapon and surrendered. The ponytail man was furious enough to cut that person down on the spot, but the whistle knife I hurled buried itself precisely between his eyes. The ponytail man died instantly. At that, the rest surrendered one after another. Rem said, if you want no loose ends, you'll have to kill all of them. That's the only clean solution. The bald man who led the group immediately spoke up. Some of us have sick mothers we're taking care of. If you must kill someone, kill me alone. I am Kilbin. I pointed at him and asked, so you're the captain, not that guy? But Kilbin said the ponytail man was the captain. Krace explained, their captain used a subordinate's name as the guild's name. If the military ever made arrests, the captain could sell out his men and escape. Kilbin continued to plead, the others haven't done much wrong. If you're going to kill anyone, let it be me alone. At that, the rest of the group began begging on his behalf. Several grown men wept and clung to each other. It was a surprisingly moving scene. Witnessing this, Rem did a complete turn and begged me not to kill Kilbin. Then Kilbin seemed to remember something. If I spared their lives, he was willing to hand over everything the guild owned. There's good money in the vault, he said, but you'll need the key the captain hid to open it. With Odin around though there was no need for a key, he grabbed the vault door and tore it off its frame with minimal effort. Everyone's eyes lit up at the sight of all kinds of valuables inside, and the group eagerly began rummaging through them. I picked out a piece of leather armor, tough yet flexible. At that point Krace proposed we absorb the guild. You want me to be a thief? I asked, puzzled. Yes, he said, but a thief who doesn't kill. Even if we dissolve the guild, someone will just start another one down the line. Better to keep Kilbin as a figurehead and hold the real power ourselves. Hearing that, I thought back to Krace whispering to the waitress at the inn earlier. His plan was too well thought out. It seemed like something he'd worked out far in advance. Had it started back then? So I asked if he had deliberately leaked information to the waitress. Krace admitted it without hesitation, and proposed, with your permission, we could have them hand over money each month, while I gather intelligence on the side. I quietly thought it over. I had no particular needs, but more money was always better. I approved the proposal. Krace immediately issued orders to Kilbin, pick out the worst offenders, and send them to prison. We'll be reorganizing the rest of you in due course. But Kilbin said if the guild wasn't dissolved they were all dead men, because the deceased captain had been working for Asben. Every spring and fall, Asben sent someone named Plock on a routine inspection. If Plock found out things had changed here, it would all be over. Looking at the fear on Kilbin's face, Krace reassured him calmly, even so, it'll be fine. He gestured to the companions behind him and said, every single one of these people is strong. What is there to be afraid of? I then spoke up, if you've got everything, let's head back. Rem stared at me for a moment, then slowly asked, has the snow been cleared yet? The color drained from my face. I'd completely forgotten about that. Ragnar remarked languidly, there's probably still something left to do here, whatever it may be. Odin chimed in, I wouldn't mind continuing to spread the word of the gods in this place a while longer. Jackson said plainly, I have things to take care of, I'll be back tomorrow morning. Listening to their parade of excuses, I muttered under my breath, so you're all this busy, are you? And with that, I gave up fighting it and simply lay down where I was. After dawdling for a few days, I finally returned to camp and reported to the elf captain. She fixed her gaze on me and said, not having to clear snow must have been quite a relief for you. I replied with a straight face, not at all, and inwardly thought she really doesn't miss a thing. Then she asked, I hear you never turned down a sparring match? I nodded. She drew her weapon on the spot, settled into a fighting stance and said, then have one with me. I accepted without hesitation, but the moment I drew my sword, she disarmed me with a single move. As I hit the ground, she said in a calm, firm voice, get up. I reached out to pick up the sword she'd knocked away, only for her to send me sprawling again with one strike. The pain that shot through my body left me stunned. What is going on? The elf captain's blade is so thin, it moves like a whip. After several rounds of sparring, I finally ran out of strength, gave up resisting and collapsed on the ground. The elf captain thought to herself, before, he had an almost precognitive sharpness, but right now, he can't even track what's right in front of him. He's a hard man to read. But he did break the sorcery, and he did take down 4 assassins. With that thought, she looked up at the sky and said, it's snowing again. I'll be keeping an eye on you. She turned and walked away. Lying on the ground, I thought grimly, so it really is about the snow. Then I turned the blame on myself. For all my relentless sword training, I had never seriously studied the art of controlling my own body. The most glaring gap was what could be called combat technique, the fluid use of hands, feet, and body together. Naturally, Odin was the one to ask about that. At that moment, he was pulling an enormous tree up by its roots. Then he dropped it to the ground with a resounding thud, and said with a smile, the foundation of combat technique is building a strong body. For extreme training, I developed a method called the isolation technique. It will be painful. Think of it as dying 2 or 3 times over. I replied without flinching, that's my specialty. And yet, the moment I hoisted the boulder, I was fairly certain I was going to die. Odin coached me patiently from the side. The core of the isolation technique is load-bearing. The more the muscle tears, the stronger it grows. He pressed his hand down on the boulder and said, hold it for 10 seconds just like that. You can do it. Watching me shake all over, he asked if I regretted not starting combat training sooner. Spending time on regrets is a waste, I said through gritted teeth. And I thought to myself, the past is the past. I have to stay true to the present. If I didn't think that way, I'd probably still be trapped in the very first today I ever lived through. I looked up at Odin and said, if you have time to talk, you might as well teach me another move. Odin said no more, told me we were moving on to the next technique, and promised he'd have me crawling back to the guard post before the day was done. And with that, the brutal training officially began. On the rooftop above, the small purple leopard watched me with unblinking eyes. True to Odin's word, I really did crawl my way back into the guard post. Rem asked lazily, did someone in the army beat you up? I dragged myself to the edge of the bed and said, I just finished a routine training session. At that, the small purple leopard leapt onto the bed and curled up close to me, letting out a soft, affectionate meow. Rem watched and asked, are you gonna keep it? Then give it a name. I tossed out 2 names off the top of my head, but the leopard seemed deeply unhappy and howled in protest. So I decided to leave naming it for another time. Sleep came first. The day's training had been brutal, and the moment I lay down, I fell fast asleep, and then I tumbled into a dream. Unlike before, this time I stood in a vast field of flowers, with a breathtaking, almost otherworldly aurora spread out before me. Suddenly I noticed someone appear behind me. It was a beautiful girl with an expression that was cold yet bewitching. She caught me staring, and introduced herself directly, my name is Esther. In the real world, my eyes opened mechanically at the same moment, but I wasn't truly awake, still half submerged in sleep, and yet the one lying in my arms was no longer the small purple leopard. It was the girl named Esther. As she gazed at my face, a faint blush crept across her cheeks. Then, as though talking in my sleep, I murmured, "Esther, good night," and gently pulled her closer. The next morning, just before dawn, I was already up and getting ready for training. Rem asked curiously, "After taking that kind of beating yesterday, aren't you in pain?" I was genuinely surprised, myself. My body felt unusually light. In her leopard form, Esther thought, "Of course it does, because I put a spell on you. You're a necessary presence for breaking my curse. If you worked yourself to death, it would cause me no end of trouble." Rem then asked if I'd gone to see a priestess the night before. I said no. I told him I'd had a dream, and in it a woman said some strange things. "What kind of woman?" he asked. I thought back to that delicate face in the dream, and simply said, "Beautiful." Esther gave a small, haughty huff and thought, "At least you have decent taste." As it turned out, Esther was a mage who had been cursed while studying witchcraft. Her powers were stripped and she was transformed into a beast. One day, while wandering the plains, she was drawn by the pull of cursed energy, and that was how she found me. During training, Odin marveled at how fast I was recovering. I struggled to set down the stone in my hands, then noticed the small leopard watching from the rooftop. I called out its name I'd thrown out at random, and at the sound of its howling protest, I immediately took it back. Esther's strong reaction was because, in the world of witchcraft arts, names carry power. If someone carelessly called her by a wrong name, it would send a shockwave through her entire being. So she had used what little power she had left to appear in my dream and tell me her true name. In the end, she had slipped up because her power was unstable, but fortunately, I was a dense sort of man. On top of that, she had also sensed that I was in fact cursed. It hadn't fully taken hold yet, but the curse on me was far more powerful than the one on her, and powerful curses devour the weaker ones around them. So as long as she stayed close to me, she could gradually reclaim all of her strength. After the physical conditioning, Odin moved on to live combat training. He came at me with a knee strike, which I dodged cleanly, but before I could even regain my footing, he was already launching his next move, and drove me into the ground with a palm strike. I lost again. Odin explained patiently, "Combat technique is built on physical strength. Distance management is like swordsmanship. Without agility, nothing else matters. Your speed is about as fast as a turtle's, but your body has genuinely gotten stronger." Before long, a month had passed, and without noticing, the first green shoots had begun to push up through the earth. That day, during a sparring session with Rem, my sword came within a hair's breadth of finding its mark. "Much better," he said with excitement. "Now it actually feels like a real fight." That evening, I wolfed down dinner, and tracked down Ragnar, who was still eating, and asked him to train with me. The outcome was predictable. I lost. He said my application still had a bit of sluggishness to it, but I no longer needed to work on fundamentals. My task was to train until the reactions were automatic even in sleep, which was a very physically demanding stage. I gave a quiet smile and said, "That's the easiest thing in the world for me." In the evening, while I was cleaning my sword, I suddenly sensed killing intent nearby with razor-sharp clarity. In the next instant, I had a firm grip on the blade of the knife Jackson had thrust at me. Seeing how fast I reacted, he said without expression, "It seems you're no longer in danger of being killed by a surprise attack. You've come a long way." Crace, sprawled on his bed, grumbled, "If you want to spar, take it outside. Don't go kicking up dust in here." The moment he finished speaking, the small leopard suddenly sat up and let out a low, warning growl toward the door. Then came a knock. The elf captain pushed the door open and gestured for me to step outside. She had come because she had a new mission for me, and it had been accepted through the soldier mercenary system. The system ran parallel to the military ranking structure, and it was a mechanism that allowed city residents to commission tasks from the standing army. I thought to myself, I needed real combat experience. This mission came at just the right time. What I didn't notice was that a soldier who had just returned from duty happened to see me talking with the elf captain. I confirmed with her how many people the mission required. She said 3, squad leader, 1 squad member, and her. I was a little puzzled. Why would her rank personally take on a commission like this? Meanwhile, the soldier who had seen the two of us talking convinced himself we were in a relationship. Then he overheard the company commander ask me, "Does it put a lot of pressure on you going on a mission with me?" That line only made him more certain that the two of us were romantically involved. And so, thanks to that soldier's enthusiastic spreading of the story, rumors of a relationship between me and the elf captain swept through the camp in no time. Some people were even saying we already had a child together. The day I got back to the guard post, Rem greeted me with a gleeful smirk. "Well, look who it is. The father." "How many months?" I heard it's almost time. The others joined in with their own jabs. Rem then asked, "When's the romantic outing happening?" I knew exactly what he meant. "You're talking about the commission, aren't you?" I said. "I'm not taking you." Rem looked genuinely taken aback. "What? If not me, then who?" At that point, Jackson was already at my side. "Ready when you are," he said. And with that, we turned and left, ignoring Rem's protests. Outside, Jackson asked if I'd brought him because I figured he wouldn't cause trouble. I told him it was because he took on soldier mercenary commissions regularly. I thought he'd be useful. To my surprise, he suddenly turned serious and said, "May I offer a word of advice as someone more experienced? Don't let yourself get too emotionally attached to any woman. It only ever leads to deep and lasting pain." I was thoroughly done with the conversation. "I don't need your advice," I said. When we later met up with the elf captain, I asked, "When does the client arrive?" Elf captain said, "Soon." I thought uneasily, those rumors haven't reached her ears, have they? The next second, she turned her gaze on me and said, "By the way, have we ever done anything together that would produce a child?" "No," I said immediately. At that moment, the sound of a carriage rolling up reached us. I looked toward the approaching vehicle and thought about the details of the commission. We were to serve as personal guards for the heir to a merchant company. During the process of determining which of the two heirs of the Rockford Merchant Company would take over as company head, both parties had hired the standing army to provide protection and mediation so as to prevent them from harming each other. As I was thinking, a woman stepped down from the carriage. "I am Leona, heir to the Rockford Merchant Company," she said coolly. "I look forward to working with you." The group set off shortly after. But beyond the initial greeting, Leona had no further words for us. All her instructions came through her nursemaid. "Let's book a room at an inn first and wait for the other heir." I thought to myself, so we really were just here as bodyguards and not get involved in anything. I remembered something Rem had once told me. Age, posture, positioning, and eye contact. All of it is information. I decided to observe Leona and her party carefully. First, the female guard, left-handed, heavy footfall, likely wearing heavy armor underneath. She carried a rapier but appeared to have considerable strength. Putting it all together, I put her somewhere below the top tier. Just then, Jackson made an unexpected suggestion. "If you're bored, want to play a quick game? It's called Spot the Sound." He then began a question and answer session with me. I caught on quickly to the nature of the game, accurately and rapidly identifying the source of a sound. After we arrived at the inn, the female guard said that they would handle booking the rooms and had us wait in the lobby. The elf captain joined the Spot the Sound game. It was immediately clear her reactions were far faster than mine. I could barely get a word in. Gradually, I noticed their exchanges were getting stranger, as if hinting that someone was quietly closing in, until Jackson asked, "Someone sneaking up on us?" The elf captain answered calmly, "Behind you," and before the words had fully settled, two assassins materialized behind them, only to be dealt with swiftly and cleanly. Leona's guard cried out, "Assassins!" One reckless assassin seized the moment and came after me. I ran my sword through him before he could get close. Then screaming erupted from upstairs. My gut tightened. Protect the client first. I started for the stairs, and an assassin flung a volley of throwing weapons at me. Jackson blocked them all with a frying pan. The elf captain took out the remaining assassins in the lobby at the same time. Watching Jackson cover me with such dedication, the elf captain fell into thought. The squad member is clearly stronger than the squad leader, yet everyone still trusts and follows him without question. What exactly is the reason for that? Before she could reach an answer, another assassin charged at her with a knife, and she ran him clean through. Meanwhile, I was fighting my way up through the assassins on the floor above. This kind of ambush wasn't enough to kill me anymore. Add to that the strength and combat technique I'd been drilling recently. Even if Odin always said I was slow and clumsy, I could feel that my movements were completely different from before. When I reached Leona's door, her female guard had just been sent flying. Then I saw an assassin shouting, "For the glory of Asbin," as he drove his blade toward Leona. The nursemaid threw herself in front of her, ready to take the blow. My mind raced too close. No room to use a whistle knife. Can I close the gap in time? What technique gets me there in an instant? I'd seen it done on Mickey Schuler once. With my current level, copying it perfectly was out of the question. But even a rough imitation would have to be enough. So without a second thought, I flashed in front of Leona and took the blade full on for her. Thanks to the leather armor I'd taken from the Kilbin Guild, I came away unscathed. I fixed the assassin with a cold stare and said quietly, "Why don't we take this downstairs?" The moment the words left my mouth, I grabbed him and we crashed through the window. I used his body to break the fall. The impact was brutal. He coughed up blood violently, but he still struggled to his feet and began walking slowly toward me. "Are you from the border guard?" he asked. "No," I replied. "Then there's no way I'm losing to you," he said. He drew two swords of unequal length and settled into a stance. Eastern-style twin swords, I thought. He kept ranting, "I'm going to kill you, then cut that woman to pieces." I crooked a finger at him and said, "You talk a lot." He came at me in a fury. I watched him carefully. Two blades, different rhythms. It had to be the Valen duet style. I stepped aside to dodge the long sword, ducked under the short sword, stepped back to evade the second swing of the long sword, then dropped low to slip under the short sword. The seamless chain of evasions left him completely dumbstruck. He thought stunned, he dodged all of it. I said coolly, "I envy you, honestly. I don't have the talent to learn a technique like that." He said, "What are you muttering about, you lunatic?" He came at me again. My gaze sharpened and I entered the two-color world. All that remained in my eyes were him and the traces of his blade. Watching the arc of energy trailing from his weapons, I thought, so that's his line of attack. The instant I read the trajectory, I moved, driving my sword forward, and straight into his body. It didn't find the heart. As I drew my blade back, I thought, still not precise enough. I'll need to keep working. Should I go back to Ragnar or polish it with Jackson? With the strongest assassin down, the rest quickly retreated. Jackson came to my side and said flatly, "You make quite a racket when you fought." I nodded toward the fleeing assassins. "Shouldn't we chase them?" "The commission wasn't to sweep out criminals," Jackson said. "Right? I was supposed to stick strictly to the mission and focus solely on protecting the client." At that moment, the elf captain walked over unhurriedly. "That was impressive," she said. "Are you all right?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The fact that you still worry about your beloved, it's almost too much for my heart to take. I may not sleep well tonight." My expression went completely dark. I had no words. Leona had overheard and she asked, "Are the two of you a couple?" I denied it immediately, but the elf captain pressed on, "So you're playing with my feelings?" I fell silent again, genuinely puzzled. Why does she keep doing this? Meanwhile, after learning my name, Leona bowed and thanked me. "Thank you for protecting me from the attack. As for the injury you sustained, I'll see to additional compensation separately." I returned the bow and said, "There's no need. This was my duty. Before dawn, after transferring the captured attackers to the military, reinforcements had also arrived in anticipation of a possible second wave. In the lobby, my mind kept turning. Who exactly were those assassins? It didn't feel like a simple shakedown. The most likely suspect had to be the other heir. Just then, Leona came down the stairs, saying, "You're up early." "I'm on duty," I replied. She sat down across from me and said softly, "I'd like you to come work for me. I'm offering you the position of exclusive guard for the Rockford Merchant Company." As she spoke, her thoughts drifted. The Rockford Merchant Company may not be the largest, but it stands on equal footing with any of the other mid-sized companies. Our key trading partners include the Wilderness Herders, who live among the lands of the demon beasts, the Black Leather Guild, whose trade is hunting dragons, the Glacier Rangers, guardians of the glaciers, and above all, the Trade Map, a document charting every major route and regional product across the continent. The treasures marked on it alone could sustain a person for a lifetime. That is far too precious to be left in the hands of the previous company head's foolish son. I must carry on the former head's legacy and protect this company, so I need capable people. He had both the skill to save me at the most critical moment and the character to ask nothing in return. She returned to the present and said, "I'll agree to whatever conditions you name. Please come serve as the company's guard." I turned her down without hesitation. Leona looked caught off guard and was about to keep pressing, when Jackson came down the stairs and said mildly, "Continuing to push after being refused is a disgraceful thing to do." The elf captain followed close behind him. "It really is quite disgraceful," she agreed. Leona rose gracefully. "Is that so?" she said. Then she turned to me. "The other heir will arrive at noon. I'll go and prepare." And with that she turned and went back upstairs. Jackson started ribbing me about charming the merchant heiress and told me to break my bad habit of leading women on. The elf captain played along. "You're seeing someone else?" I'm heartbroken. I endured it in grinding silence, then said, "I apologize. My tastes have changed." The elf captain's eyes flickered slightly. She thought, is he actually playing along now? What I didn't account for was that the soldiers outside happened to catch that offhand remark, and they erupted with accusations that I was a two-timer. A deep, heavy helplessness settled over me. When would these terrible rumors ever end? The rumors even reached Crace, who came to ask if I'd slept with the client. My nickname changed from Sorcery Breaker to Heartbreaker. I wearily asked Crace what he actually came for. He said it was about matters concerning the management of the Kilban Guild. I also had business with him. I needed to track down the assassins who had escaped, and verify a few things through them. Out on the street, a carriage rolled slowly into view. Inside it, a brown-haired man said to the heavy-set blonde man beside him, "A shame. The assassination failed." The heavy-set blonde man, Paulid Rockford, said, "You were too hasty. You should have left it to us." His father, the former head of the Rockford Merchant Company, Renos Rockford, had been a man of both brilliant business instincts and genuine personal warmth. He believed his adopted daughter Leona was bold and sharp, and was ideally suited to lead the company. Yet he couldn't bring himself to completely disregard his own blood son, and so he was torn. In the end, Renos passed away without naming a successor to lead the company into the future. In the carriage, the brown-haired man continued, "We'll take care of it. The promise you made to us still stands, I assume?" Paulid said, "Of course. Once I become the head of the Rockford Merchant Company, I won't forget what I owe you." He then brought his group to the agreed-upon inn. The moment he stepped through the door, he sneered, "Smells like dust. She actually summoned me to a dump like this. That's all Leona's capable of." I noticed the black curly-haired man at his side and thought quietly, that one. He's strong. Then Paulid arrogantly called out to Jackson, "Hey, you, go get Leona." Watching this unfold, I felt a wave of relief. Good thing I brought Jackson. If I'd brought Rem instead, he probably would have buried an axe in his head by now, but I clearly didn't know Jackson as well as I thought. I suddenly caught him reaching for the handle of the dagger behind his back. I clamped my hand down hard over his and gave him a look that said, "Don't." Just in time, Leona came down the stairs and said coldly, "Please don't shout. It's beneath you." She looked at Paulid. "You're late," he shot back. "And what about you? Why can't you keep your guards in line?" Before he could finish, Leona slapped him across the face. I muttered under my breath. She slapped him the moment she saw him. "No one here is normal except me." Paulid clutched his cheek. "Are you crazy?" Leona replied serenely, "You're the crazy one. You had the nerve to target someone under the protection of the standing army in a border garrison city. Are you trying to rot in prison for the rest of your life?" "I didn't know there were standing army guards," Paulid said. Just as he was about to let something slip, the brown-haired man beside him coughed suggestively. Paulid caught himself and scrambled to recover. "No, it wasn't me. How dare you accuse me, you adopted guy?" Leona said calmly, "That's right. I am an adopted child, and you are the biological son who can't read a trade analysis or balance a ledger." Paulid broke into a cold sweat. "The housekeeper will handle that," he said. Leona replied, "If the previous company head hadn't stipulated that the succession must be decided in consultation with his son, I wouldn't be wasting my time standing here." I thought to myself, the former head must have been a soft-hearted man. By any measure, Leona was clearly the right choice. He probably just wanted to give his son at least one chance. Leona walked slowly toward Paulid and said, "The only claim you have on this company is blood, and yet, no matter how you look at it, you bear no resemblance to him. Whom did you inherit your ugly appearance and ignorance from?" The words drove Paulid over the edge. He drew his sword on the spot and moved to strike Leona. I couldn't stand by and watch. I drew mine as well and stepped forward to meet him. At that, the black curly-haired man behind him moved his hand to rest on his sword hilt at the same moment. In an instant, the air between both sides crackled with tension. But faced with my sharp, ice-cold gaze, Paulid let out a yelp of fear. I also clocked the black curly-haired man's draw stance. It was the opening form of Western quicksword style. My pulse quickened involuntarily. I wanted nothing more than to test myself against him. Just as I was reaching eagerly for my sword, a group of people cut us off with a shout, "Everyone stand down!" The white-haired man leading them said, "We are the border guard, direct agents of the king. Anyone who does not sheathe their weapon immediately will be treated as an insurgent." Faced with that, I had no choice but to stop. The white-haired man continued, "The attackers were mercenaries from a foreign nation. Testimony has already established that they were acting on the orders of a certain merchant company." He turned to Pollitt and demanded, "Surely none of you hired mercenaries to deal with a matter of succession?" The brown-haired man replied, "Does the testimony name which merchant company? Detaining people on that alone seems like insufficient grounds." The white-haired man gave a cold smile. "You think the border guard can't trace a lead like that?" At that point, Leona put forward a proposal, "Then seek new evidence that identifies the culprit, and for the 2 days the investigation takes, place both heirs under confinement." Pollard refused on the spot. "I don't agree to that. I found it strange the victim of the attack was voluntarily asking to be confined." Leona went on, "There are still people who haven't been questioned, the ones who fled the scene. The leader they mentioned may well be among them. Capture and interrogate them, and that should be enough." The white-haired man said, "And if that still isn't enough to identify who's behind all this," Leona said, "then you'll need to continue your investigation, but in that case the succession talks cannot continue here in the border city. We would return to the city where the merchant company is based, on the condition that both heirs remain available for questioning at any time." I thought to myself, once she left the border city she'd be beyond the protection of the standing army. Leona's guards were no match for Pollard's. If she left she was as good as dead. What exactly was she planning? Leona continued, "I am a merchant. I don't ask people to work for nothing. Whoever captures the remaining fugitives will receive this as their reward." She took a cloth bundle from the nursemaid and slowly opened it, saying, "This is the 4th piece of the Carmen collection. Carmen's dagger." The moment the words were out, Jackson spoke up behind me. "Squad leader, leave this to me." I was mildly surprised. Jackson, who showed indifference to almost everything, was suddenly this eager. "What exactly was that dagger?" Pollitt exclaimed, "That's a priceless treasure, and you're using it as a reward?" Leona replied calmly, "It's in my keeping, so it's mine to do with as I see fit." I turned to Jackson, curious about what made the dagger so special. "It's a weapon forged by the master craftsman Carmen," he said. "Carmen was once a slave and later became an assassin driven by revenge, using 7 weapons of his own making. The 4th of those 7 is this dagger. There are those who would give their lives to possess one of his pieces." Meanwhile, the white-haired man issued his order. "Everyone present at this scene will be held under border guard supervision for 2 days. No one is to leave this inn." I turned to Jackson and said, "Don't worry about the dagger. I've already sent Craze to catch them. We'll hear something soon." With that, my gaze drifted unbidden toward the black curly-haired man, and I found him looking back at me with the same detached expression. But after only a few seconds, he turned and walked away. That night, in Pollard's room, he was deeply worried that the delay would give someone the chance to find evidence against him. The brown-haired man urged patience. Making themselves a target of the border guard right now would be reckless. If no successor can be decided between the two of them, the final decision will fall to the investors. We have to wait for that moment. As the two men talked, the black curly-haired man looked out the window and saw me, still training at that late hour. After weeks of conditioning, I was able to sustain load-bearing push-ups for long stretches at a time. When I finally finished, I found that the white-haired man and his group had been watching me for quite some time. The white-haired man, squad leader Tereus, asked with easy amusement, "With time like that on your hands, why not go out and enjoy yourself?" I thought quietly, if time were equal for everyone, maybe I would. But the time of the gifted and the time of the ordinary are not the same. What someone else could learn in a week might take me a month or a year, so I couldn't afford to waste a single moment. I wanted to stack each day's effort on top of the last. Tereus was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and said to me, "You don't need to keep training your strength. From where I stand, your raw power is already quite remarkable. I didn't know that when we first fought, which is why we ended up even. But what would the outcome be now?" I understood immediately what he was suggesting. I smiled and nodded, accepting his challenge. We sparred multiple rounds using wooden sticks, and Tereus won most of the time. He boasted smugly, "You see that? That's what I'm capable of." Even so, I raised my stance and made clear I wanted to go again. He called me a lunatic. But one of his men, a curly-haired soldier, raised his hand and said he wanted to turn. The result was me getting thrown to the ground. Even in defeat, I immediately asked about the move he just used and requested he demonstrate it again. From his spot by the window, the black curly-haired man watched in silence and thought, "He doesn't seem wounded in his pride at all. If anything, he looked more interested. He didn't even try to hide his competitive streak, even knowing I was far stronger than him. This one really is something else." And yet, facing an unfamiliar technique, he still couldn't handle it properly by the 4th attempt. His combat instincts really are dull. What he didn't anticipate, however, was that in the 5th round, I found the key to countering the grapple throw, and won. Everyone broke into cheers. At that, the black curly-haired man stepped into the middle of the group and asked, "Excuse me, may I join in?" He stepped forward out of a genuine urge to teach me something. The curly-haired man who had been sparring with me answered on my behalf, "You and we have different positions. You'd be better off watching from the sidelines." But I spoke up immediately. "No, I've been waiting for long. and the aloof black curly-haired man let a faint smile cross his face. On the rooftop above, Jackson watched every bit of it. He thought to himself, even with a wooden stick in his hand, that man is dangerous. He quietly moved his hand to the dagger at his hip, ready to act at a moment's notice. Below, I looked at the black curly-haired man as he lifted the wooden stick with one hand, and a sharp electric tension jolted through my entire body. It felt like standing on a battlefield. I held my breath and entered the two-color world. I read his line of attack with ease. The trajectory shifted slightly, but that line was aimed directly at my throat. All I had to do was break his line of attack and land my counter. My thinking was sound, but reality was brutal. In less than a second, my throat had already been run through. In the real world, the wooden stick in the black curly-haired man's hand was pressed straight against my windpipe. The scene fell completely silent. The black curly-haired man spoke, "You read the attack line accurately, but you were too slow." My heart was hammering. The sword moved faster than I had imagined. In that instant, I came face to face with the truth. The man standing before me had reached a height I could barely see from where I stood. But this wasn't the first day I'd known the road ahead was hard. I raised the wooden stick and said evenly, "Again." The black curly-haired man paused, then offered something close to a compliment. "At least your attitude is right." We kept going until deep into the night. Everyone else had long since fallen asleep, save for the elf captain and Jackson. Looking down at me, lying on the ground for what must have been the dozenth time, the black curly-haired man thought anyone would lose heart facing an opponent this far out of their league. I had made the gap between us perfectly clear, so why wasn't this person losing heart? Jackson thought. The squad leader's reaction was too slow. At this rate, he could train until he dropped and never clear this hurdle. What he needed was to be taught the right order. Meanwhile, watching me swaying but not yet fallen, the black curly-haired man said under his breath, "That's enough for tonight. I'd like to rest." As he turned to go, I suddenly spoke. "That quick sword of yours really is something. One day I'm going to learn it." The black curly-haired man smiled and thought, "From where I'm standing, you're the more remarkable one." What a shame, if only you had just a little more natural talent. The following morning, a voice shattered the quiet. "Squad leader Tereus, the escaped mercenaries have been captured." Tereus turned. Several heavily bruised mercenaries were shoved in front of him, bound and kneeling. He immediately pressed one of them. "Who gave you your orders? Which merchant company?" Paulad's heart lurched. But the mercenaries' answer was not what anyone expected. A merchant company from Asban. They wanted to monopolize overlapping trade territories. But I genuinely don't know which one. We received a letter and payment at the same time, with the promised reward to come once the job was done. Leona looked at Tereus and said, "I see. The border guard will handle things from here, I take it." Tereus said, "You look almost relieved. Didn't you want that ugly, dim-witted fellow to be the culprit?" Leona replied with perfect composure, "Of course I did. I put up a precious dagger as the reward after all." Tereus said, "Fair enough. We'll continue questioning these men ourselves. The Rockford Merchant Company's confinement is hereby lifted." On the walk back escorting Leona, Jackson couldn't help drawing the dagger and turning it over in his hands. I reminded him not to draw a blade without reason, while privately thinking, so even he has moments of boyish excitement. Just then, Crace leaned in and said quietly, "Those mercenaries should have been hired by Paulad." Yet they suddenly pointed the finger at Asban. "I did find those men last night and rounded them all up." But a cloaked figure appeared out of nowhere and asked if I was Crace of Squad 444. He said he was one of Leona's people. She knew everything, and she promised the mercenaries money in exchange for sparing them from the harshest punishment. So they answered exactly as she'd instructed. I thought to myself, what was her goal? Would exposing Paulad as the one behind it actually work against Leona somehow? Leona then said to me, "What a relief that Paulad turned out not to be the culprit. The former company head's reputation nearly would have been tarnished." I thought, so it was for the sake of the former head's name. I asked her, "Once you leave the border city, you'll be beyond our protection. If Paulad's guards make a move against you, what then?" Leona said, "That's already been taken care of." The moment the words were out, I saw a large procession ahead. The soldier at its head introduced himself. "I am Mattis, captain of the merchant company's guard. We have come to receive the new company head, Lord Leona." With that, he led every member of his unit in kneeling before her. I thought quietly, so that was her game all along? She deliberately got everyone confined for 2 days and used that window to gather the investors and hold the vote. Her nerve, her intelligence network, her ability to act, all of it was formidable. Just as Crace had said, she was a fearsome woman. At that, Leona turned to look at me and said, "It's shameful to pester someone, so I won't force you to come with me anymore." She extended her hand toward me and smiled. "You have a way about you that makes people want to root for you. I hope that one day we can help each other as friends." I took her hand and accepted the gesture. "I'd like that," I said. Another side, Paulad leapt from his carriage and jabbed a finger at Mattis. "Mattis, my father was so good to you, and you betray me like this?" Mattis looked at him with nothing but contempt. "Please stop dragging the former company head's name through the mud, you fool." And with that, Paulad's defeat was complete. Inside the carriage, the brown-haired man lamented the failure of their plan. But the black curly-haired man said, "At the very least, we've confirmed that Leona is every bit as capable as they say, and she's gained herself an unusual soldier." After that, I returned to the guard post. I found Rem still sulking because I'd taken Jackson instead of him last time. I said to him in a serious tone, "There's a training exercise I want to do, and I need your help." That single, straightforward sentence was all it took to put his grudge to rest. He agreed without hesitation. During training, I carefully worked through the principles of Western quicksword style. First, the technique required the judgment to find the most efficient line of attack. Second, able to flexibly mobilize the explosive muscle power of the whole body. With that in my mind, I thrust my sword, and the blade grazed across Rem's neck. I froze when I felt the blood flick onto my face. I hadn't expected it to actually work. The speed had even surpassed Rem's. It all came down to fundamentals drilled over and over, the suppleness of a relaxed body, and the strength I'd built. My success lit a fire in Rem. He took his stance with excitement and said under his breath, "Then I'm picking up the pace too." Before I could react, he struck like lightning, and I snapped my sword up to block. The force of the impact sent a numbing shock up through both my arms. The second blow came before I'd recovered. I barely held it. I thought in alarm. His axe was already whip-like in its flexibility, and now it moved like a thunderbolt. I still had a very long way to go. With that realization, I kept training until dusk. At that point, I caught a razor-thin thread of killing intent, and snapped my sword up just in time to intercept Jackson's surprise attack. He said quietly, "Your hearing and your sight are both excellent. I don't think you'll need to keep doing this drill." He turned to leave. I let out a breath of relief. The next second, Jackson materialized like a ghost, and the tip of his dagger drew a faint line of blood across my neck. He began to explain, "Killing intent is the aura given off by the will to kill. When your eyes and ears can no longer track an attack, you must rely on sensing killing intent. This is a technique that goes beyond the 5 senses. It is called the sixth sense gate." He turned the dagger over in his hand and said, "Let me teach you." I took my stance and said with anticipation, "Let's begin." Jackson went on to explain the sixth sense gate in full. It operated in the realm of instinct. One couldn't rely on sight and hearing alone, because perception was not limited to the 5 senses. A sense of direction, motor reflexes, even the predatory instinct of a wild animal. All of these were forms of perception accessed through instinct. Sharpen every sense to a razor's edge and repeat the process in combat, and the instinct to perceive killing intent would eventually open on its own. When my first attempt failed, he said, "It's genuinely hard at the start, but keep training, keep feeling killing intent again and again, and your sixth sense gate will open." That night, back in the room, Rem suddenly said, "You seem different." I looked myself over and said, "Did I get stronger?" He said, "That's not what I mean." Odin held up a thumb and said, "You smile more than you used to." Ragnar felt there was something else he couldn't quite put his finger on. Then Kray spoke, "You've gotten crazier than before." At that, everyone nodded in agreement. I said, resigned, "I happen to be the only sane one in a group of lunatics. Of course that's how I'd look to you." Before bed, the small leopard padded over and looked me up and down. She thought, "He's done it to himself again. Training like he's trying to die every single day. If it weren't for my magic, he'd have collapsed long ago. If this man dies, my curse will never be broken." With that thought, her gaze drifted to the armor on the table. She raised one paw and pressed it lightly against the surface, and a faint shimmer of light spread across the armor. Despite all the training, I was making no progress whatsoever. I kept misjudging Jackson's movements. The others watched with growing exasperation. Rem flatly said I was going nowhere. Odin and Ragnar were just as puzzled. Someone who had made a massive leap in a single night before was somehow performing this poorly now. Then Rem came up with an idea. Take an outside commission. Go hunt some demon beasts. And so they essentially pushed me out the door to pick up a job. That was when someone handed me a slip of paper and said, "If nothing else catches your eye, give this one a look." I read it aloud. Shoe shop. Investigation of basement. I turned to the man beside me and asked, "Can't the patrol squad just handle this?" But the man told me the patrol squad was simply not enough. According to the shoe shop owner, the basement might contain undead creatures. I had my doubts. What if they just heard rats and jumped to conclusions? And would a commission like this even give me the real combat experience I needed? The man pressed on. "Sorcery breaker, please. Nobody else will take it." The shop owner is a gruff sort, but he's a good man. Not long ago, his wife went missing too. He's been beside himself with worry. Just go take a look and put his mind at ease. So I took the commission and went to the agreed location. The shop owner's daughter led me down into the basement. The owner pointed to a hole he had dug in the floor and said, "Have a look at this." Something cold moved through me. I went in with the owner and entered the mysterious tunnel below. Staring out at the enormous underground space before me, I thought, the scale of this is significant. It wouldn't be strange at all if there really were something living down here. Then I stopped cold. 6 branching paths stretched out ahead of me. I guess this had been deliberately designed as a labyrinth. I told the owner to stay behind me and not move until I had scouted ahead. But the moment I turned down one of the branches, I felt a wave of heat, and in the next instant, a violent burst of blue light tore toward us and reduced us both to ash in a heartbeat. I looped back to the morning. Lying in bed, I thought, the moment I felt that heat, I was incinerated. No question. That was a magic trap. If that's what I was dealing with, the only option was to run, because fighting a mage, dying would be a quick death, surviving would only be worse. The same logic applied to magic traps. As I stood at the board once more staring at the commissions, I thought, what do I do? Is this a wall that can be climbed through sheer technique? When the man handed me the slip of paper again, I wrestled with it. This situation called for a magic specialist, or else reinforcements from above. The elf captain might be willing to help, but I had to get there before that impatient old man went in alone. Then it hit me. Something was wrong. I rushed to the shoe shop, only to be told by the daughter that her father had already gone into the basement. Without a second thought, I jumped down into the tunnel. I found the owner walking deeper on his own. I tried to stop him, but it was too late. He stepped on the trigger point and set off the magic trap. The blue light swallowed him instantly. The blast consumed me too. Then I was back at the river. The ferryman said softly, even if only for an instant, "You felt the skin burning, the body turning to ash. Knowing that, do you still wish to walk into those flames?" I answered calmly, "Just as you said, The pain is like a million needles driving through the body all at once, but watching an innocent person die before my eyes is more painful still. That is what it means to be a knight. The words had barely left my mouth before I snapped back to reality and hauled myself out of bed without a moment's hesitation. I didn't wait to hear the end of Rem's repeated speech before I left. This time, I dug open the underground entrance before the shoe shop owner could reach it myself. I repeatedly told him not to come in. Then, for the third time, I stood before the fork in the path. I began to think carefully. One of these passages had to be free of traps. Was trying each one by one the right approach? Relying purely on the loops would be the slow way. There had to be a better answer that I could act on right now. I raised my torch and scanned each passage for any sign of a trap. At the same time, I thought, how many times have I died so far? What did I feel each time? At what exact moment did I know I had lost? When the blade was already swinging at my neck? When the enemy's sword was already raised? Or in the very instant I taking a step forward? Jackson's words rang through my head, the clear will to die. As I stood thinking, I felt something sharp cut through the air in front of me. A presence like a great axe. My pupils contracted, and then I deliberately stepped forward anyway. In that instant, the axe split through my skull, but I felt a surge of exhilaration, because I had felt the killing intent of the trap clearly and precisely. In the fourth loop, I had a plan. I wouldn't rush in, until I felt a definitive killing intent. I would walk through every passage again and again. I stood before a passage I hadn't entered yet and felt nothing, only an icy wind cutting against my face. I thought, is this the right path? I made a note of it and moved to the next branch. The moment I lifted my foot, I felt that same deadly chill from the instant of death in the third loop. But this passage looked completely still, with nothing obviously out of the ordinary. I realized what I'd felt just then wasn't killing intent at all, just the memory carried over from before. So I decided to go through every unexplored entrance one more time, searching for one true trace of killing intent. That search lasted until the early hours of the morning. Seeing that the shop owner was still awake, I told him I'd be back the next day and warned him again to stay out of the entrance. He agreed quickly, and I took the moment to ask if he had any leads on his missing wife. He said disappearances had been happening too often lately, and no one was willing to help look. He told me his wife was a brown-haired woman with freckles across her face, wearing a wedding ring that matched his. I nodded and said, understood. Back at the guard post, I went back to practicing the sixth sense gate, but I still kept guessing Jackson's position wrong. I stopped and suddenly wondered, had I actually made it through a full day without dying? If I just let the day pass like this, would tomorrow come? With that question turning in my mind, I drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, I found myself repeating the same day. Tomorrow hadn't come. So on the fifth pass through the tunnels, I thought, what if I didn't sleep at all? I decided to test it. In the evening, I sat outside my room and kept my eyes open until morning. But the very instant the sun rose, I blinked without thinking. And when my eyes opened again, I was back in bed. Hearing Rem say the same words once more, I thought, I can't reach tomorrow until I clear the wall. Is that how it works? That was fine. I didn't plan to greet tomorrow without crossing this wall. This was different from simple fear. I needed to feel death, really feel it. And so I kept repeating today, again and again. 69 times in all. On the 70th time, when I lifted my foot at one of the branching paths, I felt a killing intent unlike any I had felt before. It was as though countless skeletal hands were rising from the earth, closing tight around me, dragging me under. The feeling this time was so overwhelming that a quiet, knowing smile spread across my face. Afterward, when Jackson came at me with a surprise attack, I sidestepped it with ease. He stared, visibly stunned. You opened the sixth sense gate? In just a few days? On the 72nd loop, I went into the tunnel with all my throwing knives. I now knew that all 6 passages were trapped, and there had never been a safe route from the beginning. But that didn't mean there was no way through. A trap only caught you if you step on it. This time, I chose the passage where a single misstep would have turned me to ash. I took a slow breath. Carefully, I lifted my foot, and felt killing intent surge up at once. I shifted my step slightly forward, skipping past that point, and brought my foot down tentatively. Nothing happened. My heart leapt straight into my throat. From there, every step that followed was taken with twice the care. I pressed my full awareness through the sixth sense gate, and followed the only true path forward one step at a time. With the final step, light found me. When I opened my eyes, I had cleared the wall. I had barely let out a breath of relief when a group of ghouls came charging at me. I dealt with them without much difficulty. Then more ghouls came roaring in, wave after wave. I knew their claws carried lethal poison. Even a glancing scratch would cause serious harm. I also knew that normally it took several soldiers to handle just one, and right now, there was only me. But that was enough. I handled them with room to spare. However, but there were just too many ghouls. By the time the last one fell, I was gasping for air. I couldn't help thinking, I wish the teammates could have seen that. Then I heard a bestial roar. Several monsters, seemingly a hybrid of different species, roared and charged towards me. My chest tightened. What else was lurking further in? Meanwhile, seeing that I still hadn't returned, the small leopard slipped out the door to find me. She thought it strange. He was only going to a shoe shop. Why was he fully armed? If he died from recklessness, it would cause me no end of trouble. With that thought, she moved quickly to the shop entrance and caught the scent of what emanated from within. Her heart sank. That was unmistakably the smell of hex arts. By then, I had cut down the last of the hybrid creatures and was completely spent. That was when I heard it. A faint, ragged breathing from somewhere deep in the cave. The kind that sounded like it might stop at any moment. A creature? I thought, and moved toward the sound. The next second, A horrifying sight met my eyes. Hanging throughout the vast cavern were the remains of humans and animals, torn and mutilated, every one of them clearly having suffered greatly before the end. Looking up, I found a cell containing a woman who was little more than skin and bones, murmuring over and over, "I want relief, please, kill me." I noticed the ring on her hand. She was the shoe shop owner's wife. Before I could process the shock, a voice reached me from behind. "All that noise out there, and it turns out fresh material walked right to my door. I don't know how you made in here, but your timing is perfect." A cloaked man stepped slowly into view, a grotesque creature trailing behind him. I asked coldly, "Did you do all of this?" The man admitted it freely. "Yes, those are failed works. But this child," he swept a hand toward the creature caged behind him. "This is Baromi. Now that is a work worthy of the name." He looked at me with an unhurried air and said, "Allow me to make something beautiful out of you as well." I lowered my head for a brief moment of silence. When I looked up again, I had a throwing knife in hand, and my eyes were set with absolute resolve. "Even if it costs me tens of thousands of lives, I will kill you." The moment the words left my mouth, I hurled the knife. A barrier sprang up around him and deflected it. I charged at him head-on with my sword, and was sent flying several meters by a translucent orb of magic. I killed my momentum and reset my stance. At that same moment, the small leopard had found me. She watched in silence, then thought, "The opponent is a mage, as I feared. The power I've recovered is still thin. But if I gave everything I had, a man like that would be nothing to me." With that thought, a violet light began to gather and swirl around her. After sending me flying, the man raised his hand again, and launched another translucent orb through the barrier. But I felt his killing intent through the sixth sense gate and stepped out of its path. Then I entered the two-color world. I watched his lines of attack with perfect clarity, and thought back to when I had asked the teammates how to fight a mage. Rem had said shoot them with arrows. Jackson had said strike when they're not expecting it. Odin believed close quarters combat was best. Ragnar's answer was blunt to the point of simplicity: anything alive will die if you cut it. With that thought, I launched upward directly above the man, going for his barrier. The man smiled with contempt and murmured, "Pierce him." At his words, a force erupted from the ground beneath me and drove straight toward my heart. But the instant it made contact with my body, the armor absorbed it entirely, leaving me unharmed. Instead, the armor over my heart erupted with a tremendous surge of energy. That shattered his barrier outright. I followed through with a single downward stroke and split him in two. As the man collapsed, I sank to the ground alongside him. That was when I noticed a crack running along the sword. Staring at the crack, I thought, at least it's only the sword that broke. But I was puzzled. The impact had been enough to reduce a person to dust, so why had I come out without a scratch? Was it the quality of this armor? I turned to look at the shoe shop owner's wife, still locked in her cage. Her body had gone pale and cold. The faint breath she'd clung to was gone. I gazed at her body in silence for a moment, then quietly walked away. Only after I left did the small leopard dare to show herself. Looking at the creature sealed in the cage, she thought, a flash golem was created to compensate for a mage's physical limitations. If input the final inscription, it would awaken. She raised her paw and silently took it away. Back at the outpost, I gave the elf captain a detailed account of the previous night. She listened and thought to herself, civilian kidnapped and subjected to some twisted experiment. If this got out, it could cause a real panic. I suggested keeping it under wraps. The squad leader said, that means your contribution gets buried along with it. I replied calmly, the civilians' lives come first. The elf captain then arranged for a crew to seal off the underground cavern and put out the story that it had been dug by a thieves guild. Just then, the shoe shop owner walked up and handed me a bundle, his voice sincere. Please take this, it's your reward. I opened it to find a brand new pair of boots. He explained, your shoes look like they'd seen better days. One less thing for me to worry about now. I just hope my wife comes home safe. Please, you have to find her. I wrestled with myself for a moment. In the end, I chose to hide the truth. I'll do my best, I said. Leaving the shoe shop, I made my way up to the hilltop alone to watch the sunset, the same question running through my mind over and over. Was giving him a hope that would never be fulfilled really the right thing to do? Was it better than letting him face the pain of knowing the truth? If I became a knight, could I have stopped something like this from happening sooner? There was no way to know yet. All I could do was try. With that thought, I left the broken sword where it lay, turned, and headed back down the hill. After that, we took on another commission to hunt demon beasts. But the creatures we encountered this time were far too weak. There was almost nothing to learn from the fight, let alone any chance of getting stronger. Rem, who was with me, even yawned out of boredom. Noticing my look of dissatisfaction, he lit up and said, let me handle it. With that, he charged into the pack of demon hounds and carved through them with pure, gleeful abandon. One of the soldiers tried to get me to call Rem back. Instead, I dropped my shield and drew my sword and charged in myself. I cut down the demon hounds one by one, and between the two of us, we wiped out the entire pack, but I still felt empty inside. I was hungry for a real fight against a truly powerful enemy. At that point, one of the soldiers suggested I check in with a heavy armor unit. They were in the middle of a monster hunt. The so-called heavy armor unit was now in serious trouble. A swarm of monsters, ghost-faced, bird-bodied creatures, had appeared out of nowhere. They snatched soldiers from the air, carried them up to a certain height, then let go. The soldiers plummeted and hit the ground with fatal force. Rem and I arrived at the battlefield just in time to see it. I recognized those strange creatures immediately. They were harpies. The reason they stuck in my memory was that the mercenary band I had briefly been part of was wiped out entirely by harpies. Those fallen comrades had all been good people. The thought of it set something blazing in my chest, and I drew my sword and charged. I swore to myself, from this moment on, no one else was going to die. But just then, the harpy in front of me let out a piercing shriek. The sonic force of it was staggering, agonizing. Its cry could shake a person's very mind. The harpy lunged at me with its talons. I sliced straight through half its wing. It crashed hard to the ground. At the sight of it, Rem, who gripped a harpy by the leg, whooping with excitement, "Let's see who can kill more." He hurled the harpy he was holding straight into the ground. "We're not here to play games," I said flatly. Then I sidestepped another harpy's charge and split it open with a single blow. The soldiers couldn't help but murmur, "The sorcery breaker is something else." Not far away, Teray stood watching me cut through the monsters and found himself muttering, "That guy has gotten even stronger." The curly-haired man asked, "We came to support them. Is it really fine to just stand here watching?" Teray said lazily, "Looks like they don't need the support." Then the unexpected happened. A diving harpy knocked the sword clean out of my hand. The sword flew several meters away. Immediately after, two harpies came at me at the same time. I drove my whistle knife straight into the skull of one. The sight of its companion dying sent the other into a rage as it bore down on me. I used that moment to lunge forward and reach for my sword. Just as its talons were about to rake my face, my hand closed around the hilt. I swept the sword up in one motion and ended it. Seeing that, the rest of the harpies lost their nerve. They circled in the air a few times and flew off. I looked at the harpy bodies scattered across the ground and thought, these weren't the same harpies that wiped out the mercenary band. I remembered crouching beside the bodies of my companions, while the man behind me berated me, calling me useless. "These people died because of you," he had said. At the memory, my gaze hardened. Now I was the one who had saved everyone. Then, one of the soldiers told me we could pull back. I raised my sword again instead and said, "Not yet, it's not enough, I'm not going back." Tereus and his group, hearing that, all had the same thought, this guy is genuinely out of his mind. After that, word of my rescue of the heavy armor unit spread through the entire camp, but I felt nothing about it inside. I just kept training the way I always had, taking commissions and completing them, one after another. After finishing a commission, I would add another training session on top of it. A soldier who had gotten up in the night happened to see this, and found himself thinking, training day and night like that, is that really any way to live? Then another thought followed. Should I try it too? He decided on the spot, and that night, he started training through the dark hours as well. By the next night, his effort had drawn in a companion. Before long, a group of soldiers was drilling together every night. One day, the elf captain was doing her daytime rounds when she noticed the soldiers training hard on the parade ground. "The atmosphere in the unit has changed lately," she remarked. A subordinate nearby explained, "It seems like everyone's been following the example of the sorcery breaker." The elf captain let out a long sigh. Then she sought me out and made an announcement. Effective immediately, Squad 444 was being elevated to an independent unit under the 4th Squadron, and I was to be its commander. I said I only had 5 people, not enough for a proper unit. She said the necessary personnel would be added based on whatever I needed. I was still worrying that a bigger team would be even harder to manage. When she said, "Once you're a squad leader, you won't need to carry out standard duties anymore. You'll have more time for training." I understood what she was going for. I bowed gratefully. "I'll do my best to carry out whatever you entrust to me." The elf captain then suggested, "It would be a shame to just let you leave. Let's spar." She raised her fists and said, "These are my weapons." I set down my own without hesitation. "All right." Then I raised my fists and settled into my stance. I recalled something Odin had taught me. Unarmed combat is for close range. Speed is what makes it effective. So when she came at me, I deflected her first strike with my elbow, pushed forward with my free hand, then used the difference in our size to drive into her body and take her down to the ground, pinning her with my elbow. "I believe that's my win," I said. The elf captain started rambling again. Humans really are blunt when it comes to proposals. My expression darkened, but her words were just a distraction. She swung her right leg up and swept me off balance, used the momentum to sit on top of me, and planted her left foot on my chest. She said, "Read your opponent's weakness, then use your own strengths to crush them." Her eyes softened. "Well done, my fiancé. Keep improving." "I am not your fiancé," I replied quietly. "Please get off me." With that, we both straightened our clothing as if nothing had happened. Then I suddenly heard her murmur, "I'm sorry. I wasn't able to shield you from it." I was puzzled. What was she referring to? As the weather warmed, a war front that had long been deadlocked began to shift, and full-scale conflict felt imminent. To recover from their last defeat, Asbin's forces grew more aggressive, and the army formally moved into a state of war readiness, setting off a chain of changes. At that moment, a middle-aged man with a thick beard introduced himself. "I'm the newly appointed captain, Marcus." Beside him, Krace murmured, "War-mad Marcus is one of Cyprus's core generals. He's a true strategist, seasoned in command." Meanwhile, Marcus surveyed the soldiers and thought to himself, aside from the heavy armor unit and the border guard, nearly everything else in this army is filler. His gaze drifted to me. Worth mentioning, he thought, is that squad leader they called the sorcery breaker. Since the last battle, he'd been racking up accomplishments one after another. Was it pure luck or genuine ability? "Prove your worth to me." He then issued a directive to the independent unit, gather intelligence on the terrain near the Penanir River, and I finally understood what the elf captain had meant by "I'm sorry." Just then, one of the newly added unit members, Anri, spoke up. "That position is right next to Asben's fortress city, Border City. It's similar to our own Border City, a city built for military purposes." Krace followed up smoothly. "Sounds like a reconnaissance mission." Rem immediately announced he was coming with me, but someone cut in. "Except for the squad leader, all members are to remain on standby under the new squad leader's orders. Direct orders from the captain." The speaker was the newly appointed squad leader, Andrew, who declared at full volume, "That means you all have to follow my instructions." The moment the words left his mouth, Rem stepped right up to him, and, in a deeply unsettling display, ran his tongue along the sword of his axe. "Why is there worthless deadweight in our unit?" he said. Even as Andrew trembled with fear, he held his ground and insisted on his authority as squad leader, shouting, "Come at me if you've got a problem, I'm not backing down." Rem crouched low, vining to spring. Odin cracked his knuckles with a slow, deliberate sound. "Let me to work out those joints for you." Jackson drew his dagger with a calm, measured hand. "Losing one finger shouldn't be a problem, right? I was in the middle of sparring with Ragnar when I called over to them. Take it easy on him." Mag frantically begged me to step in. I told him everyone was perfectly easy to get along with. Unable to convince me, he rushed to hold back his own young lord. Meanwhile, Henri turned to me. "Are you familiar with the terrain near the Penhenir River? It's a bit dangerous over there. Would you like me to put together some information for you before we head out tomorrow?" I gave a small nod. "Tell me." When night fell, I set out, and then came the companion I'd be traveling with, an old acquaintance, Therese. After some brief pleasantries, he suddenly asked, "How old are you?" I said, 30. He froze. "You look that young and you're older than me?" I had no answer to that, so I steered us back to the point. "What's the mission?" He led me toward the docks as he spoke. "First we cross the Penhenir River, then link up with the other teams and discuss from there. But right now there's no ferryman to take us across." He sat down at that. "Nothing we can do, we'll just have to rest and wait." I agreed out loud, but in practice I drew my sword and started drilling. "This is how I rest." Therese thought, "He has real perseverance, trains hard, and his skills have been recognized. And he's young and handsome, so many things going for him." At that thought, the look in his eyes as he turned toward me burst into open flames. I felt the killing intent and snapped my gaze back, only to find him glaring at me with pure accusatory resentment. "What does that look for?" I wondered. Then Therese heaved a long sigh and slowly got to his feet. "Back at the inn, you won 14 out of 20 battles, right? You're no match for me in combat." I let the corner of my mouth lift slightly. "So you're talking about things from the past." Therese raised his sword, eyes full of confidence. "You are not the only one who's gotten stronger." I accepted the challenge. "That's the best news I've heard all day." And so we launched into a fierce duel. Therese barely held off my relentless assault, alarm flashing through his mind. How is this guy improving this fast? Pressing through the thought, he dug deep and took one of my strikes head on. Then he threw a fist at my face. But I caught something else coming with that fist. A hidden sword tucked along his wrist. I twisted aside fast, but the sword still caught my cheek. Therese coolly introduced his secret technique, the concealed edge. He expected me to find it underhanded. He was wrong. My pulse jumped with excitement. I asked him to teach me right then and there. After that, we kept sparring until we didn't even notice the ferryman had arrived. We crossed the Penhenir River without incident, and reached the other bank at dawn. But Therese didn't head straight for the rendezvous point. He suggested we wash up first. I took a sniff at my sweat-soaked clothes, and agreed. Just as he turned to tell me to get in the water, he caught an unexpected view as I pulled off my trousers. His face went blank with disbelief. "You greedy bastard," he muttered. "You've killed my fighting spirit entirely." And then a woman's voice rang out. "You weren't coming, so I came to find you, and you're bathing." I was taken aback. When had she gotten there? I hadn't sensed her at all. She went on, "We need to reach the area near Border City by the end of today. Get out of the water." Therese grumbled. "You're staring. How are we supposed to get out?" The woman said, "There's nothing worth looking at anyway." So I climbed out of the river, completely bare. The woman's expression immediately shifted to match exactly what Therese's had been moments before. Then she said, almost to herself, "You've actually got quite a lot going for you." She reached out her hand. "I'm Finn, Recon Squad Leader. Good to meet you." I took her hand and gave a small nod. As we made our way there, Finn laid out the situation. "We have a spy inside Border City. Call her Kat. She's carrying critical intelligence. 4 days ago we arranged a rendezvous to collect it. Kat never showed. We haven't been able to reach her since." I asked, "Could Kat's safety have been compromised?" Finn answered, "That's what we're here to find out. We infiltrate Border City and get Kat out." Fortunately, the area in front of Border City is known as the territory of monsters and beasts. Patrols are sparse. We've secured 3 possible infiltration routes. The first, use the Dog Gate. It's a path used by underground black market traders in the city. The guards know about it but turn a blind eye. The second, scale the wall under cover of night. It's exhausting, but the safest option. The last, disguise ourselves as a merchant caravan and slip in through the main gate. Risky, but the least physically demanding. Considering that Kat might still show at the rendezvous point, my team will hold position there. It'll just be the 3 of us going in. Whichever route you pick, the difficulty is roughly the same. Your call. I thought to myself, she made that sound easy, but she had to know this mission was anything but simple. Therese suggested letting Finn choose, since she knew the terrain. Finn chose the first route and set our departure for the following morning. That night, I began practicing the concealed edge that Therese had taught me. After a long stretch of effort, I had made no progress at all. Therese couldn't help himself. "Your thumb. How exactly did you get this good with a sword?" Finn appeared, chewing on something. She held out some dried meat to me. "One of my team members made it." We both tasted it and agreed it was surprisingly good. Finn mentioned that the soldiers' parents ran a shop at the Border City. Then she pointed into the distance and said, "If you're training, stay away from under the flat yellowish stones over there." I said, "Because that's where venomous snakes nest." She looked surprised. "How did you know that?" I said, "Because one of my unit members used to be a hunter. He told me." She grinned, thoroughly prepared, as expected. That's exactly what I like to see. Deep in the night, as sleep came over me, I thought I could see that river again, and the ferryman standing silently at the edge, holding up a lamp and watching me. My eyes snapped open. I sat up quietly in the dark. It had been a long time since the ferryman had appeared. He must have something to say. Then I thought back to the elf captain's last words before we parted. "I'm sorry. I wasn't able to shield you from it." A smile broke across my face before I could stop it. This mission must be a towering wall. The next morning, the three of us made our way to the dog gate at the base of the city wall. Finn went ahead. It was standard practice for a scout to lead the way. I switched into learning mode. I noticed her footsteps made almost no sound at all. I wonder if I can do that too, I thought. So I began mimicking her gait, carefully placing one foot forward. The next second, a squad of Aspen-grade dog soldiers appeared. "Got you." We moved to fall back, only to find crossbowmen had materialized behind us as well. The lead soldier gave the order, "Kill them." Before the words had fully landed, the crossbows all swung toward us, and bolts came raining down. There were too many to dodge. An arrow caught Finn in the arm. On the other side, Therese was struggling badly against multiple attackers closing in on all sides. I felt the tension rise in me. Neither Finn nor Therese were built for one against many. In this kind of situation, they couldn't perform. Sure enough, they both went down quickly, and were surrounded. Cut down where they stood. Only I was still fighting. But there were too many of them. I couldn't take them all on my own. In the chaos, someone kicked me to the ground from out of nowhere. Spears drove through all four of my limbs, and finally a soldier thrust a spear through my skull. Then I entered the daze loop once more. I began to think, a force that large couldn't have appeared out of nowhere. This was a trap that had been laid in advance. Had the enemy anticipated that we would try to infiltrate? Just then, Finn urged me to hurry up and get ready to move out toward the dog gate. I told her I had a bad feeling about the dog gate and suggested we go over the wall instead. Therese turned to Finn and said, "His instincts are sharp. Trust him and you won't regret it." Finn took that at face value and agreed, but it left us with the whole day to fill. So I invited her to spar. Since Finn wasn't comfortable with a sword, we agreed on unarmed combat. My goal wasn't just to practice. I wanted to take a proper measure of what our team could do. I settled into my stance. "Who goes first?" Finn crooked a finger at me. "You." I came in without hesitation. She slipped out of the way effortlessly, spun, and drove a knee into me. I blocked with my arm, but the force still sent me stumbling back. The next instant, Finn launched a kick. I went with our size difference again, wrapped my arms around her, and took her down to the mat, but she clamped her legs around my throat. As I started to black out, Therese called out, "All right, that's enough." Finn finally let go. The sun was dipping when it was time to move. Looking at me standing there fully armed and kitted out, Finn ran her eyes over my gear and shook her head. "Carrying all of that? You'll be dead on your feet before you're halfway there." I told her seriously that even loaded down like this, I had the muscle to make it up the wall. Finn pointed to a ridge in the distance. "It's not just the wall we're climbing. We have to get over that rock mountain first before Border City's walls even come into view." I stared at the mountain towering into the clouds and thought, even just reaching the top won't be easy. Then again, I'd never once come across a wall that was easy to get over. I thought back to when I left the mage's hole to replace my damaged sword. I had used a magical item from the spoils of battle to have Kraze buy me the finest sword available. That sword was on my back right now. To me, it was as important as my own life. Finn, who had already reached the summit, watched me still laboring up the slope and sighed. "Even if you ditch everything else and just kept that one sword, it would still drain you dry." She was right. The weight of the sword was crushing the breath out of me, but muscles pushed to their limits are muscles that grow stronger. And I had already pushed past and through my limits more times than I could count. Something like this wasn't enough to make me stop. When I finally reached the top, the clean air at the summit filled my lungs. Then, from somewhere beneath the blood moon, the sound of howling wolves rose up, and at the foot of the mountain a wolf pack was moving together in the same direction. Finn glanced over quietly. "We should start paying close attention. The city wall is in sight." When we reached the base of the wall, the ground ahead was completely open, nowhere to hide. While soldiers patrolled the top of the wall without letting up for a moment, we were forced to take cover at the edge of the forest. Therese swore under his breath, "Damn it, there's nothing to hide behind." Finn said, "On the night of the twin full moons, the light is actually so intense that it becomes harder for the guards to focus. Their alertness drops." We waited patiently, and the moment the guards on the wall had their backs to us, Finn hissed, "Now!" We sprinted for the wall without a sound. In the middle of the run, I glanced up on reflex, and for a moment I thought I locked eyes with one of the soldiers. Just as he fully turned away, we pressed ourselves flat against the wall. Finn was breathing hard. "See? Moving on a night like this is actually easier. But I always had this illusion that I had already been discovered." Finn rubbed powder onto her hands and said, "Once we clear the wall, there's a slum district on the other side. Mix into the crowd and no one can find us." She wound the rope tightly around her waist, then told me once more to leave the sword behind. I turned her down seriously. Then we began inching up the wall as quietly as we could. I was still worrying about whether traps had been set on the wall when Finn pulled herself up over the top. The moment her foot touched down on the wall, a mage stepped into view and said, "You've really worked hard in the middle of the night." She snapped her fingers. Thick vines erupted from the ground and shot toward us. Finn slammed a hand on my head. "Get down." We barely dodged the first wave. Finn hurled her hand axe at the mage and shouted, "Pull back to the base of the wall." Seeing the axe coming, the mage calmly directed vines to intercept it, shredding it in an instant, but I didn't run. I drew the sword from my back and charged straight at the mage. Wave after wave of vines blocked my path. At the critical moment, I decided to fall back on the experience of past fights against mages and use the sixth sense gate to end her with a single strike. But then Jackson's words came back to me: trust your five senses, but never trust them blindly. A powerful opponent will sometimes deceive your instincts. That goes doubly for mages. He was right. Before my sword tip could reach her, vines had vined around my entire body. I was hauled off my feet and left hanging in the air. Finn exploded. What the hell is that idiot doing? In the same breath, she and Therese were impaled by the vines. I was still fighting against the vines, but no matter how hard I struggled, they wouldn't give. The mage said, "You didn't run. That kind of courage deserves to be acknowledged." Her golden eyes gleamed. "I am Risha, the Rosevine Weaver." She closed her fist. The vines snapped shut. My body came apart in an instant. Once again, I was back at that familiar river. I blamed myself. I had gotten arrogant. Drunk on the fact of my own growth, I had charged in without gauging the enemy's strength at all. The ferryman was there to mock me too. "You should have a clearer picture of your own limits now, shouldn't you?" In the face of an overwhelming wall, "You're nothing more than an insignificant ant." I paid his scorn no mind. "Thanks," I said. Because of it, I remembered why I started. "This wall is exactly what I needed," the ferryman replied coldly. "Let's see if you're still saying that after you've seen the third wall." In the second loop, I suggested to Finn that we take the third route, the merchant caravan disguise. Finn told me the caravan wouldn't enter the city until the following morning. I thought to myself, if I can't get over the wall, I can't reach tomorrow. What form will this wall take this time? Realizing we'd need to wait another full day where we were, Finn wasted no time calling for her team members to bring wine and food. I watched everyone lounging around at a relaxed picnic and asked quietly, "Isn't this a little too casual? Isn't it dangerous?" Finn answered, "Being too tense hurts efficiency. When you're stiff, your field of vision narrows." She held out a cup to me. "You should rest too." I knew she was right because my vision had narrowed. I had convinced myself that the only way through a wall was to charge straight at it. Ease up a little. Throwing yourself at something relentlessly isn't always the only way forward. Live in this moment. Live each moment well. With that thought, I slowly drew my sword, took a breath, and began to practice the way I always did. I kept at it until the blood moon hung directly overhead before I stopped. I wiped down the sword and thought, hard won as it was. Just arriving at that realization made this a worthwhile day. Up until this point in the day, I had already been at the city wall both times. Gray dog soldiers at the dog gate, a mage on the wall. So what would be waiting for me this time? The thought had barely formed when the howling of wolves rose up from beneath the blood moon. The next second, a massive pack of werewolves came thundering toward us, and had us surrounded within seconds. Therese surveyed them and said, "Taking down a single werewolf normally takes at least 10 soldiers. There are at least 20 out there. We're done." Finn was furious too. There was no monster presence at all just now. Where did they come from? A thought flashed through my mind. Could it be that mage, Risha, who had done this? The moment the werewolves surged forward, I stepped into the two-color world. I could see their attack lines clearly, but there were too many of them, and they moved without any pattern. There was no way to keep up. All I could do was swing on instinct. When I tried to widen my field of vision, the full scale of the carnage hit me. Not just Finn's team members, even Therese and Finn herself had been torn apart beyond recognition. Even knowing that as long as today kept restarting, they would come back. Watching them die was still agony. In that moment, fury and helplessness drove my sword arm into a frenzy. But then a werewolf closed in on me and drove a fist into my gut with full force. I coughed blood. This one was different from the others. It knew how to punch. It was likely the pack leader. It clamped its jaws around my wrist and sent me flying. I caught a glimpse as I fell. The rest of the pack was circling in, ready to devour me. Behind them, the ground was covered in my companions' bodies. After dying for the third time, the ferryman's voice came again. "As long as today doesn't end, you'll have to watch this play out again and again without limit. Can you still afford to smile?" At the start of the fourth loop, I said quietly, "You're right, it really doesn't feel good." Hearing me say that, Finn and Therese asked if I wasn't feeling well. I stood up. "No, I'm fine. Let's move." My eyes had gone still and certain. Even if all three paths were sealed, I would cut a new one through. On the way to the dog gate, I tried to think of a plan, but nothing came to me. Therese and Finn held their own in one-on-one fights, but the moment they were surrounded in a narrow space by multiple enemies, they had nothing left. The only real option was to avoid being surrounded. Could I use the sixth sense to locate the ambush before it happened? But when we were surrounded again, my heart sank. I couldn't sense them at all. Was there some kind of magical interference here too? With that thought still unresolved, I went down again. After reviving, when Risha's vines came for me, I asked, "Was the magic in the dog gate you're doing?" Risha said with irritation, "Did you figure it out?" "Honestly, Captain Roger is sloppy." And with that, the vines ended my life. After 2 failures, I went back to practicing the concealed edge. Still no progress. But my mind was full of questions. With a mage involved, the sixth sense was useless for avoiding the ambush. And even if I managed to slip past it, could the three of us really shake that many pursuers? The werewolf fight was the same story. Every scenario was outnumbered. No matter how I looked at it, as long as the gap in strength stayed this wide, I would never get over the wall in front of me, which meant I had to keep getting stronger. But in the heat of battle, I noticed the old recklessness creeping back. I forced it down deliberately, and kept running through the trials on all 3 routes, fight after fight, staking everything each time. Each run, I came out a little better than the last. Eventually, even the ferryman had seen enough. "How long are you planning to keep this up? If you don't want to be trapped in today forever, you'd be better off picking a wall and taking it on." I said, "The more I try, the more certain I am." Every one of these 3 routes is a wall worth challenging. They're honestly too good to pick just one. Somewhere deep in the loops, Therese stepped out of the cave after waking up and found me in the middle of hard training. What stopped him cold was that I had already mastered the concealed edge. Therese stared in disbelief. You couldn't do that yesterday. When did you learn it? I murmured, about 30 days ago. I quietly closed my hand into a fist. I built up enough. Today is the 79th loop. It's time to clear this wall, but there were still a few things I needed. I turned to one of Finn's team members and said, could you put together a simple pouch for me? I held up my wrist to show the size. About this big. I need to wear it on my arm. He agreed right away. Then I noticed something unusual about the lining of Finn's boots. She showed me the custom-made leather boots. I layer cloth on the inside, she said. That's what deadens the sound. So I had Therese and myself line our own boots the same way. Once everything was ready, my footsteps inside the dog gate were nearly silent. Finn was genuinely shocked. Even with the cloth lining, moving that quietly was no small feat. Only I knew the truth. Through loop after loop, I had never stopped training. To survive the dog gate, I had to find the hidden enemy first and carve out an opening. Spotting an ambush in the dark wasn't easy, but that was exactly Finn's specialty. The thought struck me and I turned to her suddenly. What would we do if there were enemy soldiers waiting inside the dog gate? Finn said we'd fall back. I pressed her, and if the way out was blocked too, how high and wide is this tunnel? If we're boxed in from both ends, is there another way through? If there are armed forces waiting up ahead, aren't we just walking into a dead end? Finn's patience frayed. If you're scared, maybe you should sit this one out. Stop putting bad ideas in everyone's heads. I just think it's better to be careful, I said. What I was actually doing was making sure they would act the way I needed them to. Given who they were, I couldn't strong-arm them the way I might have on the high grasslands. I had to convince them instead. I thought back to the weight of Kron's presence the first time I'd faced him. That force of will that drove an idea straight into you. More powerful than anything words could do. Finn held my gaze for a long moment. Then she gave in. Fine. I agree. I've been too careless. The moment she said it, the mood shifted. Finn also began to become more vigilant. She noticed marks on the ground and thought to herself, those look like they've been deliberately wiped away. Then something hit her, and she swore under her breath. She told us to pull back immediately, but the way out was already blocked. A squad of crossbowmen. And now I finally knew exactly where they were. I launched the plan on the spot, sprinting straight at the crossbow squad, shouting as I went, orders, orders from Captain Roger. The crossbowmen had no idea what was happening. The confusion made them drop their guard for a split second. In the dark, they couldn't make out faces or uniforms, and they mistook me for an Asbin soldier. That gave me the opening I needed. By the time they realized I wasn't one of theirs, it was too late. I had already taken down the front man. One of them shouted, he's not one of us. It's an intruder. Shoot him. The words weren't even finished before I grabbed him by the collar, pulled him in front of me, and said, yes, go ahead. Everyone shoot. The soldier behind him immediately barked, hold your fire. When they still didn't move, I started yelling in their faces. Finn and Therese had no idea why I was suddenly provoking the enemy, but Finn especially. With my voice drowning everything out, she couldn't hear a single other sound, and that was when she understood exactly what I was after. When there was nothing but darkness, chaos, and nonsense, the best thing to do was eliminate your enemies without making a sound. After she quietly finished off the men in the back row, the ones up front finally sensed something was wrong. By then it was too late. Crossbowmen trained for range were no match up close. Watching his men fall one after another, the squad leader finally snapped and put an arrow through the hostage in my grip. Then he charged straight at me. I hurled my whistle knife, dropped 2 crossbowmen instantly, and moved to regroup with the others, pushing hard for the exit. That was when Captain Roger arrived with the main body of the Grey Dog unit. Thinking fast, I shouted across to him, I have a message from Risha. Roger stopped dead. I used the gap to break into a full run. When he realized he'd been played, Roger's rage boiled over. After them, he ordered. They chased us all the way out of the dog gate, while Finn was frantically running the numbers on where to run. I said, head for the camp. Finn led the way without hesitation. As we ran, I noticed the sun was nearly down. Time to call those things out, I thought. I drove my sword into the yellow clay bank, then kicked the dirt up in a spray toward the soldiers. Mixed in with the earth came a mass of venomous snakes. The agitated snakes went wild and tore into the soldiers, killing several on the spot. That was exactly what I needed. But I had another reason. When the blood moon rose, the chaos the snakes were causing would draw the attention of the werewolf pack. And sure enough, below me, the werewolves were prowling the ground hunting for humans. From my elevated position, I waved Therese and Finn around to the side to get clear. Then I turned and stood my ground facing the soldiers bearing down on me. Seeing the split, Roger shouted, they've broken apart. After them. Now I had my back to the cliff, and below was the hunting werewolf pack. Get them fighting each other and I'd have my way out. To provoke them, to strip away their reason, I let a surge of killing intent break free. It didn't just catch Roger's attention, this also caught the attention of the werewolves on the ground. Right on cue, Roger ordered his soldiers to kill me. The instant the command left his mouth, the werewolf pack erupted out of the ground, the pack leader at the front. I felt the shift behind me, and on instinct I twisted to the side, narrowly dodging the pack leader's full force punch. Then I stood still and watched the two sides tear into each other. On the other side, the fleeing two heard the howling erupt and looked back. They found me standing alone in the middle of the enemy, calmly slipping through attacks coming from every direction. It was only possible because I had spread all 5 senses wide, reaching past where my eyes could see. Split-second decisions were everything. One mistake and I would die. Though, as things stood, that wouldn't stick. Then I heard Roger issue another order: form up. The Grey Dogs were elite. Once they locked into formation, the werewolves wouldn't stand a chance. If I wanted my plan to hold, the brawl had to keep going. Because in one of the earlier loops, I had stumbled onto something. During a fierce exchange with Roger, one of his soldiers had jeered at me. "You idiot. You're picking a fight with helmet never off, Roger." At the time, I'd had no idea why he never took it off. Curiosity got the better of me, and I flicked it off with my sword. Underneath was a completely bald head. I had looked him dead in the eyes and said sincerely, "There's no shame in being bald, Roger." He had killed me shortly after, consumed by fury and humiliation. The memory surfaced, and I immediately shouted, "Roger, take the helmet off. Show everyone that barren wasteland up there." Roger's jaw clenched and he forced himself to stay calm. "Don't let him get to you." But I wasn't done. I slowly ran a hand through my thick black hair, then fixed him with a deliberate stare. That was the last straw. Roger ripped his blade free and came at me, spitting promises of a slow death. We collided head-on. I absorbed his full force blow, then aimed my sword at his helmet, trying to flick it off. He jerked backward out of reach. I was already swinging for the kill, but something moved faster than my sword: the pack leader's claws. What hit the ground wasn't just the helmet. Roger's bald head went with it. I looked at the massive werewolf pack leader in front of me, so it had been waiting for the finishing blow all along. Clever thing, but it wasn't finished. It spun around to go for a sneak attack, which I sidestepped cleanly. I tried to track it, but it had already melted back into the pack, then flickered past behind me like a ghost. But I was no longer the same fighter. I could feel its killing intent the moment it moved. When it came in from behind with its claws, I spun and met it with my blade. Caught, it dropped the pretense and came at me head-on. I raised my sword, and in the moment it swung its fist, I cut the arm off. Then I drove a follow-up thrust into its torso. The string of losses unhinged it. It roared and charged blind. I ducked under the swing and drove my sword through its body. The moment I brought down the pack leader, Finn and Therese came sprinting up from the perimeter. "Get out now!" I turned and ran. The soldiers behind me tried to give chase, but the werewolves were already on them and wouldn't let go. In the end, all 3 of us broke free from the chaos. As we ran, Finn asked, "How did you know the werewolves were coming?" I said, "Lucky guess." Therese asked, "How did you know the Grey Dog commander's name?" I had even less of an answer for that. Since there was no way to explain, I might as well just push through to the end, so I stopped and turned to them. "There's one more thing we have to do. Take the wall. Defeat Risha." Now, as they watched me scale the city wall with practiced fluid speed, the recon squad leader Finn was left far behind, a puzzled look on her face. I reached the top first, crouched at the edge and watched Risha's position. Same as every loop, she never changed her position. I held up a fist to signal Finn and Therese and said under my breath, "Enemy ahead. I'm going in first." Then I drew my blade and charged at Risha. Risha spotted me instantly. She directed vines to lock around both my hands and sent me flying several meters. I cut the vines cleanly and landed. Risha tilted her head, puzzled. "How did you get through?" "My children were supposed to be out there." I said, "They are probably busy playing with the Grey Dogs right now. Looks like you didn't train them very well." That landed. Risha's expression darkened, and the vines came surging at me. I pulled back and ducked under the strike, then called on what I had worked out across dozens of loops. Let the vines as thick as spears slide off. Cut down the ones thin enough to crack like whips. I was hitting my stride when a squad of archers appeared behind me. They were about to open fire when Therese and Finn cut them off. To keep them from interfering with my fight, the 2 of them took up position as my rear guard. Back at the front, Risha had completely lost her patience. Her vines weren't landing a single hit. She changed her approach, directing the vine tips to condense and fire off as sharp, arrow-like projectiles. That was exactly when I wanted to try out something new. I surged forward, slicing through each projectile cleanly. With the vines stripped away, Risha's unguarded body was right in front of me. I shot my hand out and went for the kill with the concealed edge. I had only used part of the magical items from the underground hole to buy the sword. The rest I had packed into the pouch on my wrist. The magical item I released hit Risha square in the chest. On impact, it erupted in a light as blinding as daylight. Risha screamed, hands flying to her eyes. I closed the distance and drove my sword through her. The magical item split in 2 and fell away. Risha collapsed. Under the blood moon, petals scattered through the air. After all the loops it had taken, I had finally cleared this wall. Behind me, Finn and Therese had just finished off the last archer. They told me to move, head for the border city now. We slipped inside. Following Finn's lead, we reached the last known location of Kat. The room was in shambles. Blood covered the floor. Finn said quietly, "I think we can confirm Kat is dead." "This whole operation was a trap set by Asbin from the start," I said. "Kat's intelligence. It was probably fabricated from day one just to lure us in." The moment I finished speaking, a patrol passed just outside, apparently searching for us. We pressed ourselves into hiding and avoided being spotted. Therese said, "They're on high alert. Is there any way to draw their attention away?" I suggested starting a fire, use it to pull their focus, and slip out in the confusion. Elsewhere in one of the rooms, a subordinate was delivering a report to a finely dressed young man. He listened as the subordinate described how the layered trap had been dismantled piece by piece, and how the enemy had escaped the border city. The man, Abneil, Asbin's prodigy strategist, tapped the windowsill lightly with his fingers. He had planned to use this as an opportunity to eliminate the enemy's spies and scouts before the war formally began. The plan had had failed, but he didn't look troubled. He murmured softly, "That's all right, I have plenty of other ways." He walked slowly toward the door and said to his subordinate, "Let's go. We have the next plan to prepare." On our side, we made our way back to the border city by small boat. Finn and Therese looked exhausted. I was still sharp and full of energy and cheerfully invited Therese to spar again once we were off the boat. Therese refused in outright fury, because I had already pushed him through more than 10 rounds on the way back. The boat reached the dock. At the city gate we found a bald man on his knees, pleading with the gate guards. I recognized him immediately, Kilbin. The moment he saw me, he came rushing over. Crace was in trouble, he said, and there was more, a piece of bad news on top of it. The frogman had appeared. My expression went cold. So Prolock had come. Through Kilbin's account, I know about what had happened 3 days earlier at the Kilbin Guild headquarters. Crace had just finished calculating the resources needed for the upcoming campaign. When Kilbin came in to report that the inn owner had spotted someone suspected to be an Asmon spy, Crace sent him to confirm it, and if the suspicion checked out, to bring the person in quietly. The Kilbin Guild had rebranded itself as the Night Watch, taking responsibility for the back alley order that the border garrison didn't have the reach to cover. The shift had done them good. The guild's reputation had improved, and collecting protection fees had become easier. The residents had more or less become Crace's eyes and ears, and the flow of information had grown considerably. Kept up, the influence would only expand. At this rate, they could have a grip on the entire back alleys within half a year to a year. It was at that moment that a cloaked figure beat down the doorman and forced his way inside. Crace saw the blue-tinted skin beneath the hood and the reddened eyes, and the name slipped out of him, Prolock. Knowing he'd been identified, Prolock dropped the act and pulled back his hood. Crace looked at his trembling men on the floor and thought, he hasn't killed anyone yet. There's still room to talk. He swallowed his nerves, put on his warmest smile and invited the frogman to sit down. Prolock stared at him for a moment, then he grinned. "How do you know who I am?" Crace smiled back. "That doesn't matter. Have you eaten?" Prolock let out a low laugh. "You are interesting." Then, without warning, he punched Kilbin in the head, followed it with an uppercut to Crace's jaw, and grabbed him by the collar. His eyes were flat with contempt. Humans only listen once they've had a beating. Blood at the corner of his mouth, Crace kept smiling. "What would you like to know?" Prolock asked where the former guildmaster had gone. Crace answered plainly, "He's dead, the border standing army handled it." But when Prolock asked for the name of the killer, Crace paused. Then, with the performance of someone reluctantly giving someone up, he said, "It was a soldier, goes by Ragnar." Prolock's expression darkened. He ran his tongue slowly across the corner of his mouth, then told Kilbin to bring Ragnar to him. When Kilbin hesitated, Crace called out clearly, "Go Kilbin, bring our real guildmaster here." Kilbin caught the code immediately, and set off to find whoever Crace actually meant. But when he arrived at the border city, the entire independent unit had been deployed to the forward force. Fortunately, he ran into me. Listening to Kilbin's account, I thought, Crace keeps his head under pressure. Ragnar is the laziest man in the unit, just waking him up is a mission on its own. What Crace was telling Kilbin was to go find anyone capable of killing Prolock. What I couldn't figure out was, that group of lunatics only answered to me. How had they ended up being reassigned? Once Kilbin confirmed that Crace was still alive and in one piece, a thought settled in, I'm not the same person I was. But what about Prolock? He had put me on the ground without trying last time. Could I beat him now? To put it plainly, I wanted to find out. I wanted to test myself against him. So I told Kilbin, go back and tell Prolock. Ragnar, me, will come find him tomorrow. Then I turned and walked away. My first order of business after returning was to report to my superior. They asked if I'd join the forward force immediately. I said the journey had taken its toll, and I'd be ready in 2 days. Knowing I might die against Prolock and need to loop back, I wanted my body in peak condition first. So when I got back to the guard post, I let myself sleep properly for once. I woke up, ate a full meal, and ran through my regular training. Once that was done, I went over my gear. The whistle knives I'd used in the last fight had been left behind. I only had 2 on me now. That was when the little leopard padded over and let out a soft sound. I scratched its fluffy head, assuming it was bored, and decided to bring it along to the meeting. On the other side, Prolock sat eating earthworms as he muttered to himself. He said he'd come today. He'd better keep his word. Crace walked in carrying a bowl of earthworms. Please, try these first. Fresh as they get. I think you'll find them to your taste. Prolock was satisfied enough with the service to remark, you know how to treat a guest? I'm starting to think it'd be a waste to kill you. Crace laughed along on the outside. Inside, his thought was a single desperate cry, whoever it is, please hurry. I'm running out of time here. Back at my end as I walked down the corridor toward the door at the far end, I calmly drew my whistle knife. Prolock, still leisurely eating an apple, seemed to sense something. He suddenly fixed his eyes on the door. The next moment, I kicked it open. Crace looked up, startled, then went pale with horror. Wait, why is it you? You're the weakest one in the squad. I ignored him. I had one thing in mind, a real fight with Prolock. When my knife came at him, he vaulted off the desk and was clear before the blade arrived, landing in a smooth crouch on top of it. He jumped again, dodging the next slash, then spun 360 degrees around to my back and put distance between us. The fight was on. Our weapons clashed and the two forces ground hard against each other, evenly matched by the look of it. Crace watched with his mouth open. Is this really our squad leader? How is he holding his own against Prolock? After the first exchange, I understood Prolock's strength in full. Against raw force like that, trying to meet it head-on was a losing game. One misstep and bones would break. So when the frogman came again, I used the fluid redirection of the soft sword style to let the force slide off. I had one objective in this fight, the heart, Prolock's only real vulnerability. But I had to land it in one strike, enough to stop his regeneration cold. And yet just as my sword tip neared his heart, he drove a kick into me. I hit the wall hard. Crace's chest tightened, thought he took a direct hit. If he loses consciousness like last time. Prolock walked toward me, voice low. You aimed for my heart? And in his own mind, we Procloaks are called talent appraisers. We have eyes that see through a person's potential. But this one I genuinely cannot read. His talent should have hit its ceiling long ago. How is he still producing strength beyond that limit? Then I planted my sword tip into the floor, and used it to push myself upright. Looks like I can take a kick from Prolock now, I said. Prolock came in fast. Then I'll kill you right here. No matter how he came at me, I kept angling for the heart. When he flashed to my front, I snapped my head down to duck a blade, then cut his left arm off in one clean motion. I gambled he wouldn't have time to regrow it and moved to drive my sword through his heart. Even knowing exactly what I was going for, Prolock was dismissive. One arm is more than enough to end you. He brought his weapon down hard on my sword. Pain shot through my wrist and the blade spun out of my hand. Weaponless, I had nowhere to go. Facing the blade swinging toward my face, something in me went still. A quiet resignation. But the blade stopped, centimeters from my face. Why, I thought. Why pull back at the last second? What I didn't know was that in that moment, Prolock had felt it. A dense, powerful surge of cursed energy. He knew exactly what it was coming from. The beast behind me, radiating it as a warning. Kill this man and his own life would be in danger. He wanted nothing more than to finish off a human who had broken past the ceiling of his own talent. But after a moment's war with himself, the will to survive won out over the desire to kill. He put his weapon away and walked toward the door. On his way out, he said, "Remember, my name is Melrin. Next time, I will take your life." As Melrin left, Crace finally exhaled. I looked down at my swollen wrist, the damage from absorbing Melrin's final blow. I closed my hand quietly into a fist. 3 loops. 3 more loops today, and I'd win. Out on the street, I was still turning over the question of why Melrin had stopped. Then my eyes dropped to the little leopard walking beside me. "Was that you, Esther?" I asked. Just then, I ran into the first company commander coming the other way. He'd apparently been looking for me for a while. The moment he saw me, his eyes went to the bandage on my wrist. I told him I'd had a run-in with some thugs. He didn't press it. "The direct company commander is requesting you for the campaign," he said. I blinked. The elf captain? At that same moment, the elf captain was standing high above the battlefield, watching the field below. Taking in the extraordinary things the independent unit members were doing, she thought quietly, now I understand why they're called lunatics. Down on the field, Rem was cutting through enemies like lightning, keeping count out loud. When he hit 3, he slung his great axe over his shoulder, turned his back on the enemy still rushing at him, and strolled back toward camp, muttering, "Daily quota's done." On the other side, Ragnar walked into friendly lines carrying a severed head, yawning, tossed it to a passing soldier and said, "Going to sleep, don't wake me." The soldier looked at the head, recognized it as an enemy commander's, and dropped it in fright. As for Odin, he picked up a loudly cursing enemy soldier with one hand, smiled pleasantly, and said, "You could use some lessons in manners." Then he snapped the man's arm without effort. The enemy's shriek was enough to make our soldiers flinch, and Jackson simply played with his opponents, weaving endlessly through their attacks without ever hitting back. And when each attempt failed, he fixed them with a look of quiet, total contempt. One of them found it so humiliating that he eventually dropped to his knees and begged Jackson to hit him. Watching all 4 of them, the elf captain was at a complete loss for words. Back in the command tent, Marcus was genuinely surprised that the elf captain had managed to bring that group out at all. She recounted what had happened before the deployment. That day, she had gone to the guard post and told the independent unit members they needed to fill in for the squad leader. Andrew immediately understood what that meant. They were being asked to deploy. Rem turned to her with open irritation. "You pulled our squad leader out without asking us. Why are we the ones filling the gap?" The elf captain didn't answer. Instead, she asked, "A squad member who defies orders, the squad leader answers for that. Are you planning to cause trouble for Ankrid?" That landed. Rem stood and said quietly, 3 a day, that's the limit. Recalling all of it now, the elf captain thought to herself, we should all be grateful that those lunatics went to such lengths. Marcus spoke up, "Our unit is running the Vanguard campaign. This battle is going to have a significant impact on the main force. Asbin is still goading us." The elf captain said, "But they've been sending skilled fighters. We haven't won a single duel. The defeats are piling up and some of the soldiers are starting to crack." Marcus said, "Let it go on any longer and morale will collapse. All we need is to send someone who can actually win. If those lunatics could handle it, all the better." But the elf captain said getting them onto the field in the first place was already a challenge. Marcus asked if there was any reliable way to control them. The elf captain slowly rose to her feet. "Understood. I'll go and bring their squad leader here." After she left, Marcus sat with his thoughts. Asbin didn't used to play these kinds of games. Recently there had been word of a young tactical genius arriving in their ranks. Was this his doing? Elsewhere, Andrew made his way back into camp with heavy steps. His face was covered in bruises. His left eye had swollen nearly shut. Andrew advised him to take a break from sparring with Rem for a while. Andrew shook his head. Bearing the brunt of Rem's bloodlust was a responsibility he'd taken on himself. "And even though it feels like I'm about to die every single time, I can feel myself getting stronger." Behind him, Mag, his own eye equally swollen, muttered, "Hate to admit it, but it's not completely useless." Just then they saw a soldier walk up to Rem and start shouting, "I don't care if you're the independent unit or the lunatic squad. Take this seriously. Does everyone not see people out there fighting for their lives? You think this is a place to fool around?" Andrew broke into a cold sweat. Is this man trying to get himself killed? He stepped quickly in front of Rem and said with measured firmness, "The independent unit answers to our direct commanding officer." The soldier jabbed a finger at him and kept going. "So that makes it fine to stand around doing nothing? Worthless, the lot of you." The moment the words landed, Andrew felt Rem rise to his feet behind him and felt the pressure of a physical force. To keep the soldier from getting hurt, Andrew immediately challenged him to a duel. That stopped Rem. Andrew let himself be grabbed by the collar and dragged off, the soldier still ranting. Rem watched them go and let out a long, slow breath. He said, "Boring." Then he turned and walked back into the tent. A single thought settled in his mind. There was nothing for him here. Maybe it was time to walk away from this rotten outfit. Inside the tent, the others were quiet, each caught in their own thoughts. Ragnar, who spent most of his time sleeping without a care, lay awake now, quietly worried about the squad leader. Odin went through his daily prayers, turning over a question. Maybe it was time to go back. Jackson remained as unreadable as ever, but somewhere underneath, the idea of leaving had taken root. All four of them arrived at the same thought at once. If the squad leader wasn't back by the end of today, they were leaving. At that same moment, I arrived outside the tent at a relaxed pace. The elf captain saw me and said, "Back to the unit, dear fiancé." I walked inside. Quietly I said, "I'm back." Rem had barely started to say squad leader. Andrew came crashing through the entrance at a full sprint, threw his arms around my legs and broke into loud heaving sobs. "Why did you take so long to come back? You have no idea what I went through." Rem let out a short laugh. He grabbed Andrew by the head and pulled him back. "What are you doing getting there before me?" And as the sun dipped below the horizon, all my companions gathered around me, the joy on their faces entirely their own. In the evening, I said to my squad members, "You should follow the orders from above." Rem lazily replied, "Depends on my mood." Then he slowly rose to his feet, fixed me with a dark, unreadable gaze and said, "Have you gotten any stronger?" Before I could answer, Ragnar slammed his sword into the ground with a sharp thud and said quietly, "Let's spar." Krace, lying on his bed, muttered, "Can't you see the captain's wrist is injured?" But Ragnar and Rem weren't listening at all, already bickering over who would spar with me first. Odin stepped between them with a cheerful smile and said, "Let's calm down." Then immediately cut in line himself and said, "It's been a while since our last spar. I need to loosen up these stiff muscles first." I said, "Stop causing a scene." Krace thought I was finally about to take charge. His eyes actually lit up, but my next words caught him off guard. "I'll spar with each of you, one at a time." Even as Krace insisted that I was injured, I told him my wrist could still move. Only Jackson came over to check on the wound. He had me unwrap the bandage so he could apply ointment. As I unwound it, I thought, I can't put full force behind it, but I should still be able to swing a sword. The reason I insisted on sparring was to show them how far I'd come. Once my wound was taken care of, we all headed outside the tent together. Rem was the first to spar with me. As his axe swung toward my face, I quickly brought my sword up to block. Feeling a force completely unlike anything before, Rem thought, something's different. The movement was instinctive, unhesitating, the kind of confidence only someone who had reached a new level could show. Witnessing my transformation, Rem grew more and more excited and said, "Yes, show me more." And then we threw ourselves back into the fight. Jackson, watching from the sidelines, marveled. It's only been a week since we were separated, and his strength, which had been stagnant for so long, has changed this much. Odin said calmly, "My patience is running thin." Ragnar was thinking the same thing inside. "Hurry up and get off the field, you savage." All three fixed Rem with hungry predatory stares. Sensing the sharp gazes boring into his back, Rem thought to himself, they're dying of envy. And honestly, how could they not be, watching a scene like this? After the sparring session back inside the tent, Jackson asked me where my wrist injury had come from. I told him it was nothing serious. I'd had a run-in with Prolock before. Andrew's heart sank at those words. That's a very big deal. Once he heard the full story, Rem scoffed and complained that I couldn't even beat a measly frog and ended up injuring myself in the process. Odin asked whether the mission had gone smoothly. I told him the enemy had set a trap. Grey dog troops, werewolves, and a mage, all lying in ambush. Andrew felt a chill run through him at that and thought, that's strange. I've also put my life on the line against those same lunatics. So why is the gap between me and the captain still impossible to close? Late that night, I lay awake, turning over the evening sparring in my mind. I could clearly tell that my squad members had been holding back because of my injured wrist. I wanted to recover as fast as possible, so I could fight at full strength. I was also curious how much my current level could push their abilities further. Then Rem suddenly spoke up, "Don't let yourself lose to the likes of Prolock again." Ragnar followed, "You still have a lot to learn." Odin added, "Training is the only answer." Jackson said last, "I can still see your weaknesses." I said, "One more match and I'd have won." Rem told me I was overconfident. When he finished speaking, silence fell. No one said another word, and the tent went quiet. I drifted off to sleep in that warm, easy atmosphere. But then Rem opened his mouth again. "Once your wrist heals, let's have a proper match." The moment those words left his mouth, the floodgates opened and the other three all chimed in. I replied calmly, "Sure, we'll see when I'm better." With that, I tried to fall back asleep, but Rem's grating voice filled the tent for the third time, to begin with, Prolock of all people. He sat up and animatedly gestured through how he would have blocked the frogman's attack, loudly declaring that he was going to train me into a frog hunter. Odin and Ragnar sat up too, announcing they were going to put together a whole new training plan for me. Only Jackson lay perfectly still and said softly, "We shouldn't let our guard down." At that point, I stopped engaging and turned the question back on them. "Aren't you going to sleep?" This time, everyone finally settled down for good. Because of all the interruptions the night before, I had stayed up far too late. In the morning, I slept well into the day before finally getting up. When I stepped outside the tent, only Krace was there. He told me that all able-bodied fighters had already deployed to the front lines, and that only the supply unit and a small protective detail remained to hold the rear position. I started my daily training on my own, but when I got to the plank, sharp pain shot through my injured wrist. I could tell the wound had gotten worse after sparring the day before. Even so, I still wanted to practice with my sword. I picked up the sword and thought, as long as I have enough wrist strength, one hand should be enough to hold it. But with my right hand injured, I decided to train with my left hand for the day. After trying it, I found that swinging the sword with my left felt completely foreign, like I had never held a blade before. An absolute mess. Starting from scratch was hard, but my overall muscle strength wasn't the problem. Squad leader Bensuji happened to see me training with the sword and couldn't help saying, "You're already injured and you're out here acting like a madman." I asked why he hadn't gone to the front. He said his squad was assigned to defend the position. Just then, I noticed that the leather cord wrapped around the sword's hilt had come loose. Bensuji helpfully took the sword from me. Watching him carefully rewrap the cord, I thought, he used to yell at me the moment he saw me, but now he's suddenly being friendly. I couldn't hold back. I asked him why he had disliked me before. He answered with a single name, Jenny. I stared at him completely blank and asked, "Who's Jenny?" Seeing that I had absolutely no memory of her, Bensuji got so furious that he shoved the sword into my chest, then turned and walked away. That was when it came back to me. The Jenny he was talking about. I quickly called after him, "I'm not interested in her." Jenny's feelings are completely one-sided. Bensuji froze at those words. It turned out that Jenny ran an herbal shop in the border garrison town. The herbs there were good, so I had been a regular customer. Somewhere along the way it seemed Jenny had developed feelings for me. Bensuji had apparently been secretly in love with Jenny all along. I continued, "Honestly, I'm more interested in the herbs than in Jenny." Bensuji knew that was the truth. The reason he had been hostile toward me was entirely because of his inner inferiority. Jenny, who had never so much as glanced in his direction, had been captivated by my face. He turned his head away and muttered under his breath, "Damn it, irritating bastard." Then he left. I let out a sigh. He really is a strange one. Back inside the tent, I noticed a leopard had been sprawled on the bed yawning this whole time. I stroked its fur and asked with some concern, "You seem really out of it today. Is something wrong?" The little leopard silently shot me a sideways glance and thought, "It's your fault. You were injured and still went off to spar. I pushed myself too hard trying to take some of your exhaustion onto myself, and now it looks like I won't be able to use magic for a while." Meanwhile, at the river near camp, two patrolling soldiers sensed something off in the water. A second later, an arrow shot up from the surface and struck one soldier in the forehead. Bensuji immediately rushed over with his men, telling everyone to hold the position and protect the supplies. I heard the commotion and burst out of the tent shouting, "Where are the enemies?" Crace told me to get back inside and not to make any rash moves. The words had barely left his mouth when Asman soldiers rose from the river in a long, even row. At their head was an old adversary I hadn't seen in days, Mickey Schuler. He slowly turned his gaze toward me and said quietly, "It seems God heard my prayers. I've been wanting to see you again for a long time, Ankrid." I said flatly, "So you still remember my name?" He gritted his teeth and said, "Thanks to you I came to see my own arrogance for what it was, and stepped into a new realm. That is why I have always wanted to finish you with my own hands." The moment the words left his mouth, he drew his sword and dropped into a stance. I handed the leopard over to Crace, then drew my sword, and met Mickey's slash head-on. The instant our blades collided, the impact was so powerful that the sword was knocked clean out of my hand. Searing pain tore through my wrist. Mickey said with quiet meaning, "You're injured. What terrible luck." With that, he raised his sword high and brought it down toward me. In that desperate moment, Bensuji appeared and stepped in to block the blow. He charged at Mickey and shouted, "Run!" I yelled urgently, "Bensuji, fall back! He's too much for you." Before I could finish, Bensuji, who had been standing in front of me, was run through the throat by Mickey's sword. His head was sent flying into the air, then it hit the ground with a heavy thud. Mickey looked on with cold contempt and said, "Just a small fry." Then the little leopard roared and lunged at him. Crace chased after it, trying to pull it back. I had lost the ability to speak. Inside I was screaming no, but the tragedy struck again. The leopard was run through with a single sword thrust. I rushed forward immediately, trying to reach Crace, who had already gotten close to Mickey, but it was too late. Crace had already been run through. Mickey flashed to my side in an instant and said softly, "If your wrist hadn't been injured, I would have shown you just how much stronger I've become." The next moment, blood sprayed through the air. He killed me with a single stroke. And the loop for today. When I woke up, I sat motionless on the bed, silently berating myself I had no way to fight back. All because of an injured wrist. That was all it took to make me completely useless. The squad members had all been sent to the battlefield, no one could help, and the Grey Dog troops would strike the position before noon. So I had to use every moment before that to practice swordsmanship with my left hand. I trained until I was completely exhausted before stopping. At that point, Bensuji came over and asked, "Are you using your left hand because your right is injured?" Being that obsessed with training is its own kind of sickness. "Are you actually getting it down?" I said quietly, "Whether I can or not, I have to." And inside, I made a silent vow I will protect them. With that thought, I got ahead of the moment and said to Bensuji, "I'm sorry about the Jenny situation." He was just about to say it was fine, but my attempt at comfort managed to sting him instead. "Keep your chin up. There are plenty of women in this world who don't care about looks." When I faced Mickey head-on again, I felt with painful clarity just how vast the gap between us truly was. I couldn't hold my own even with both hands on the sword, let alone my left hand alone, and my more refined swordsmanship was controlled by him. Trapped inside his offensive rhythm, unable to withstand the pressure of his blade, my neck was grazed open. I staggered and fell. Mickey noticed something was wrong and asked quietly, "What happened to your right hand?" I lay on the ground struggling to breathe and said, "It's injured." He leveled his blade at me and said, "What terrible luck. I've been waiting to face you at full strength." Then he drove his sword into my chest, ending that loop. In the second loop, I continued training my left hand on the sword. The grip, the swing, the footwork, the techniques I had learned from my instructor back in the village as a child, the sword style I had learned from Ragnar, even the fundamentals of other sword styles. I wouldn't get lost from not knowing. After all, this was a road I had already walked once with my right hand. And so I trained with total absorption and died beneath Mickey's sword again and again. After 40 repetitions, I was picking things up quickly, but the arc of my swings was still unstable. I couldn't help wondering, where's the problem? Is it just unfamiliarity? Then Bensuji appeared and called out to me, "Ankrid, do you want to spar with me?" His behavior caught me off guard. This had never happened in any of the previous loops, but the opportunity was too good to pass up. I accepted on the spot. When our blades met, I felt the considerable strength behind his strikes, but I still won the spar. I asked out of curiosity, "Why did you suddenly suggest sparring?" Bensuji answered, "I don't really know. Watching you just made my blood start to boil." I said, "I've been focusing almost entirely on the basics." Bensuji said, "That's exactly why. Watching you takes me back to the very first time I ever picked up a sword. That desperate hunger to get stronger, and the pure excitement of just swinging a blade. But your swordsmanship is a little strange. It's like a dead sword." I fell into thought at those words. What does that mean? That the strikes have no power? Then something clicked in my mind and the answer came to me. It was because I had trained with my right hand, and now I was trying to make my left follow the same track. But the feel of the left hand was completely different from the right, so I had to find the track that fit the left hand. With that realization, I swung hard, a single powerful strike that left a clean, straight arc through the air. Then I was surprised to find that the sound of the swing and the cross-section of the cut straw dummy were both noticeably different from before. I couldn't help letting a small smile cross my face. I looked over at Bensuji and said, "Thank you. Because of you, I think I finally understand how to train my left hand with the sword." After that, I decided to awaken the feel of my left hand. The most basic step was to change how I went about everyday things. Eating, getting dressed, even training. All of it leading with my left hand first. And to push that feeling even further toward its limit, I could also make use of the concealed edge technique I had learned from Therese. After repeating this 10 more times, when I beat Bensuji again, he still gave the same answer as before, so I kept going, repeating over and over. Then, on the 112th try, I used the concealed edge, and knocked the sword clean out of Bensuji's hand. Like I had in the previous dozens of loops, I waited for his answer. But this time, his answer was completely different. "When this war is over and we get back, I'm going to train harder than ever." I blinked. He hadn't said dead sword this time. I said, "Good, work hard at it. Maybe someday Jenny will fall for you too." Bensuji exploded. "You son of a bitch," and then launched into what could only be described as several thousand words of unbroken cursing. I found his reaction genuinely entertaining, and inside I thought, I have to give him the chance to confess to Jenny so I can't die here. After that, I made my way to the riverbank and waited quietly for the gray dog troops to arrive. As I waited, I turned a question over in my mind. What is talent? It can't be defined in a single sentence. Whether it's the skill of mastering one's body, or the ability to forget everything and focus with total concentration, all of it is part of what talent means. But in this moment, I was experiencing for the first time in my own flesh and blood what talent truly was. Day after day, I had trained my left hand, piling one day onto the next, and in 100 days, I brought my left hand to the level it had taken my right hand 30 years to reach. And so, on the day of the 112th loop, I was going to break through this wall. After exchanging a brief, proper greeting with him, I gripped my sword and charged straight at him. He hadn't seen it coming and barely managed to catch the blow. Through more than 100 repetitions, the gains in my left hand's strength had made up for the disadvantage of my injured right. At that moment, the hand Mickey held his sword with was trembling faintly. But then I did something that no one could have expected. I grabbed his thumb. With a crack, I snapped it, staring at his thumb hanging limp and useless. Mickey slammed a furious knee into my stomach. I quickly stepped back, putting distance between us. Mickey let his sword clatter to the ground. He was shaking with rage as he said, "How dare you use such a cowardly trick?" And inside I thought quietly, in loop after loop, he always wanted to beat me through swordsmanship. I would have liked to honor that wish, but I want to see tomorrow. It seems the left hand can't grow any further from here. Matching Mickey's Schuler blade for blade was interesting, but it was time to end this. After taking a moment to collect himself, Mickey said in a low voice, "It seems this is your last desperate gambit, but it won't work." He picked up his sword with his left hand. His gaze sharpened like a blade as he said, "Because I can fight with both hands." I raised my sword in kind and said, "As of today, so can I." I knew clearly in that moment, this was a fight to take him down and step into tomorrow. But the way to beat him wasn't through swordsmanship. This was a technique too brutal to use except as a last resort. It was the secret art of Valen mercenary swordsmanship, what they called brawling. With that thought fixed in my mind, I hurled my sword at him with everything I had. He managed to block it with his own blade, but the force behind it still rocked him. I seized the moment and closed the distance, grabbing him by the collar. I swung my fist, but he stepped back and dodged. Then he came at me again with his sword. I went straight into a throw instead, driving him hard into the ground. I planted my knee on his left hand, his sword hand, pinning it down so he couldn't swing. Then I raised my left hand high and drove my fist into his face. Just as I was about to throw a second punch, Mickey bent his legs and shoved them straight into my body, sending me flying back several meters. He came at me again with his sword, yelling, "Get serious, pick up your sword and fight me like a man." With that, he swung directly at my body. But I wasn't hurt, the armor absorbed the blow. I fixed him with a cold stare and said, "I am completely serious." Then I used the concealed edge and raked it across his face. In an instant, blood flew. His left eye was destroyed. He let out a wrenching scream. At the same time, he put his strength into his sword arm and shattered my shoulder armor, the blade finding my shoulder underneath. I felt the sharp sting in my shoulder clearly and thought, first my wrist, now my shoulder. The longer this drags on, the worse off I'll be. I had to finish this while he had just lost an eye. With that, I quickly hurled the blade in my hand at him. Mickey scrambled to raise his sword to block, but with his right eye damaged he couldn't judge the knife's trajectory accurately, and it buried itself into the back of his hand. I closed the distance in that instant, then threw him to the ground again. I locked both arms around one of his legs, and wrenched it hard. The leg snapped clean. He cried out in pain. He raised his right hand to try to hit me, but I slipped out of the way. I wrapped his right leg up as well, and broke that one too. The pain was beyond anything Mickey could endure, and he began to scream. Those screams immediately drew the attention of the soldiers under his command, and in his agony Mickey found his mind drifting back through his life. He had once been a man paralyzed by boredom, but that man had come back changed from the last war. He never left the training ground, grinding his swordsmanship without rest. When talent met relentless effort, his swordsmanship finally began to shine. Yet here, now, without ever truly showing what his sword could do, he had been beaten by a man named Ankrid. He lay crumpled on the ground and whispered in disbelief, how could I lose to someone like this? He forced his eyes to find me, standing with my back to him, and the sword beside my feet that was his. He called out faintly, "Ankrid." I slowly turned to look at him, a flicker of something unreadable crossing my eyes. Inside I felt it deeply, that wall of despair, and the rival who had taught me everything were now beginning at last to crumble. Mickey dragged himself forward with great effort and said, "This isn't the fight I wanted. I only wanted one real match against you." I crouched down and picked up his sword. I said quietly, "This is a battlefield." When the word settled, I drove the blade into him and ran it through his throat. When the Grey Dog troops saw me kill their squad leader, they rushed forward. Fortunately, Bensuji arrived in time with his archers and cut them all down. With that, every last enemy was eliminated, and that wall had completely fallen. I looked down at Mickey's body and said to him silently, "It was a good fight, Mickey Schuler. I'll use you as a stepping stone to climb higher." After the battle was over, Grace and I returned to the tent, where he wrapped my wounds. Bensuji came by to check on me. He tossed my sword over and said, "This is yours, isn't it? Take better care of it. Don't just leave it lying on the ground." But Grace noticed a second sword on the bed and said, "Didn't you already bring your sword back?" I said, "That's Mickey Schuler's sword." Grace immediately leaned in for a closer look and said, "When the light catches it, you can just make out a faint blue tint. It looks like it was forged from iron produced in Dep. That's a famous iron ore region in Asben. It should be worth considerably more than the Valeri steel or Novar soft iron you typically use, if you're thinking of selling it." I ignored that last part entirely and stood up to ask Bensuji whether he was heading to the front lines. He nodded and asked if I was coming too. After all, I couldn't leave the squad behind for too long. With that, I tucked Mickey's sword into my belt. Grace looked puzzled and said, "Are you switching swords?" Bensuji also chimed in, "Wouldn't you be better off sticking with the one you're used to?" I took my own sword back from Grace and said, "Who says I can only pick one?" I belted both swords at my waist and said, "I can use both." Elsewhere, on the march to the front lines, Rem was humming to himself and thinking, "Our captain should be about ready to step into the next stage. Someone like him. If I taught him the secret technique born from the beast's heart, that would be something interesting to see." Odin was deep in his own calculations. Muscle conditioning is complete. Now it's the joints. Next, I adjust the posture, building a body step by step that can't be taken down by joint locks or striking blows. Doing it all at once would be too much for the captain to handle. Then he suddenly stopped walking, and Rem, coming up behind him, walked right into him. That was more than enough to set off Rem's hair-trigger temper. They were about to come to blows right then and there. But Ragnar came and broke up the scuffle before it started. His mind was also working through something. Training to keep the sword close to the body isn't only about making the swordsmanship fluid. It's about making the tip of the blade move as freely as any part of one's own body. Jackson had been working through his own plan. If he could make some small corrections to the captain's footwork, that would be ideal. Not the kind of silent, ghost-like movement of an assassin, but if he could achieve maximum efficiency through minimum motion, it would make a real difference. Just then, the elf captain riding at the head of the column sensed something wrong. She raised her fist to signal the troops to stop. Sure enough, several Asben soldiers emerged from the tree line nearby. The soldier at the front called out, "I am Raoul. Is there anyone willing to face me in an honorable duel?" The elf captain thought tiredly, demoralizing the enemy through one-on-one challenges is one of Asben's dirty tricks. Our side had been losing these exchanges, and the mood had grown uneasy. Ignoring them would let the enemy control the narrative, so it was better to accept. If we could win the duel decisively, we could turn the atmosphere around. She recalled Krace's advice, "Use those lunatics. The squad leader is back, they're in a good mood. They should be manageable." So she turned to Rem and said, "Rem, do you want to handle this?" Seeing Rem step forward, Raoul sneered, Seriously? You sent out a savage? Those words were all it took to ignite Rem's fighting spirit, and he accepted without hesitation. As Rem walked slowly toward him, Raoul kept up the taunting, "Would you look at that? They've scraped the bottom of the barrel and sent us a barbarian." Before he could say another word, Rem took his head off. As blood sprayed from Raoul's neck, the other two soldiers let out terrified shrieks. Rem broke into wild, unhinged laughter and roared, "Who's next?" Watching the scene, the soldiers on our side couldn't help but murmur, "That's impressive, all right." The elf captain thought just as I expected, put a soldier with real ability on the field and morale soars. But when she heard that the enemy soldiers were surrendering and Rem was still beating them, her expression changed. The brutality of what followed was too much even for the soldiers on our own side. The elf captain ordered Rem to stop. He paid no attention whatsoever and kept slamming his axe into the soldier's body. The soldier's companion wept and screamed, "You monster! I said we're surrendering!" A bloodthirsty gleam passed through Rem's eyes and he smiled, "I can't hear you." Then he finished the soldier off with one final swing of his axe. At that, the soldiers on our side were gripped with genuine fear, many of them saying they didn't want to fight alongside Rem. The elf captain immediately regretted making the call. She thought to herself, "It seems there really is only one person who can keep a lunatic like this in line. That person is you." That night, I finally caught up with the forward column and reunited with my squad. When word got out that I was going to fight alongside them, every one of them tried to convince me to rest and recover first. The elf captain stepped into the tent at just the right moment and said, "It seems my fiancé has a habit of running his body into the ground." With that, she tossed me a small slender vial and said, "Elf's medicine. There isn't enough gold in the world to buy this." I said, puzzled, "Why are you giving something this valuable to me?" The elf captain replied calmly, "When I think about it, we're officially engaged. And yet we've never exchanged a single token of proof. Consider this a small engagement gift." She told me to get some proper rest, then left. After she was gone, I kept turning it over in my mind. What exactly does she find interesting about calling me his fiancé? The minds of elves really are impossible to read. In the days after arriving at the front, Asbin did nothing but send small, sporadic infiltrators. They didn't launch any real offensive. That gave me time to let my wounds heal. At that point, Odin came over to where I was training and asked how my recovery was coming along. I said, "Thanks to the elf's medicine, it's coming along pretty well." Odin smoothly followed up, "In that case, shall we have a little match? What do you say?" I said, "By all means." But within just a few exchanges, he had me flat on the ground. After checking over my injuries, Odin said slowly, "After the right wrist comes the shoulder and bruises all over the body. Pushing yourself to full strength is clearly still too much. That said, if battle breaks out, you're going to fight no matter what, aren't you?" When I confirmed it, he fell into a brief silence. Then he looked out at the heavy mist rolling through the mountains. Slowly, a golden light began to radiate from all around him. I recognized it clearly. That was divine power. Odin gently placed a hand on my back. In that instant, a magic circle appeared beneath him, and a column of golden light surged from it toward the sky. He held it until every last thread of divine power had poured into my body, and only then did he stop. I turned to say something, but he spoke first. "Don't say a word, and don't breathe a word of this to anyone. Swear it on the name of the Lord." I watched him quietly for a long moment, something shifting unexpectedly inside me. Then I gave him my word. Odin said, "The mist over the river is also the Lord's blessing." And with that, he turned and walked toward the river. Inside, my feelings were complicated. Priests who truly follow the gods testify that divine power is a miracle capable of healing the wounded. Odin had always prayed to God, but he had never once used divine power, so no one knew whether he was truly a priest. When I heard him murmur, "Lord, forgive me," I could only wonder whether using divine power was forbidden by some vow. It felt to me like he had taken a risk on my behalf, using a power he had promised himself he would never touch. With that in mind, I thanked him, then turned and walked away. And Odin thought quietly to himself, if it were discovered that I had used divine power, the Inquisitors would come. I left the order carrying many chains. I made a vow to myself to never show even a trace of divine power, even if it meant enduring pain like a spike through the heart. And yet I couldn't simply stand by. He continued his prayer, "Lord, you are always there, and yet you never answer me." But ever since I met the squad leader, I have decided to follow the voice of my own heart. After lunch, Krace asked if he should help me apply the ointment. I told him I would handle it myself. To keep Odin's secret, I couldn't let anyone see that the wounds had already closed. I asked when the war would begin. Krace said both sides were still testing each other out. The main corps under Commander Marcus has been tasked with cutting off the flanking vanguard, while our unit holds position here. The last war already broke the rules by bringing in curse users and attendants. By now they've likely committed their Night Order's strength as well, and are preparing for all-out war. Rem said, "We ought to be over there. This is nothing but one-on-one dueling. It's just small skirmishes, no fun." Krace analyzed, "That's only temporary. A standoff built purely on psychological warfare won't last long." After that, we moved up to the front lines. At that point, the enemy sent out 3 soldiers, who immediately began hurling insults. Krace understood at once, this was a war of public opinion. Without the kind of overwhelming force a knight could bring, the 2 sides were evenly matched, which was why Asbin had chosen to strike psychologically first, although could simply shoot those 3 soldiers down with arrows. But striking first while morale was already low would only result in a loss for us. All they needed was one moment, something to shift the mood. Then, as the enemy soldiers taunted our men by shouting that they were all virgins, the color drained from our side's faces. I suddenly nudged Andrew and said calmly, "Easy, Andrew. The chance to let that anger loose will come." Andrew blinked at me, confused, and said, "What?" I said evenly and with apparent sincerity, "It's fine. There's nothing shameful about being a virgin. Mag beside me fought desperately to hold back a laugh. Others nearby burst out laughing altogether. Only the bewildered Andrew had absolutely no idea what was happening and said, "What is wrong with all of you? Why are you doing this to me?" The rumor that Andrew is a virgin spread like wildfire in an instant. The soldiers erupted into laughter, and the mood shifted from grim to buoyant in an instant. I looked genuinely puzzled at everyone's reaction. I had been completely sincere in trying to comfort Andrew. Watching it all unfold, Crace thought quietly, did the squad leader sense the mood on instinct and act on it? He really is a remarkable person. With that thought, Crace asked if I would walk out to the center of the field and say a few words to the enemy. He had a plan in mind, so he leaned close and whispered it in my ear. And then, following Crace's plan, I walked quietly toward the middle of the space between both sides. Crace thought with quiet confidence, if it's the squad leader, the one with a devil's tongue, he'll be able to turn the tide of this battlefield. The wave of change the squad leader brings will spread like ripples across water, and very soon, it will open the